Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
2 years ago I moved to the UK for university, as I always wanted to go there and get away from my parents as the situation at home was beginning to become too bad for me. In first year at uni, I moved into a student accommodation and met some really great people. It was a good year without meeting my boyfriend, who I'm still with, and just enjoying my time away from my family and discovering what independence really meant. Anyhow, as second year came by, I decided with some friends to move into a house rented by student accommodations, but at least we had our own house and weren't restricted as much with noise and parties as living in a small shared flat like in first year. Note, I had a ground floor room and my window gave into a very small backyard in which I would go smoke every day as I am a smoker, and in which there would be a very thin wooden door giving into the other side of the street where you would put your bins and broken chairs, blah blah. The door could only be closed and locked from inside the backyard, but since it was an old door we had to attach some strings to keep it closed for good. I had neighbors on each side of the house, so we were surrounded by families and some other student accommodations. The neighbors on the right of us were 5 boys who looked way over the age of being in university. They were strange, so to say. I met one of them outside of our house one day because of a police intervention due to one of his flatmates attacking him and the others with a kitchen knife and burning their kitchen down. I heard some screams, and so I went outside with my flatmates and saw one of them having cuts everywhere on his arm and a wound on his head inflicted by a kitchen knife. Me and my flatmates didn't know what to do, so we offered him our help to clean himself and gave him an old t-shirt to change out of his clothes. We then saw the guy who hurt these flatmates being escorted out by the police and into a van and driven off to be arrested. I don't know anything more about the story, the police didn't really tell us anything else. Anyway, the guy who we helped was quite weird. He said a lot of BS and kept trying to grab me and flirt with me, but we just wanted to make sure he was okay as we didn't know him. Then after some time had passed, I would go to uni and come back home and see him quite often in the street and just never said a word to him again. But one day he came up to me in the street while I went to the corner shop and started talking to me weirdly, and I didn't feel comfortable at all with that for some reason, so I just didn't respond to him. He then just said, "Oh, that's okay, I'll just wait in front of your house then and we can talk further." No need to say I was creeped out and just thought he was joking. So I bought my drink at the shop and headed back to my street, and as I turned into the street where my house was, I saw him with his flatmate sitting on my doorstep and waiting for me. So I went back to the corner shop and called my only guy flatmate to ask him to open the door and tell the guys to go away, but obviously he wasn't home and no one else was there either. So I literally just waited it out until they left about an hour later, and then sprinted back home and locked the front door. Note, my front door had a glass panel on it where you would be able to kind of make out who was standing in front of it. After this already pretty scary encounter, I just tried to avoid the guy and mostly succeeded for a while. But then one day, as I went smoking in the backyard, I noticed that the wooden door, which is always closed, was open, and the strings that were put there to keep it closed were cut off. For whatever reason, I didn't think anything of it and just closed the door again and put a new string on it, thinking it was one of my flatmates who took the bins out and just didn't tie it back. The weird neighbors would very often scream and yell and fight in their house, and it would take me and my flatmates up in the middle of the night, but we kinda just got used to it after a while. But one evening, my boyfriend slept over like he usually did, and he, who usually never ever wakes up because of a noise, woke up in the middle of the night because of a bang and some whispering. I was sound asleep, so he very silently woke me up, and we both just waited in the dark and listened for any other noises. Suddenly, we heard the wooden door just bang, just shot open, and some footsteps next to my window. I always had my window open because it would get really warm inside, so we both just froze. And then we heard the door leading to the backyard get shaken softly as if they were trying to get inside, and then they stopped. Luckily, we had the curtains closed so they couldn't see us, but we were ready to get dressed and get out of the room and lock them in if they came in from the window. Then we just heard my window move and get more opened, and one of the guys saying something in a different language that we didn't understand and started hearing them trying to get in. My boyfriend and I just shot up out of bed, took my phone, and put clothes on and ran out of the room and out of the house. So I then called my flatmates and told them to lock themselves in their rooms, and then the police, who luckily came in less than 5 minutes as the headquarters were a couple of streets down from us. I don't remember anything after the police came. I think me and my boyfriend were in shock. They ended up catching one guy, the other fled and was later found a few streets up smoking weed. The police told us that they were inside of their house house and found a lot of meth and heroin, and that they were carrying a massive kitchen knife with them. I was so confused as I've never done anything to offend or do anything wrong to my neighbors, so the idea of them breaking in with whatever knows what intentions with a kitchen knife terrorized me and my boyfriend. The two guys ended up being arrested, and one of them was put in prison for 2 years for carrying a weapon with intention to harm. I never heard anything else from the police, and I moved back home a few months later. I was 17 when this story happened 3 years ago now. I was working at an old pizza shop right on the edge of my town. For context, the town I was in was an affluent, suburban town surrounded by a bypass which loops around the town. Around my town is some farmland and main roads, where all of the blue-collar workers moved to after the town was gentrified 10 to 15 years back. The pizza shop was around 20 years and was very catered to these same blue-collar workers. It's around 9 p.m. and a call comes in for 2 pizzas and a 2-liter of soda. I'm the only driver in, so I have to take the delivery out. It's about a 10-minute drive to get to the location. There I have to drive up a long gravel driveway that took about 5 minutes to get up. My car really couldn't handle the gravel and how rough it was. Arriving at the place, I see a nice house and 2 barns plotted across the land, with wheat 5 to 6 feet tall surrounding the whole property. Being at this place when I felt truly all alone really started to make my anxiety flare. I decided to call the number on the order because I have no idea where this guy wants me to go and drop off his food. After about another 5 minutes of absolute silence, the man picks up. He had a very deep and raspy voice, like he's been a career smoker, which didn't do anything to help me feel better. I was told to meet him at his truck at the far barn on his property. I am now properly scared as my mind races of all of the worst possible things that could happen to me. I pull myself together and muster further into this guy's property. I see the man's truck as I round one of those cylinder storage units where I see his F-150 and him inside. Instead of getting out, I call him and ask him how we should do the transaction. In that same deep voice, he instructs me to get out of my car and to put all the food onto his truck bed. Since he paid with his credit card already, I thought this would have been over in 10 seconds. I do what he tells me to do and walk over to the passenger window so that he can sign his receipt. The man looks to be around his mid-40s, heavy set, with a scraggly black beard and a trucker hat. My mind was already racing on being kidnapped or murdered, so I really didn't feel safe around this guy. I ask him if he has a pen on him because I forgot to bring one. I was pretty bad at my job and he did not have any cash on him. He stares at me with these cold eyes and points into the back of his truck, saying to me, "If you ask me for a tip, I'm going to be sticking this tip down your throat," where he has a double-barrel shotgun just in the back of his car. I'm frozen in fear as I'm registering that this man has just threatened to kill me. The only thing I can muster out is okay, and I get back into my car and I get out of that farm. I was going so fast that I screwed up my car from my car bouncing around on that gravel path. I go 80 all the way back to the pizza parlor where I tell my coworkers what happened. None of my coworkers took me seriously and just thought I was playing this up for a joke. I go home and forget about it pretty quickly, but a year later I'm working the lunch shift and the same man calls in and orders a pizza. Now at this point I am refusing to take this order. The pizza place I was working at wasn't doing well business wise, so it's on its last legs already, so management forced me into going anyways. It was only 1 to 2 p.m. on a Sunday, so at least my fear of the dark would be covered. I get there and the man is waiting for me at his actual house. He recognized me and out of all things started apologizing to me for what he said. He was excusing it, saying that he just started going through a divorce and was struggling with his emotions. I just wanted the whole thing to be over with, and he gave me $60 for what happened. When I was 6 years old, I attended the elementary school which is located in our small town. My way to and from school was basically just 500 meters of main road before turning into the street where I lived. At the time, we're talking about the late 90s here. All the parents in the town were extremely adamant on telling their kids not to trust or follow strangers. Never get into anyone's car, even if they say they know your parents and are friends. The reason why: there was a murder 3 years back in the same town. A girl not even 6 years old was found dead in a field. The strange thing about it is, nobody knows how exactly she was taken, no signs of forced entry or anything, which implies somebody lured her somewhere without her suspecting a thing. The case still hasn't been solved more than 20 years later, so our parents were very afraid that their kid was going to be next, because kids can be really stupid and you can't watch them 24/7. Now onto what almost happened to me. I was walking home from elementary school. About halfway home, at the shadiest and mostly covered by trees and bushes area, a car pulled up next to me. A blonde, about 30-ish year old woman was the driver. She told me she could drive me home. She claimed to be going in that direction anyway, which was unclear to me at the time, essentially BS because once the road ends near my house, there is nothing but empty fields. Kid-like as I was not suspicious and was like, oh no, it's not that far, I can walk. Then she started becoming more insistent. The whole, oh come on, it is fine, nothing to worry about, and you can relax instead of walking thing. The alarm bells only started ringing when she said she knew my mother. They are friends and supposedly she was asked by her to drive me home. Thank God for my parents repeatedly talking about the tricks that people use to lure you in. I started being creeped out, continued to walk, but she kept driving beside me. Now the real weird part in hindsight was her next attempt to get me into the car. She started saying that I was obviously afraid, and cool children are not afraid of such things. If you want to be cool, you should just relax. Honestly, I did not fully realize the full extent of the situation. I just felt uncomfortable and wanted to get out of this conversation, so I just started sprinting the rest of my way back to my house. Once I got home, I stayed right next to the door and kept looking out of the window for a few minutes. And guess who drove by and basically checked out the house? That creepy woman. The road was a dead-end road, and only after 3 more minutes the car came back the same way. It took years until I realized what kind of bullet I dodged there. All I was thinking was, my parents told me not to do this. I didn't know why or what that woman wanted. The drill of hearing over and over again not to believe strangers or get into their car kicked in. Moral of the story is, even if your kids are too stupid or young, like I was, to comprehend such things, the rules of not following strangers and the fact that strangers will lie to you for evil intentions must be drilled into your child's head like watching both ways when crossing the road. Last night, my 25-year-old husband woke me up at around 11:50 to tell me that someone has been knocking on our door and ringing our apartment doorbell for about 10 minutes on and off. He woke me so I could possibly ID the person. Once I looked out our upstairs apartment window, I saw the man walking to his car in our apartment parking lot, across the street from our unit. He was wearing blue jeans and a gray t-shirt. He was a medium build, possibly a 30-year-old blonde man. He wasn't covering his face or anything, but the thing is, he was carrying what looked like resistance bands or rope. He sat in his car for around 3 minutes while I was on the phone with dispatch. Then he came back to our door and knocked hard for another few minutes. Dispatch advised me that the police were on their way and they hung up. I started videoing the vehicle. I read out the tag number and make and model and just watched as he put his car in park in reverse over and over again. Out of seemingly nowhere, he backed out of the parking lot and started rushing away, but not before the officer arrived and pulled him over. My downstairs neighbor knocked on my door and told me that he had been peering into her little children's windows and was pounding on her door as well. She said that her husband had left only 1 minute before he started knocking at her door. She said he saw her children through the window and that's why he continued knocking. Our doors are right next to one another, so he probably didn't know what door he wanted opened. He was watching us as well through our upstairs windows, so I turned all the lights out and shut the blinds while I called dispatch. The police never contacted us for a statement. I've reached out to dispatch about an update and I'm waiting to see if any action was taken. We're keeping our eyes peeled to see if he's been following us. I'm replacing my porch light bulbs with motion detectors and putting bars in our window and door tracks. My neighbor and our families are panicked, to say the least. He was outside for about 25 to 30 minutes. Update: I am trained in firearm usage and now live in a state where I can open carry and the background check is really quick. We are going this weekend to get a firearm. My husband will be taking some classes as he came from somewhere where owning a gun is illegal, so he's never handled one. I am still waiting on a call from the responding officer. I have his badge number and name, so if they don't reach out to me today or tonight, he might work third shift. I will call the substation. If they didn't do anything, I will go ahead and make a suspicious person's case for the paper trail. We had no odd encounters last night. However, while I was looking at the video I took, I remember that car. I was walking my dog at 8 p.m. a week ago from him to pee, and this car was driving really slowly through the parking lot and parked a few spots down from where I was letting my dog sniff. They just sat there with the car running. When I tell you my ears started ringing and I got an awful feeling, I'm not joking. I turned around and went home, didn't give my dog the chance to pee, and shut every door and window. I think this man has been stalking out our apartment building, me and my neighbors, doors, and I think he wanted to get in where those children are. I'll update more when I have new information. Update 2. It's been a week since the incident. I called the dispatch today because I never received a follow-up from the responding officer. A sergeant from the PD called me back to give me more information. He said that they pulled over the man, ran him to make sure that there were no warrants, and asked him what he was doing. He told the officer that he was meeting up with an acquaintance. The officer let him go with no further questions. I about lost my mind. The sergeant I spoke to today stated that he should have looked into it more. It was obviously an attempt at burglary with whatever knows what intentions. The responding officer is supposed to call me tonight when he gets on duty. I'm livid, honestly. Zero due diligence for this case, but there's not even a case. No case number, just a documented police contact. I'll give more info when I have it. Final update. The officer finally called me. Here's how the conversation went. I answered groggily. It was well past midnight. Hello, miss. I was told you have some questions about an incident a few nights ago. Yes, about Thursday. I wanted to know what the man told you he was doing. You know, he was looking at windows and carrying potential restraints. I'm not sure if that was relayed to you. I stopped him, ran his tags, and he told me that he was meeting up with a guy from a dating app. He seemed forthcoming and open with his motive for being there. Meeting up with wait, he was meeting up with someone by looking in windows, knocking on 2 different doors for 20 minutes. I was shocked and still not fully awake. Like I said, he seemed forthcoming and honest with me. With resistance bands, like workout bands, he had lots of belongings in his car, so he just probably had them in there. Right, but bringing them to a hookup, knocking on multiple doors, he saw the little girls through the window. He waited until my neighbor's husband left until knocking. That's on tape, officer. I checked in with the apartment management after the incident. Well, I'm familiar with this individual, and I've been doing drive-thrus of your complex to make sure he doesn't come back. I haven't seen anything. If you don't have any more questions, I'll let you go, ma'am. Doesn't make sense to me, but thank you, goodbye, and I hung up. I don't have much to say. I just feel so icky about that conversation. Nothing new has come of the situation. I haven't seen the man or the car. My mind is blown at the lack of follow-up or due diligence. I live in a suburb. It's not a busy one either. The PD has a small jurisdiction. Guess I'll have to protect myself. I was 24 at the time, working in a nightclub about a 10-minute walk from my home. I used to close on Tuesday nights slightly earlier than most nights, as it was generally our slowest night of the week, closing around 12 a.m. instead of keeping customers until 2:30 a.m. Usually I'd be the only one left as I start cutting staff as the night went on, and since it was a slower day of the week, we didn't have security on. About 2 months in of regularly closing at 12 a.m., I was walking home. I used to bring bulkier clothes to hide my figure when leaving alone, as I've been followed and chased multiple times before, and we'd often get men waiting after hours for us girls to come out, knowing we'd eventually come out after closing and didn't want to attract attention to myself. I also used to walk home as I didn't have a car and had a few terrifying experiences with Uber drivers not actually driving me home, turning out to be fake cab/Uber drivers or harassing me until I pretended to show interest or give them some way of contacting me, to which Uber would just give me a $5 coupon for the trouble, but that's a story for another time. The bar was located along a main road that was home to the majority of the other bars and restaurants in the city downtown. Often at this time I'd maybe see a handful of people, but the streets were generally empty. I'm walking and notice a parked car about a block away. The driver noticed me and U-turns around to be on the same side of the street as me. Now he's catcalling me and trying to get me to come into his car. I don't engage and keep walking. We're maybe a block or two past the initial spot I saw him, and he's been slowly driving alongside the sidewalk. I'd crossed the street but didn't want to get near his car. He keeps this up until about halfway mark when he takes off in his car, and I'm just relieved he's gone. He then comes blasting back down the road. Now my walk is turned into a light jog, which then turns me into full-on running. I'm running behind closed bars and businesses, now trying to find a back route to get home without him seeing where I live. At one point, I'm running through bushes and mud. No matter what street I end up on, his car is waiting for me. Eventually, I run right in front of his car while it's parked on the side street beside my place, or run into my house through the back entrance. The back entrance is obscured by plenty of trees and car, and the surrounding houses are multiple unit homes, so I was confident he didn't see what door I got in through. Fast forward to the following Tuesday, and I'm walking home. Guess whose car is parked at the halfway mark? This went on for the next 4 Tuesdays, except he started parking on the street street in front of my house, until I begged my manager to take me off closing that specific shift. The last time I saw him, one of the apartment buildings along the way had a few cop cars and cops standing around the entrance, and I stayed with them, which led them to drive off for the night. A week passes and I'm no longer on that shift. A coworker of mine sends me a news article via text. I open it and see that the man who's been following me was arrested for doing this to multiple girls in the city along the street my work was on and that I lived on. He got caught because he'd followed a university student up to her house and wouldn't drive away. She called the cops and he was still there by the time they came to arrest him. He got out the next day, I believe, and was arrested a few more times and was put on restrictions. Couldn't be out of his parents' house between certain hours unaccompanied by either parent before he was deported. I've also heard he didn't actually get deported, but I moved away shortly after and didn't keep up with the news on him. It was a Wednesday night in the summer. I was off work, my husband was out of town, and our son was staying at his grandma's for the night. I was home alone with my dogs, an 80-pound Aussie mix and my 80-pound German Shepherd / Pitbull mix. I always have issues sleeping when I'm home alone, so I tend to just binge watch TV in the living room until I can't keep my eyes open anymore. This particular night, I remembered that the trash pickup comes the next day. I decided to turn on Game of Thrones for a bit, then I would take the trash out. All of a sudden, I realized it's 1:30 a.m. and I still haven't taken the trash out to the curb. My house has two solid iron gates, one in the front and one to the side door / backyard. Lighting on our street or anywhere in our neighborhood isn't that great, but it's a quiet neighborhood with a lot of families and you rarely hear about crime here. I looked out the window by habit before I took the trash out and saw who I thought was my neighbor, smoking a cigarette outside of his gate across the street looking directly at me. For context, this is a normal occurrence. My neighbor across the street hides smoking cigarettes from his wife, so he typically does it late at night in front of his gate. I get off of work late, so I usually see him and we wave, say hi, chat a little, then I go inside and he makes the joke, "You didn't see me smoking," if my wife asks. So unbothered by seeing the guy, I go outside, grab my trash cans, open my squeaky iron gate and take them out to the curb. I did not have my glasses on at the time, so as usual I waved and said hello. However, the guy, who I thought was my neighbor, threw down the cigarette and quickly walked off down the street. It took a minute for me to register that he was not my neighbor. I was a little creeped out because he was clearly staring into my window from the opposite sidewalk, but also maybe it was a guy taking a night walk. Not unusual in our neighborhood, and just stopped for a cigarette. I thought I probably weirded him out as much as he weirded me out, went back inside and laid on the couch with my dogs to keep watching Game of Thrones. At some point, I fell asleep and I woke up hearing my gate squeak and my German Shepherd mix growling. He's extremely protective of our family at home, but he's also the kind of dog you can take anywhere because he's so friendly in public. My Aussie mix is more passive, but his sheer size and scary bark tends to deter people. He's very friendly though. I quickly got up and pulled back my curtain. My gate was still shut and I didn't see anything. My dog, however, continued to growl at my front door. I looked out another window, which had a better view of my front yard and porch. I didn't see anything. Eventually, my dog settled back down with my other dog, but I was still uneasy. I ended up watching TV again because I couldn't go back to sleep. About an hour later, I definitely heard my gate squeak. We are the only ones with a heavy cast iron gate and the noise it makes is so distinct. So I look out the curtain while my dogs are continuing to softly growl. My gate is halfway open but I don't see anyone. At this point I'm panicking. In my panic I couldn't find my phone. I grabbed my wooden baseball bat out of our room, crouched down, and started going through the couch cushions to get my phone. My dogs are oddly still quietly growling instead of barking, so I assumed no one was there. The minute I find my phone, my front door handle starts shaking. I run to the side door to let my German Shepherd mix out. I know he'll protect me and he can jump the 6-foot back gate. My Aussie mix, going crazy, busts out of one of our door side lights. I heard the guy say, "Oh crap," and immediately I let out my German Shepherd mix. I jumped up to look out the window, saw my dog latch on the guy's hand. The guy starts screaming and takes off down the street, my dog chasing him. I then become terrified he'll hurt my dog, so I run out with my baseball bat, screaming my dog's name over and over. The next thing I know, my dog is prancing down the street back to me, happy with blood all over his face. I called the police. They took another hour or so to show up and didn't seem to take me too seriously. They said they'd call local hospitals, but I never heard back. I called my husband bawling and he got on the next flight home. I stayed at his mom's for a few days, too terrified to go home. I did buy my dogs giant ribeyes for being so good in saving me. I don't know what that guy wanted, but since then I've been trained in firearms and self-defense. Quick backstory, I have had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never aggressive or sent me proper threats, so stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear. His stalking behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts, such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times, but they weren't able to, or really tried to be honest, catch or identify him. About 3 weeks ago, I discovered the AITA subreddit and thought that people might want to know about what it's like to have a stalker. Since I barely use any social media aside from Reddit and have no personally identifying information here, I didn't think he'd ever see it. One person even asked, does he know you're putting him on blast on Reddit? And I answered, maybe. Maybe it would make him angry, maybe he'd be turned on. Don't know, don't care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it and he did not like it. Like I said, he was never aggressive and never came close to me. The closest I know of was when he sent me a picture of myself, unlocking my apartment door, taken from the corner of the steps above. I'm thinking that he might have hid a camera there instead of being there to take the photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he did. I don't know how he got wind of the AITA post I made, but he did. The next week was quiet, no letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then he left me letters with printed out questions and my answers from the AITA post. He also left me with a long hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue I had posted on the AITA subreddit. His letters were never hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later, I got a gift, but this time he didn't leave it in my mailbox or at my car like he usually did. No, this time he left it inside the apartment building right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment but opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was taped shut. As I'm typing it out now, I realized that wasn't a good idea at all and could have ended badly for me. But luckily he didn't send me anything deadly or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, the kind you use to tape off walls when painting, nothing you could use to restrain someone, a TV remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of band-aids with a few used ones, not actually, just made to look that way according to the police, and a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago and my boyfriend was next to me but cut out of the photo. The frame was shattered and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame, and they were also intentionally put inside the crumbled newspaper that was stuffed in there to keep it all in place. I called the police right away and gave it to them. They were more concerned this time. Finally, thanks. It told me they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave me any letters or gifts for about another week and a half. But 8 days ago it started again. I found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me, how I haven't been appreciating his effort, how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago I left my apartment in the morning and heard a crunch sound as I stepped onto my doormat. He put broken glass under it in the night. I went off to work because I was in a hurry and was just going to make my boyfriend call the police, but then I found my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, lights smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on. "It's time soon, miss," my last name. I went back inside and called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just pissed at this point, which I made very clear. All of this, the letters, gifts, photos, even the glass under my doormat, are just really annoying and inconvenient, but my car was useless to me now and the threat scared me even more. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police said they took the footage as evidence, even though the dash cam footage wasn't of high quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before, but they said it's not enough, and they told me they'll look into it further and promised to send more patrol cars again. Then it was quiet for 2 more days. Until 2 days ago, someone rang the doorbell at just after 4 AM. My boyfriend and I got up, but we were both hesitant, but I saw the blue lights outside, and just as I got up I heard them shouting, "This is the police, please open the door." They told us they were called by one of our downstairs neighbors, who came home from his night shift after about an hour earlier, and heard someone else entering the building after them before their door fell shut. My neighbors know of my situation, and I've asked them to make sure they don't let strangers into the building. This neighbor then went into his own apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they had turned back on. They did. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor are only me and my boyfriend, and a single mom with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 AM, so he called the police. They came and found my stalker 1/2 floor floor above me on the stairs. He should have been able to see the cop car since there was a little window up there and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He's finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years and one very vigilant and caring neighbor, but he's finally done. He's facing several charges and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now I finally got some peace. When I was a kid, my mom worked as a teacher and she was very close to a coworker of hers who had a son around my age and of whom I, as well, was very close. When my mom or her friend would head out for the night, the other would take care of both of us kids, and basically, it meant I spent half of my time over there and my friend spent half of his time at my house, which was perfect and fun for us. We lived in different cities, but since that kind of system had been going on pretty much forever since, I grew up knowing my friend's city just as well as mine. His mom was well aware of that, so that being said, whenever we were going on a walk in their area, she let us wander around because she knew we'd always find our way back to her. My mom though was more cautious and always kept an eye on us, as she'd walk behind us to make sure she always was able to see us. I just wish her friend would have done the same. One day, I had to be around 6 or 7, we were going on a walk with my friend Marcus and his mom Katie. It was a very sunny day and I was wearing a dress with embroidered flowers and I had my blonde long hair down. During that walk, Katie was walking ahead of us and I was chatting and just fooling around with Marcus when he suddenly remembered something urgent to tell his mom, as urgent as something can be for an 8-year-old boy. He ran up to her and left me strolling behind for a couple of minutes, just as it already had happened 100 times prior. That time though, we were circling around a big camping site and we walked by the white vans and camping cars. One of those vans had its back doors open and there was a man, probably in his mid-40s, smoking a cigarette and leaning on the vehicle. He locked eyes with me as I was approaching, then saw that Katie and Marcus weren't paying much attention to me as they were already a couple of meters ahead. Then he proceeded to pull me by my arm close to him, and so I found myself with my body touching his. So weirded out that I didn't even say a word, although I knew Katie would have heard me if I called for help. He leaned toward me as he was obviously much taller than I was, muttering something I didn't get, and he winked at me and kissed me on the lips and then pulled me to the open doors of his van. At this point, if he had pushed me just a little, I would have fell in the truck. At this point, I was just too scared to even lift a finger, and even though I didn't understand everything that was going on, I knew it wasn't okay. He put his hands on the door as to close the vehicle and I felt my heart sink. At that exact moment, some other man jogged towards us, in his 40s as well, waving hello to me and saying something along the lines of, "I lost sight of you for a bit, I was so scared." He had a very friendly look on his face and was staring at me with a great insistence and with a huge reassuring smile, and the van man awkwardly laughed and yanked me out of the way of the car, slamming the door shut. I ran to Katie as I heard the van go off and just acted as if nothing had happened. To this day, I never told that story to anyone, not to Katie or Marcus, not to my mom, nobody. I am 22 years old today. Last year, I was staying in a university hall for my final year. It's a private building, so not connected to the university, and out in the city near the main town, we have a car park but nobody really uses it because we are poor students and it costs money to park there, so mine was one of the only 2 or 3 cars at a given time. The car park isn't well lit and it's to the side of the building, so you have to walk for about 2 or 3 minutes to get into the main door. I was sitting in my car one evening after getting back from the gym, just scrolling on my phone because my seat was warm and it was dark and raining outside, so I couldn't be bothered to get up yet. I was reading an article when suddenly someone started knocking on my window, which was really odd. It was a man dressed all in black, and he started telling me how his friend had seen me through the window and thought I was really attractive, so could he have my number? I responded no, that's a bit odd and I don't feel comfortable with it. He continued to be insistent for a while, practically begging me to get out and give them my number or any social media details, telling me I should come over and speak to his friend, who was, weirdly, stood at the other side of the car park, furthest away from the building. I kept saying no and scrolling on my phone to show that I wasn't interested. He finally relented and walked away. I text one of my friends to ask if he'd come and get me and walk with me to the building. As I was waiting, this man returned, but now with his hood up, and he started banging loudly on my window, saying that I was being rude, ungrateful, calling me all kinds of names. I kept staring at my phone and pretending I couldn't hear him. He then started trying my door handle. Thankfully, I locked my car after the first encounter, and then began violently pushing into my car when it didn't work. I still kept kept ignoring him and texted for my friend to probably bring some other friends with him. My friend was taking a long time to read my message, and I was terrified but for some reason didn't think to call the police, probably because I was scared of things escalating. The guy at my window had calmed down after a few minutes and walked off, saying that he'd leave me alone now. However, I watched him out of the corner of my eye join up with his friend and then maybe 3 or 4 other men. They walked so they were out of sight, but I could see their shadows lingering as they kind of circled around my car and moved towards the building but staying in the dark. They lingered there for a while until luckily another car came, which was obviously full of students going to a party due to the loud music and singing going on inside. This group of men left as they saw these people arrive, and I latched onto them and was able to walk with them as they entered the building. When I got home, my friend finally responded. He said that he'd actually heard about these guys before. Apparently they'd followed another girl into the building and into the lift a couple of days prior, then stood in the lift making really gross comments to her. She had to run to her door and lock it, where they then stood outside knocking on the door and whispering for her to open it. We were able to report this to the building, who, to their credit, then hired a permanent set of security staff. We also got the CCTV footage of both incidents and were able to pass this on to the police. My mom's dog, Punky, was a very sweet-loving dog. She was an ESA dog but trained to be a service dog for PTSD before she lost her leg. I had never seen her get aggressive with anyone in the entire 12 years she lived. She never growled or nipped anyone, and she had no sense of smell, so she loved all animals and people. A real gentle giant among our little terriers at 60 pounds. What I'm getting at here was that her barking at something and being aggressive was so wildly uncharacteristic that I only saw it once. I, 11 years old, was at home with my siblings, 2 years old and 6 years old. My then stepdad is at work and my mom ran up to the gas station to grab a pack of cigarettes. It was only a mile or 2 away from us. For reference, we lived in a 2-bedroom trailer in the middle of the woods, on a dead-end road at the time, and you had to really make an effort to get down our road, find our house, navigate down our rickety driveway, and find the door. I'm sitting at the computer, having a grand time watching YouTube videos, when all of a sudden all of our dogs, about 2 Boston Terriers and 1 Chihuahua, perk up, bark a few times, and start investigating down the hall. My siblings were napping in the bedroom at the end of the hall at the time, so I figured they just stirred and scared the dogs. But then Punky sits up suddenly, stands up on the couch, and puffs her chest out. Her ears are perked up, her fur standing on end, her tail straight up, and then she barks. Loudly, I mean, the bark booms through the living room and echoes around, and all of a sudden she lunges off of the couch and goes tearing down the hallway. I'm already on edge because I don't think I've ever heard her bark, ever. She's a Basenji mix, so her bark is more of a baying sound, but this was a big, loud, alert bark. I stand up and go to look down the hallway, ready to fight off what I'm assuming is a shadow monster in the hallway based on how the dogs are acting. But then I hear it. Knock, knock, knock. We didn't get visitors because of how weird our house was location-wise, so my 11-year-old mind had no clue what to do here. The only people who showed up here were family, and they didn't knock, so I slowly walked towards the door. The knock drew the attention of the dogs, and they came running back down the hallway, all except for Punky, and I felt better with our 3 yappy dogs in the room with me, even if they were all the size of New York City sewer rats. I opened the door just a bit, and standing on our porch is the sketchiest man I think I've ever seen. I can still picture him perfectly. He was a really thin, taller man with dark hair and a sunken face, bags under his eyes, and this half-managed hair, sort of like he just gave it a quick brush and then figured it was good enough. Everything about him seemed just a little too thin, a little too shallow, and his clothes were all off too. They were nice, but fake nice, you know? Like a clean, newer looking t-shirt and new jeans. But he had what looked like a suit jacket on. All his clothes were dark too, despite the fact that it was summer in Texas, and the weather was definitely into the hundreds that day. He also had this plain, unlabeled bottle in his hand. It looked like the label had been covered up and taped over. I stare up at him in confusion because I definitely don't know this man, and I asked him what he wants. He smiles at me in this way that's way too fake, like this exaggerated and forced grin, and he spoke in the same voice retail workers do. Hey there kiddo, I'm trying to sell this here carpet cleaner, and he shakes the bottle at me. Mind if I come in to show you how good it works? Alarms are going off in my head because he just seems so off. Looking back with an adult perspective, the fact that he didn't ask if my parents were home is unnerving, because he probably knew they weren't and that's why he was here in the first place. I should have told him to get off our property, that I'd have to go get my mom, something except what I did say, but I didn't. Instead, I just shook my head and said, no, we don't have carpet. Well, it works on other things, and he took a big step towards the door and shook the bottle at me. I start to freak out and think to close the door, but the thing is, our front door didn't even lock. Small town, hard to access home, we never needed a lock, so that's basically useless. I'm sure there's something very wrong about to happen, and I'm terrified as I think about what to do in the few seconds I think I have before it does happen, when all of a sudden I hear it. Punky had crept up from the hallway, lowered towards the ground with her teeth bared and snarling like she was feral. She had slobber just dripping from her mouth, her ears were down and she was ready to pounce. The guy hears it too, and as I look towards Punky, she tries to lunge past me, and I just barely catch her with my leg as she tries her hardest to duck past me and attack this guy. He freaks out and runs off the porch without another word, booking it down the driveway as I let Punky out along with the rest of our dogs and they start chasing him. Our small dogs chase him down the driveway and stop about halfway, barking and jumping about, but Punky stops just on the porch and watches him with her ears perked, just staring in the distance until he disappears. I swear I saw someone jump up with him running when he got onto the road. The second he disappeared, Punky's entire body language changed and she went back to being the sweet dog I knew. No barking or growling, just laying around, mouth and throat covered in slobber still. I realized my siblings are still down the hall and run to check on them, and when I get to the bedroom, my siblings were sleeping soundly still, but the bedroom window was wide open, the curtains pushed all to one side and the items on the dresser in front of the window all shoved around. Someone had tried to climb through the window, no doubt in my mind about it. From what I can gather, the bedroom window was visible from the couch where Punky was sleeping, so I think someone was trying to climb through the window before Punky went after them and scared them off, and the man at the door was meant to distract me. They definitely didn't expect Punky, a bigger dog, because most of the time she was with my mom inside while our small dogs were the ones that saw public eye more often. I don't know what they intended to do, but after my mom got home she took all of us to my aunt's house, and on our way there we saw the men walking up someone else's driveway, men plural because we watched a second one split off to wait by the road. In 2014, I moved to England from Canada to gain work/travel experience and also to find myself. I ended up living in Essex with 3 other roommates. They were all women, all a bit older than I was. I was 24 at the time, Megan was 31, Cherry was 34, and Cassie was 38. Megan was from New York, Cherry from New Jersey, and Cassie from Poland. All 4 of us shared this 3-story flat. The back of our home was the living room and the kitchen. The back wall was complete glass that looked out into the garden, and the garden was completely fenced in. The house had an interesting dynamic to say the least. Tons of stories from that time in my life. I adored all of my roommates except for Cherry. After living with Cherry for 7 months, I was over her antics. One day I come home from work, I lock the door, make myself something to eat, and go up to bed. I brought some work home with me, so I am in my night tie with all these papers around me and my headphones on jamming out. I had headphones on because Cherry was out to dinner with work friends. That meant booze, and then soon after that a tantrum was surely to come. I just didn't want to have to listen to her crazy scream crying. I am working away, completely focused until I feel something. I look up to see a man standing over me. I don't register it right away and passively say, "Cherry's room in on the 2nd floor," and continue to work. Cherry regularly brought strange men home. He doesn't leave. Again, "Cherry's room is downstairs, he then interrupts. I am not here for Cherry. A cold chill iced my veins. My fight or flight kicked in just then. I start surveying the situation. I look him up and down. He has a bottle of Prosecco in one hand and a knife in the other. He is about 5'10", wild muddy brown hair and black eyes. He has a light blue polo shirt on and one side of his collar is popped up in a distinct Manchester accent. Once I focused in, I realized his eyes were black because his pupils were completely dilated. I was in trouble. I needed an escape plan. Unfortunately, this man was standing in between me and my bedroom door. I needed to get downstairs, but I needed for him to think it was his idea. I decided to play along. Just then he uses his knife to pop the cork. Prosecco started flowing onto my carpet. I said, "Oh no, let's clean that up. I prefer to drink out of a proper bottle anyways." He nodded, replying, "Yeah, let's go." I try to act as natural as possible. I try not to show that I am shaking all over and try to gain control of my breathing. We take the long journey down to the main floor of my flat, all 3 floors. He has the back of my night tie bunched up in one hand and I could feel the point of the knife graze my back with his other. I was trying to playfully speak with him as we walked down the stairs. I couldn't tell you what I was saying. I was most likely rambling. I couldn't hear anything over my heart beating in my ears. We get to the bottom of the stairs and there is a hallway to my left that leads to the front door. On my right, which is much closer to us, is the kitchen and living room. We make our way into the kitchen. I point to the cabinets that had the wine glasses. He said he knew where they were and started walking towards them. I now had the kitchen table in between us. It was time to run. I burst into a sprint down the hallway towards the door. My hands fumble over the lock, shaking and sweating. I swing open the door and see 2 men walking across the street. They must have been walking home from the train. There was a big train station in front of our home. I call out to them for help and suddenly I am flung onto the ground. Little pebbles piercing my skin sent sharp pains where they are jabbed. The intruder pushed me out of the way to run and escape. One of the men chased after the intruder while the others said for me to go inside while he surveyed my home and to call the police. I locked the doors and I called the police. While I am on the phone with dispatch, I manically run around the house to double check all the windows and doors. Suddenly, I hear a loud bang on my door. I inform the dispatch of the banging and she informs me that the police weren't there yet. I thought it might be one of the gentlemen who helped me. I go to look out the eye hole and it's him, the intruder. He came back. He's banging on my door screaming that I had his glasses and that he was not done with me. I absolutely freak out. The dispatcher attempts to calm me down, but I am losing my ever-loving mind. She then said, "They are pulling onto your street now. You should hear their sirens." I did. The intruder then blasts off. One officer jumps out of the passenger's side while the car is still moving and chases after him. The second officer comes into my home, interviews me, and the two gentlemen collects evidence, takes photos. The next morning I am called in to identify a man they had in custody. I pointed him out. I go into a little room and the officer pulls out an evidence bag. He asked me if the items were mine. They were my underwear and photos taken from my home. The officer informed me that the intruder had been stalking me for some time now. He estimates 3 months. He had made a nest outside our home on top of a hill that overlooked into our living room and kitchen. He is a known offender and drug dealer. He then told me how lucky I was to get out practically unharmed. Others weren't so lucky. So this happened in 2011, so the exact dialogue may have escaped my memory a bit, but the situation is something I'll never forget. Also, AIM was still pretty active during this time and so was video chatting. Think Tiny Chat. This is important for later. I was on an online dating site and was talking to this guy. I was 31 at the time and he was 28. We talked for about 6 weeks before I gave him my phone number and we took it offline to calling and texting for another couple of weeks. 2 months after our initial chat, we were texting and he told me that he was out having a few beers at a bar near my house. He asked what I was doing and asked if I wanted to come out, but I had a very long day at work and didn't feel like going to a bar. I'm also not a big drinker. I invited him over to my place, I know, after he finished at the bar and he accepted. I figured I would be okay since I do keep firearms for protection and know how to defend myself, if needed. I also had a webcam. I took a shower so I wouldn't smell like a water buffalo on a hot day. The air went out at work, put on some makeup and got dressed to wait. He then called and said he was outside of my house. I clicked record on my computer's webcam program and turned off my monitor and went to let him in. It's around 10 p.m. and he comes in and we go back to my bedroom because my living room was being remodeled. We're sitting on the bed chatting for about an hour, talking about everything under the sun. The conversation flowed. He was very handsome and so easy to be comfortable with. We got on the subject of firearms and I showed him mine. About 15 minutes later he asked for some water, so I go to the kitchen to get him a bottle. When I came back, he said he got a phone call and had to leave. After he left, I looked on my nightstand where I put the firearm down after showing him and noticed that it was gone. I looked everywhere for it, thinking I had put it down somewhere else. Nope, not there. I then played back the recording from my webcam program and sure enough, it shows him grabbing it and putting it in his hoodie. I was terrified at that point. He knew where I lived, he had my firearm, and he left his phone on my bed. Right then his phone rings and I answer it. Come to find out he's married. His wife was calling him wondering where he was. I told her everything, including the fact that he stole my firearm and I had video evidence and was calling the police on him. Next thing I know, he's banging on my door, my firearm in his hand, asking me for his phone. The conversation went like this. Him, "I need my phone, give me my phone." Me, not opening the door but yelling through the window. Take the clip out of my firearm, empty the chamber, throw the clip into the bushes. The one in the chamber across the road and put it on the ground. Him, "No, give me my phone." Me, "I'm on the phone with your wife at the moment and I have you on video stealing from me." I put his wife on speaker. Wife. A whole bunch of expletives. Him, he runs and gets in his car and then comes back. "I threw your gun in the ditch." At this point, I make him empty his pockets, take his pants off, take his hoodie off, and show me that he doesn't have my firearm on him. All the while, his wife is on the phone. I go outside and get in his car, in the driver's seat, and tell him to take me to where he threw my firearm. He proceeds to tell me that I don't know how hard it is for him, being a felon, not being allowed to own a firearm ever because of a mistake he made. The mistake, domestic violence, involving a firearm. We get up the road, he tells me that the firearm is there in the ditch. Then I realize the situation I'm in. I can get out of the car and go get it, it, leaving him to do whatever to me if he chose. I could make him go get it, taking a chance of him seriously hurting me. I took that chance since I was on his phone with his wife and my phone with 911. He retrieves my firearm, brings it back to the car, and I drive back to my house and wait on the police. I get out of the car and he gets in the driver's seat. I'm still on the phone with the police. I walk around the back of his car to get his license plate number, and he just puts his car in reverse, hits me, and takes off. They found him later that evening. He still had the clip and the one in the chamber in his pocket, so now he's enjoying some time in prison. So glad I never have to meet this person again. This takes place around 10 years ago when I was like 8 or 9. I lived in a pretty bad neighborhood in what was at the time a really rundown city. It wasn't good, but it wasn't bad at the same time, just a few bad apples in the tree. Anyways, enough background on the neighborhood, and now onto the main story. My friends and I loved to play outside. It was the only thing we could do. No one in the neighborhood could afford any sort of electronics or any sort of fun machine to play with. We loved to just run through people's yards, cutting through houses if they just so happened to leave their door open. Now looking back on it, it is probably the dumbest thing kids our age could have been doing in a neighborhood like that. This story has nothing to do with running in people's houses. Just wanted to let you know how dumb of kids we were. Well, on one fateful day, we were playing hide and seek with 4 of us hiders and 1 of us a seeker. We thought it would have been a funny idea to go to the other side of the neighborhood so that the seeker could never find us and we'd win. We like to call that part of the neighborhood the rich part because they had 2-story houses over there and a forest with a creek in it. We were just doing our usual thing, cutting through people's yards and jumping fences, when we heard the loudest scream maybe 4 to 5 houses down. After hopping off the fence that we had just jumped, we all stopped and looked around wondering where it came from. I noticed that one of our hiders weren't with us anymore. 3 of us left. "Where's Isaac?" I exclaimed. We heard the scream again. I pointed towards where the sound came from and we all jumped back over the fence we just jumped from and ran towards the scream. When we thought we got to the spot where the screaming was coming from, there was nothing there but an empty plot of land in the forest. We all started to get scared. Did Isaac get lost in the forest? Did he get taken back there? Then we heard the scream again. It was definitely Isaac. I decided to be the man of all the other 8-year-olds and go into the forest to make sure Isaac was okay. As I started my way into the trees, I did one last look at my friends and saw how horrified their faces were. I knew at that moment that I was definitely the only one that would go down into the forest. Making my way in, I could feel all the heat in my body fading and some sort of dread starting to take over. As I walked further in, it started getting darker and harder to see. I was whisper yelling my friend's name. He responded in the most shaken up voice, "Down here, be quiet." I finally got to him and asked him what happened. He told me the story of how he got tired of running and decided to take a break on the curb to catch his breath, and that instead of being out in the open and risking the chance of being caught, he decided to go into the woods and hide. He said that after like 5 minutes after he sat down, he heard talking. Nothing that he could make out, just random nonsense. He looked around to see a man in a black hoodie hiding behind a tree on the other side of the creek staring at him, but the man took off before my friend could even get up to run away. And this is where he said he started screaming at the top of his lungs and hid somewhere else in the forest, which is where both of us are now hiding. And I kid you not, as soon as he told me this, we heard a twig snap. We both look up to see the man looking for us in some of the shrubbery on the forest floor. I couldn't make out any facial expressions or anything on his face. For a matter of fact, I could see he was holding some sort of blade. I couldn't tell if it was a stick or a machete. All I knew is that we needed to run. So when he turned us back, we got up and started running. We didn't care how loud we were, we just knew that we needed to run. We got out of the forest and told all of our friends to run as fast as they could down the street. We kept running until we got to the other side of the block and we all turned around to see the street empty. No one, not a single car, and from a distance you could hear a roar, or like a very loud engine. Shortly after that initial roar, a silver 2000s Mustang with the darkest windows comes peeling around the corner faster than I've ever seen a car go, headed straight towards us. I've never had my body tighten up like that at that very moment when I knew it was the same guy from the forest. I told all of my friends to split up and run into people's yards to hide. So as we were all hiding and running through alleyways and jumping fences, you could still hear his engine. It was like he was targeting only me. I can't even tell you how far I ran. I got to the point where I didn't even think I was in my neighborhood, but still I hear his engine coming up on me. So I ran more. I was exhausted. The sun finally started to set and I could hear his engine fade, almost like he had forgotten about me or had just given up. I start making my way back home scared, checking my back every so often to make sure I wasn't being followed. Once I made it home, I went right to bed to cry myself to sleep. And for months after that, that 2000 silver Mustang would follow us, stalking every corner that we played on. We would see it at our school and the grocery store. It could have been a coincidence that our little minds are not perceiving things around us, but either way, I think he was stalking us. Nothing actually came of him following us. He never did what he did that first day, but it was still so scary seeing that car everywhere we went. I didn't know what to do or how to tell my mom, so I didn't, and still haven't. This story's for the people of this sub and my 4 other friends. Funny enough, the seeker didn't know what happened until the day after we were at school and we told him. He still doesn't believe us and says it was to go inside and have him looking for us all night. So for a bit of context, I am a college student. Without giving too many details, I am a woman on the smaller side of average female height. I currently do not have a car, so I use my bike, walking, and the bus to get around. My college has a transit service that allows you to scan in with a student boarding pass for free. Other non-students are allowed to ride the bus by paying upon entering or purchasing a ticket beforehand. I frequently ride the bus for various reasons, grocery runs, or treating myself to food. And yesterday, I had the idea of treating myself to a movie after all the exams I have been having lately. I'm an avid horror fan and knew that Terrifier 2 was in theaters, so of course I wanted to see it immediately. One of my friends told me they found it funny and really enjoyed it, which was more than enough reason to go see it. I was looking at tickets the day before yesterday and trying to decide which time slot I wanted to see the movie in. Looking back now, something in my gut told me to choose the earlier time. I wish I had listened. Another detail I want to add is that there are 2 bus sizes, a large one and a small one. The bus I rode during the incident was the smaller one. The stop where I got on the bus is the beginning of the route. Unlike every other stop, the driver usually parks the bus here for 5 minutes and gets off to use the restroom or have a quick break before continuing with the rest of the route. Upon entering the bus, I noticed only 2 other passengers, another girl about my age and an older man. The girl was in the front of the bus on the right side and the man was in the second row on the left side. I sat on the right side, several rows back. I usually read something on my phone or listened to music on the bus, so I immediately got on my phone when I sat down. Everything was okay for a little bit until I looked up and noticed the man repeatedly staring at me and looking away before staring at me again. I was immediately apprehensive but just brushed it off. He started speaking aloud out of nowhere, saying things like "beautiful baby" and "so fine" while staring at me. I was frozen out of fear and could only keep looking at my phone and trying to ignore it. This continued until I worked up the courage to say, "Sir, would you please stop staring at me?" To which he claimed he was not staring and told me I was extremely beautiful. Unsure of what to say, I just stupidly thanked him and went back to my phone. He had his body slightly turned, but when I confronted him, he faced fully forward. The driver got back on and we started moving again, so everything was calm for a bit, though I was admittedly still shaken up. This calm did not last long. Obviously, this creep couldn't contain himself and just had to voice his opinions about me out loud. He started saying similar things again, but also added some new phrases such as, "gonna make you my wife," and by far the worst one, "I'm gonna get you pregnant." I was shaking at this point and was unsure what to do. I desperately wanted to sit next to the other girl, but did not want to pass by him to sit by her. We made it to the other 2 stops before the girl got off and said sorry before leaving. My heart dropped to my stomach. The last thing I wanted was to be alone with this guy. Luckily, more people got on at the stop, a middle-aged couple and a guy about my age. In a panicked voice, I sort of shouted and asked the guy my age if he would sit with me. He was a bit confused but came to sit by me and I immediately felt relief. The stress of the situation got to me and I broke down crying. I guess the creep took this as indication to leave because he swiftly made his exit after that. The kind younger guy who sat next to me and began to comfort me. I am so grateful he chose to ride the bus that day. The bus driver noticed the commotion and called me to the front to get information in order to make a report. He told me he couldn't hear anything but that buses have video and it would hopefully pick up what the creep was saying. He told me that the same man had recently been kicked off for a similar incident and that he would be reporting this immediately. For the rest of the ride, the younger guy and I talked about things like majors and other school related stuff. I want to go into the marine biology field and he is a graduate student in mechanical engineering. I made it to the movies, it was awesome, and back home safely, but I definitely learned a lesson. My boyfriend is going to help me look into some self-defense items and he taught me a few fighting tactics. This happened several years ago. I was home alone one evening when I heard a knock at the back door. This confused me, as no one ever used that door. My husband and I lived in a fourplex at the time, and all the units had a back door at the top of a narrow staircase. These doors were a little inconvenient to access, as you'd have to go around the building and up the narrow stairs, as opposed to the wider main entrance at the front. It didn't make sense to use the back entrance, and I couldn't think of anyone who would go to that door to visit. As I approached the back door, I saw two tall men in the window, standing at the door. I did not feel safe opening the door, so I called out hello. One of the men tapped on the window. "Yes, hello, may we come in? We are with Bresnan." At the time, my husband and I had Bresnan for cable, but did not have any issues with it. I replied, "We're not having any issues with Bresnan, is there a problem?" "Ma'am," the man said, "can we come in? We're servicing the area and it's important we look at your cable." I shook my head. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, "so there's no need to stop by." "Ma'am, we are visiting every resident. Let us in so we can do our job." I noticed the man grab the doorknob and try to open the locked door. I slowly grabbed a knife from our knife block and held it at my chest. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, trying not to convey shakiness in my voice, "so you don't need to be here." The two figures appeared to shuffle and then straighten. "Ma'am, let us in. We're on a deadline and need to do our job." I glanced at the clock, gauging when my husband would arrive home from work. I gripped the knife tighter. "Ma'am," I saw him try the doorknob again. Just then, a thought came to the forefront of my mind. "I'm sorry, I can't help you. Could I please get your names and badge numbers? I can give your supervisor a call to let them know our cable is fine." I heard another shuffle and one of the men replied, "No need to, ma'am. We're sorry we wasted your time." With that, both of the men exited the staircase and disappeared into the night. Shaken up, I held the knife tight and tried to get my bearings. I remember making a mental note to call the cable company. When my husband returned home, I told him what had happened. I was still very shaken up and had started crying again after he came home. He immediately called the Bresnan Cable Company and spoke to a representative, who informed us that no one from their company was out on assignment in our area. The next day, we asked our neighbors if they had a visit from the company. No one had. For the longest time, there was this man that would sit in his garage and watch me. He was an older man and he was very scrawny. He had patchy gray hair and a super gross beard. I never learned his name, so we'll call him Nick. He looked like a Nick to me. I moved into my classic suburban home before I was even born. I've been living here my whole life, and the first memory I have of Nick was when I was 10 and he gave me a small 2-finger wave as I walked back home after school. I had to see him every day since my bus stop was a few houses down and I walked like a block to get home. My mom said he dropped by after I was born, knocked on the door in the middle of the day, and rang the doorbell until someone answered. My mom finally answered, my 1-year-old brother attached to her leg and newborn me in her arms. She said his face lit up when he saw me. He smiled brightly and asked to hold me. She obviously denied, cause who comes to your house to hold your child when you don't know them in the slightest? She said he scowled at her before calmly walking back to sit in his garage to smoke a cigar. After my first encounter with Nick, I never stopped seeing him. Every day after school, every morning before school, every time I took my dogs out for a walk, every time I peeked out of my window at 3 a.m. I swear this guy never slept. I told my brother how it freaked me out and he said he was probably on house arrest and that was the only way he could get out. We learned that wasn't true when he knocked on our door. Small background for this bit, my mom is very weak. She has an autoimmune disease and her legs and feet will go numb randomly. She's doing a lot better now, but this event happened when she was pretty bad. She insisted she take the dogs out alone and I didn't want to argue, so I sat in the living room. After about a minute, I hear a knock. I yell out that the door is unlocked, thinking it's my mom, but there's a louder knock. I get up and go to the door. I open it and there he is, smiling at me. "Hey hun, your mom fell off the porch. You might want to help her," Nick states, giving me goosebumps. His voice was unreal, so raspy and sounded like he was in the process of choking. He leaves very quickly and I hurry to help my mom off the grass. Calling my younger brother to get the 2 dogs inside, I gave her the "I told you so" speech and she grumbled about it for weeks. My younger dog, a pit bull made of 98% muscle, got excited when she saw a bird. She pulled to get the bird and yanked my mom off the porch. She was standing behind a pot and tripped over it on her way down, making the fall hurt a lot more. She had a black eye and her legs were scratched up. The pot of flowers that she tripped over was smashed, but she was okay otherwise. Flash forward to my 13th birthday and my mom's in the hospital, so my dad goes all out, letting me invite a lot of my friends over for a sleepover, making us dinner and breakfast and just letting me have an amazing time. There's a park across from my suburb that I walk over to sometimes. I decided that I wanted to take my friends there to chill before their parents picked them up. The night before, we were looking out the window and giggling about the man. I know it's creepy and we were 13, so they knew he was weird. I told them to ignore him if he talked to them, but I didn't take my own advice. "Hey Rosie," he said it so quietly I barely heard him. "My name is Rose, and Rosie is a nickname my grandfather often used. I never told this guy my name, neither did any of my family members." Hi," I replied, and my friends all scowled at me, knowing I screwed up. "How's your mom?" "She's fine." I go to leave before I pause. "How do you know my name?" "You told me, remember?" "No, I don't, because it didn't happen, but I wanted to get away, so I agreed." "Oh right," I chuckle. Me and my friends scurry off to the park. The next day, there's a box of chocolates sitting on the porch, a note with Rosie and Chicken Scratch writing on top of it. I pick it up and look over at the guy. He waves, and I can see that his left hand has disappeared into his pants. Gross. I leave the box out there and tell my dad. The next morning, me and my dad take our dogs out. No man. I figured he gave up after he saw me reject his chocolates. A few weeks later, a large family moves into the house, and I hadn't seen a trace of the man until yesterday. I'm 15 now, and the woman who lives in the guy's house comes over yesterday. "Does a Rosie live here?" she asks. I had answered the door and my heart drops at the nickname from the stranger. "Yeah, why?" She hands me an envelope with my full name written on it. The guy who lived in the house before us said to give Rosie this on her birthday. It's not Rosie's birthday. I was trying to pretend I'm not Rosie. "Oh well, I just took a guess. He didn't give us a date. Have a good day." My dad opened the envelope wearing a mask because I quote, "What if he filled it with cocaine?" The note inside just said, "Love you," in his writing, red ink, my favorite color. I was about 5 or 6. I went to my local kindergarten, and I was as carefree as a child can be. The greatest of my worries being if my mom forgets to pick me up from school. She never does, and every day we walk from school to home and vice versa since it was a good walking distance. We lived in a compound that's kind of secluded and mostly inhabited by old people or boarding students who went to the university near it. This morning started out like any other. My mom picks me up and we're walking along the small path in our compound along with 4 other people, 3 high schoolers, 2 of which were walking together, and a female college student. She was holding a handkerchief over her head because of the heat. The sun was high up and glaring in the middle of the day that you wouldn't expect anything to happen, but it did. We were quite far back from this group when I turn around and see a man join us. He's clearly not from there. He had a bright neon green bag in front of him which was slightly opened, one of his hands inside of it. His clothes were kind of dusty, but most of all he was glaring at us. It was just us 5 walking in this quiet compound, and my little self didn't think much of it, up until my mom squeezed my hand and started speed walking. At first I was confused, but I knew the only thing that could trigger this was that there was a danger behind us, and it came in the form of the stranger that was following us closely behind. I kept looking back discreetly, although it was probably obvious, and still he kept staring at all of us, getting closer and closer. I looked up at my mom trying to ask what was going on, but her low murmurs didn't really translate well for me, except my ears picking up on the word knife. That's when I felt my stomach drop. My stupid little legs weren't fast enough. Factor in my mom's older age, she was around 50, compared to our other companions. We were the easy target. We were pretty much at the back, but our house was near and I focused on that. Because if I thought about the threat behind us, my legs would feel like jelly and I'd end up slowing down. Still, I couldn't resist looking back. He just kept getting closer and closer, shortening the distance between us. I remember thinking about how I wanted to scream for help, desperately looking at these houses that seemed empty, wanting to go inside, but my mom's firm grip kept me going. Anyways, we lived here too. I never really knew if the others were aware of it, not much until later. One of the high schoolers left to a house over the basketball court, and further down the path veered off to a different trail that led to the main highway, so it was just us and the female college student. Goody. At this point, the man was also speed walking and catching up, but our apartment was merely a few steps away, and my mom and I dashed towards it, up the stairs and into the comfort of our own home. The man gave us one last glare, but he continued to walk. My heart was pounding against my chest. My mom had left me to lock the door while she stared out the window. She kept repeating, "He has a knife, I saw it. He's holding a knife." I run towards the window and catch a glimpse of the girl, still clutching that handkerchief above her head, looking behind her in fear and alarm as the man continued to follow her, his bright neon bag in front of him, now wide open, his hand still inside, as he kept getting closer and closer. I don't really know what happened after, only of my mom's recollection of the events. She had noticed the man suddenly come up behind us too, and her suspicions were raised when he didn't try to walk past us like the others, but maintain a close distance between us. And then she saw the knife hidden in his bag, holding onto it as he stared at us. I hope that girl's okay and that man was detained or something, but it's been years now and I don't really know what happened to her. Don't really know if I'd like to. This happened about 5 years ago. I was around 16 to 17 years old. I always enjoyed walking. I would spend at least 1 hour a day walking the roads around where I lived. One day I was out doing my normal route, walking down my street that my house was on, taking a right out to the main street, and following it until I got to the end. There I would cross the crosswalk and retrace my steps to go home. On this particular day, I was about 20 feet from where I would leave the main road on my journey back home. I had my headphones in, blasting music as always, which can be a bad habit as I was young walking alone, but since it was daylight and the roads were pretty busy, I figured I was safe. But man, was I ever off with that assumption. As I was about to pass the entrance of a side street before leaving this main road, a black Ford F-150 pulled up. He stopped and gestures for me to walk in front of him, so I do so. I was about to go on my merry way when I barely heard someone trying to talk to me. I turned down my music, taking out my headphones as I looked to see the man in the black Ford still stopped at the entrance of the side road. I looked at him puzzled, trying to figure out if he was talking to me. I pointed at myself and he grinned, nodding. "What's a beautiful girl like you doing out here?" he asked. I laughed awkwardly. Walking," I replied, seeing as the answer should have been obvious. "It's a beautiful day for that," he commented, just seeming to make small talk. "Yeah," I stated before going to turn around and continue my route home. "Wait," the man called. I stopped and turned around, just trying to be polite. Even though the encounter was odd, I didn't see too many red flags yet. The man continued to compliment me. I grew incredibly uncomfortable at this point, seeing as this man had to be in his mid-40s. He had a bit of a receding hairline with black hair, a nose with a protruding bridge, blue eyes that were surrounded by slight wrinkles, and it was dressed in a dress shirt, so I instantly brought up my age. I was hoping saying this would get this fully grown adult man to back off, but he didn't. "Oh, that's okay, come on sweetheart, get in the truck." That's when I started panicking, red flags shooting up everywhere. Stranger danger. I laughed nervously, looking at the cars around me to see if anyone was noticing what was happening. Nobody did. "No, that's fine, my house isn't far." "No, really, get in the truck, I'll bring you home." "No." "Come on, just get in here with me." He called as I turned and started walking away. I was hoping he'd just drive off somewhere else, but he didn't. Instead, he drove extremely slow, following me, complimenting me, and trying to pressure me into his truck. I thought fast of multiple options for different scenarios, but I chose a simple one. I pulled out my phone, and while still walking, I lifted it up to my ear, pretending to loudly answer a call. "Hey dad, yeah no, I'm just on Interstreet name here. I'll be home in about 10 minutes. I stopped pretending to listen to her reply. "Okay, you're outside waiting for me? Awesome, yeah we can do that when I get back. Love you." After he heard me say that, he took off, tires screeching. I ran back home and made it back within about 6 minutes, actually calling my dad on the way, who made a call to the police, who showed up shortly after and took my statement and description. Turns out there was a man on the loose in my area who was exposing himself to kids and trying to pick them up. I started a new job about 6 years ago. It was great. Really liked all my coworkers, and the job itself is really awesome and I still love it. This was before the pandemic and everyone was in the office every day. I work in a large multi-floor, multi-wing building filled with numerous businesses and agencies. I started getting into a routine. We have a gym and locker room in our building. I would go work out before I was on the clock and shower, get ready, etc. I'd go get breakfast at the next building over most mornings at around the same time. I'd go on walk breaks with coworkers at pretty much the same time every day. It was very regimented. In the morning when I worked out, everyone had a pretty set schedule. We didn't know each other, but there was kind of an unspoken pattern. A coworker would finish and shower before me, then I'd go, then the head maintenance guy for the building, and so on. This is where it all begins. One morning, like every other, I get out of the shower and I'm in the small locker area, and there's this little older man over at the sinks. He's not doing anything but looking at himself in the mirror, but you could tell he was just loitering. Weird, but whatever. A few days later, he's there again. Then he's there every morning at the same time, and he's definitely looking at me while I change. This creeps me out, so I stop working out in the morning. Then, after a few weeks, we're walking back from getting breakfast, and he's walking the other way towards the other building. I tell my coworker that's the guy that would always be in the locker room watching me get dressed. After a few more days, he's walking the other way from us getting breakfast every day, and he looks right at me every time. So I make an excuse and stop going for breakfast. Our 9 a.m. walk around the building, he starts just appearing and walking the opposite direction from us every day. Literally everyone walked around the building in the same direction except for this guy, and he'd stare at me as we passed. I tell the coworker who was a woman about the guy and what had happened, and she just laughed it off. The only reason he'd go the opposite direction is to make sure he saw me. Our 1 p.m. walk around the building, wouldn't you know it, he's there walking the other way and staring. So I just stopped going on walks at work. This is where the real magic begins. I have no clue where this guy worked in our building. I would come into our hallway every morning at the same time. From the time I went through the doors to the time I got into my office, it was maybe 15 seconds. We were on the first floor, and at the end of our wing is a staircase. Every morning as I'd come into our wing, he would pop out the stairwell and come walking the opposite direction and stare at me as we passed each other. One morning, I'm walking into the bathroom to go number 2. I stop and blow my nose real quick. As I'm walking to the back stall, he comes into the bathroom. We have 2 urinals, 2 stalls in this particular bathroom. No one is there but us. He comes into the stall next to me, widens out his feet so his shoe is under the divider and on my side of the stall. This dude is tiny, maybe 5 foot, so he'd have to almost be doing the splits. Then he lets out this deep, loud moan after about 30 seconds, then leaves. I start telling all of my coworkers. Most of them laugh. I felt so creeped out and helpless. Like, what do I do? Any guy I work with that I tell this about laughs at me. The women just shrug it off or have an excuse for why he is always there. So I ask one coworker to pick any event at any time during the day to prove he will show up. So we decide to go out for a walk at noon. After 5 or 6 days, there he is. Now she believes me. Everyone in the office knows now. I've told my wife all about this and she is supportive. She has had her share of workplace creepers as well. I get to read the texts and emails. My closest coworker and I decide to start working out at 1:30 p.m. every day. I want to get my gym time in, but I don't want to do it alone. After about a week and a half, guess who starts showing up every day? He'd just come in and loiter around. Mind you, the guy has never tried to talk to me before and vice versa. 2 guys lifting weights and this little old creepy guy just sitting there watching me. Here's where it hits the peak. My lifting buddy had to cut out early one day. My stalker is there with us. I was just going to leave, but screw that, I don't want to let this little weirdo control my life anymore. There is an elevated padded stretching platform on the weight side of our gym. He takes his shoes off, lays on his back and starts doing hip thrusts in the air and holding it while he stares right at me. I'm walking around trying to pretend I don't notice him while he follows me with his eyes, pelvis elevated in the air. After 20 minutes of this, he puts his shoes back on and goes into the locker room. I'm texting my lifting partner and wife the whole time telling them this is going on. My wife tells me to confront him, I don't. I get in the locker room to grab my bag and he's at the sink. The top couple buttons of his shirt unbuttoned and he's rubbing water all over himself while looking at me in the reflection in the mirror. That was it for me. I started working from home almost exclusively after that, then the pandemic hit and I've been remote ever since. This happened Sunday night. I got into a very huge fight with my mom and it was very emotional and intense to say the least. We made up and said goodnight to each other, but I was still pissed off. So my impulsive self decided I was going to take off for the night. I just wanted to cool off. I went into my backyard and hopped over one of our walls and started to walk around. Mind you, it was midnight. I didn't even have a phone in case something happened or a weapon for self-protection. For a bit of a layout on my story, down the street from my house, which is a neighborhood road, there is a church and a preschool across from it. In front of the preschool there are large, tall hedges that sort of hide the pickup/drop-off that's in front of the school. There's a stop sign on the church's corner before the busy main road and a street lamp on the same corner. I made my way down to the corner on the church's side. I was very bored and cold, but it's not like I could call a friend to pick me up and hang out for the night. I decided to face the main road and put a hitchhiker's thumb up in hopes of someone pulling into the street and letting me use their phone to call a friend. After what felt like forever, I was getting no luck and then I saw a guy from across the main road and I called for him. I didn't have any weird feelings about him. He was harmless and he let me use his phone, but I still wasn't able to find any of my friends to come and get me. Before he left, he asked if I had a knife on me or something. I said honestly, I forgot mine at home, and he handed me a small but very sharp switchblade and told me to keep it, to stay safe and have a good night. After watching him walk into the dark heading east, I wandered up and down the sidewalk as cars passed by often. I started to pass the hedges and I glanced over to the left of me where the school was. I saw a large silhouette of a man slowly creeping around in front of the doors to the small preschool. He was tall and looked like he was strong, broad shoulders too. It took me half a second to realize he stopped and saw me too. I went into flight mode and immediately noped out of there and ran across the busy street because it was empty at the moment and kept sprinting until I was 5 streets down and realized he wasn't following me. About 30 minutes had gone by and I decided it was time I made my way home. I eventually crossed the street and was facing the main road walking down to the church and take a left and get home. It was silent and no cars had gone by for a few minutes at that point. Then I heard a car speeding down the road and I turned my head back to see if it was a large white Suburban. I dismissed it thinking nothing of it as it turned right a few streets down across the road. I started to turn the corner under the street lamp when I looked back up again and saw it was starting to come out out the same road it just turned into. I don't know what told me to run, but I did. I ran into the parking lot of the church and started to see headlights turn into the street. I threw myself onto the ground behind a ramp wall that was barely tall enough to hide me. I was trying to stay silent at the same time because the Suburban's headlight reflected off the walls of the building as it pulled into the parking lot. It made a few laps from what I could sneak a peek of and stopped in the middle for a couple of minutes before it turned out and drove into the main road. I waited it out a bit longer and pulled the knife out, listening for anything and everything. Once I realized I was probably in the clear, I ran back home. I'm a French student doing a master's in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I live alone in an apartment in a building where there are only students. I'm 22, enjoying life peacefully. To give you a bit of context, I live in a calm, good neighborhood. The only noises I'd hear are the tram or parties in the building since a lot of students are there. One night around 10 p.m, I hear a knock on my door. I live on the 3rd floor, and to get to my front door, you have to open the main door, which needs a key. Then you need to open the door to my corridor with the same key. So people who want to come into my door must have the key, call me, or ring at the door so I could open the doors for them from my apartment. Nothing of this happened. I just heard a knock on my door. I usually open the door without a second thought, whether it's my landlord or a neighbor asking for something. As I told you, I feel pretty safe in the building, but this time, for some reason, I had a bad feeling about this. I didn't move at first. I thought the person would just leave. I had finished my assignments. However, the knocking continued for 30 seconds. I said yeah in English. The person knocking doesn't say anything. I ask in English again, who is it? The voice answers in English, it's Uber Eats, which is weird because Dutch always speaks Dutch and I recognize the voices and accents of everyone on my floor who have the key to access the floor. So it wasn't a neighbor, it wasn't my landlord, it was somebody claiming to come from Uber Eats. But the issue is I didn't order anything from Uber Eats that day. The voice was unfamiliar. In case it's a prank or a neighbor pulling a joke, it was also a deep voice, at least 40 and probably a smoker. I replied that I didn't order anything, you must have it wrong. After a few seconds, the knocking continues in the same voice says, I'm pretty sure you did, I have an order under your name. I start panicking. I look around to pick up a knife in case he breaks the door because the knocking was getting a bit louder. I checked if my door is locked, it wasn't. I was literally 10 centimeters away from him. My front door was the only thing keeping him from me, and I'm glad it doesn't open from the outside. You need a key to open it even if it's not locked. I step back and I ask again, what's the name? He seems to be thinking for a few seconds, then a final knock occurs. It was loud and it translated some anger or frustration. Finally, I hear him going down the emergency stairs right next to my apartment. The steps were heavy and the person was clearly in a hurry. I don't know what he wanted or what would have happened to me if I had opened the door as I usually do. I still haven't understood how he got through the 2 doors, and why he did come specifically to the last apartment on the 3rd floor. Did he try others before? I posted a post about it on the WhatsApp group we have in the building. No one saw anything suspicious. No one opened the door for anyone. I grew up out in the wooded country in Illinois, on a short dead-end street 10 plus miles from a town, and there were 7 houses in the area spread out on a 2.5 acre wooded lots or larger each. There were no large wild animals, there aren't bears or large animals in the region, and people didn't meander there or show up lost. Actually, lost folks or large animals wandering around never happened in the 20 years I lived there, so please keep that in mind. When I was a young girl in my early teens, I had a good guy friend a few years older than me who lived next door, Terry. Terry was allowed to go out with his friends much later than I was, and he would sometimes walk over to my yard after getting home late and throw rocks from the gravel area outside at my window to chat. My bed was right next to the window. I'd open the window and we'd whisper stories and generally talk for a bit. My 2nd story window faced our backyard and his house was to the side. I could see his house from my window over the shrub trees and walking path to his driveway. I'd often know if he was out. The light was on over the side door entrance, or already home. Light was off. One time during the summer when my window was open, I heard a car in his driveway dropping him off. I was probably 14 years old and it was around midnight. I heard Terry get out of a car and was talking to his friends. Soon his friends pulled away. I softly called out as loud as I could without waking my parents, asking Terry to stop by and chat. He didn't respond as he probably didn't hear me. Then I came up with a not so brilliant idea to sneak outside and scare him. As kids, we'd often sneak around and scare each other. So I silently sneaked down from the 2nd floor door and out my back garage door, which led to our backyard, below my window, which led to Terry's house off the side, through our gravel area, then through a well-worn path through the woods about 25 feet long. My parents had put in a gravel pit around the back of the house, probably because nothing much grew due to the shade of the oak trees. There were 14-inch oak rounds set out as an uneven stepping path in the gravel, and if you stepped off of the rounds in the church of gravel/rocks would give you away. I picked my way expertly and silently across the log rounds facing Terry's house. My eyes got accustomed to the dark and I didn't see him. Also at that time, I heard the door of his house close and the light going off, signaling he went in, likely to bed. I waited a bit as I thought I saw something move in the woods between our houses, but not on the path we'd always use. If you didn't use the path, there were wild rose and raspberry plants that had thorns and were painful to walk through if you weren't careful. So I thought it was odd that he'd been in the woods, but maybe he wanted to scare me like I was plotting to do to him. But I saw something human-sized and dark moving through the woods slow and pausing every once in a while like me. It was coming closer and I definitely saw it, but it was strange in that it wasn't walking directly to my window to talk. Therefore, I hunched down and waited in silence, wondering if I could still startle him. I still thought it was Terry and he saw me sneak out and he was trying to scare me. I watched a dark outline of a human figure moving, but then I would lose sight of it in the foliage. It seemed to be stalking slowly and listening/checking every few feet while hiding. So I whispered after losing patience one last time for Terry, but he didn't answer. I got bored of hiding and crouching, so I quietly tippy-toed back to my garage door and went back inside, silently locking up as I went. I snuck back upstairs to my room above the area where I was just standing/crouching. My window was open and I definitely heard someone or something walking around the yard. I whispered again for Terry out my window but got no answer. Then I heard someone or something fall and grunt pretty loudly in the window well right below my window. It wasn't enough to wake my parents, but definitely loud enough I didn't mistake it, and it sent a shock of fear through me. If you aren't familiar with a window well, it's a semicircle hole connected to the house, dug out for about 3 or 4 feet deep and reinforced with metal. It allows a basement window to be put in below ground level and the hole lets some natural light in. There's no way Terry would have fallen in our window well. We have been playing hide and seek and many outdoor games for years since we were young around the whole neighborhood. We knew everyone's window wells and house footprints, plus paths in the woods like the back of our hands. The grunt sounded humanish and not like an animal. It also pulled itself out quietly without a lot of thrashing. That's when I realized this wasn't a fun game and someone or something was out there, and it wasn't Terry. I tried to look outside my window as best as I could, but there was a screen on my windows to keep the bugs out, so I couldn't lean my head out the window to see next to the wall of our house directly below me. I then heard the crunch of rocks as whatever it was stepping in the noisy gravel. Again, Terry would know where the log rounds were and would not step in the gravel. He knew my parents were pretty strict and he was as good at being quiet as I was. Whatever it was stopped and I held my breath. I pretty much sat there with my face pressed against the screen 2 stories up for probably half an hour. It seemed like an hour, but I'm pretty sure I didn't have patience back then to wait that long. I never heard it leave, but I grew tired and eventually fell asleep on my bed that was next to the window. There are a few things I'm certain of. It wasn't Terry. I asked him later and he said he went to bed that night when he got home. He also would have no reason to lie. I'm pretty sure it wasn't one of our neighbors and I can't think of any reason a person would be there. We had a few neighbors and only 2 other houses out of 7 had kids. Again, these 7 houses were spread out in 2.5 plus acres per home. There weren't any big animals in the area. As wooded as the whole area was, we only had some deer, but they were hunted and didn't come close to homes. Plus our dogs scared them away. When I was 25, there was a short time I was staying at my aunt's. It was her, my 2 cousins, and I. She lives in a nice apartment complex and her unit is on the lower level. Her living room has a lot of windows that she keeps open for fresh air and for her cats to people watch. Her unit happens to be on the corner near a grassy courtyard path. When I had first moved in, I noticed a man who gave me an off vibe. My cousins and aunt said he lived upstairs and 2 units over, recovering from hard drugs that permanently messed him up. His parents paid for him to stay there as they didn't want him with them. They also said other than hearing him mumble and say weird things, no one ever had an issue. My aunt works nights and leaves at 3 a.m. My younger cousin works nights and leaves at 2 a.m. That usually left my same aged cousin and I the only 2 there until we leave for work around 8. For context, it is a very open living room to dining room plan. My aunt always has people staying over, so she has a second couch in the dining room in place for a table. This is where I slept. She stayed on the one in the living room. My aunt has also never been one to lock her doors until this incident. One night I'm on my phone trying to sleep at about 1 a.m. and hear a man yelling. He's yelling, "Don't shoot," and banging on the door to the right of ours. 2 male college students live there and just told him he had the wrong apartment and to leave. He says sorry and walks off. I am looking through the kitchen window, which is in direct line of sight from my couch bed, and it's the weird neighbor who sees me and grins. He then walks back to his home. I was unsettled but not enough to wake anyone else up over it. Told my family nonchalantly the next day in a LOL that was weird way. My cousin and I watch a movie and head off to bed. I have a very hard time staying asleep, but I woke up this time to the feeling of someone watching me. I check my phone and it's around 3:30 a.m., so I know it's not my aunt or cousin. I sit up and figure I'll go watch TV on my aunt's couch since she was gone already. The feeling gets stronger as I am in the living room. Then I see the shadow of a person standing still in the grass courtyard looking in. I froze. I immediately go back to my couch to get my phone. As I do, the person is gone. I am now trying to calm myself down and think of waking my cousin up when I hear the creepy man's voice. He is now at the kitchen window, which looks out directly in front of her front door. I drop to the floor out of his line of sight and start frantically trying to call my cousin. The man is now saying things at the window/front door like, "I'm going to hurt you" and "I'm unarmed" over and over again. His face is up against the window. Then he starts talking about wanting to pet the cats he saw through the window. I can't get a hold of my cousin. It's been about 20 minutes of this. At this point, in this situation, I didn't have many options. I could jump up and run for a knife, but I need to go to the kitchen. I could try to respond and ask him to leave, but I've learned when you underestimate crazy, you lose every time. I now hear him knocking and knocking while repeating his nonsense. I'm doing that ridiculous looking army crawl snake slither across the floor down the hall now. I see the door handle start to turn. I'm about to jump up when my cousin bursts out of his room directly across from the front door. Now, he's not the biggest guy, but he was intimidatingly mad at the circus show taking place at his front door. He starts yelling at the guy that he needs to get off of his porch and that he's calling the cops. The man tries to say, "I'm unarmed. I'm not going to hurt you. Don't be afraid." My cousin goes off and yells, "That's dandy. It's 4 a.m. You need to leave or I'll call the cops." So this guy backs up with his hands in the air and leaves. Needless to say, we didn't go back to sleep. My aunt was called, who called the apartment manager. The next day when I came home from work, his parents were there packing moving boxes in a truck from his place. Maybe he was trying to get me to open the door by seeming friendly. Maybe he had a bad trip and really wanted to pet a cat to feel better. We will never know. This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting with my extended family, but she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend had been quite inebriated by the time we had to leave. Therefore, I'd be driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it are unlit. But nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. There is a portion of the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forest. There are no lights. The only thing we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, cross the bridge, and uphill through more forest. It's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turn to my girlfriend and ask her if she saw it. She confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote, as they are a fairly common sight in this area, but something felt off about it. Whatever it was that ran in front of our car disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually dart out in front of cars, not like that anyway. So for some reason, I decided to check it out. I turned the car around and switched on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished in. I step out of the car and walk towards the woods. I don't see anything, but now it feels like perhaps I'd made a grave error. Suddenly, the car's horn blast. It's not a beep 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 that you get if you'd say your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry up and get in the car. No, this was a long blaring beep. I walked back into the car and asked my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction and that's when I saw it. Surely this was the thing that ran in front of our car. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud. He looked back at us and then he smiled and waved to us just before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for whatever was in the area that initially vanished in, he circled back around and came out from another spot in the forest, beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me. We called the authorities once we got safely back home, but they never found anybody. The officer we spoke to assumed the man was probably on drugs. I moved back into the area recently, so I now drive that highway often. No naked man sightings yet, but I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant now, especially near Deep Creek. This happened like 12 years ago. I was 14 and my sister was 12. It was during summer vacation and we were hanging out, just the two of us outside, midday. We lived in a smallish town where during weekdays it was pretty empty because adults were at work. Anyway, we'd been messing around, picking flowers and other random stuff, when we decided to cut through a massive field of undeveloped land on the edge of our suburb. It was technically a shortcut to get home, but it wasn't the best idea because it was really bumpy, potted land that other kids and teens left all sorts of stuff laying in. Well, our bad decision came around and bit us. We hadn't made it very far in the field when my sister got two bad things at once. Some sort of twisted metal, maybe an old piece of tool, pierced right through her foam flip-flop and into her foot, and right after it happened she shrieked, jerked, and twisted that ankle on the uneven ground. She started crying and howling and I was worried. The metal hadn't gone too deep and I was able to stop the bleeding with the hem of my shirt, but she couldn't walk anymore obviously. Our parents weren't available, didn't know where we were, and this was before I had a cell phone. My sister was still on the ground crying and I was trying to calm her down when something made me feel like looking up. Y'all, it was the feeling of being watched. Out of the field, across the road, standing on the corner in the distance was some random guy watching us. He was too far away for me to see him clearly. All I could tell for sure was that he was blonde, probably adult, and dressed too warmly for July. He was all alone, stock still, just staring at us. I looked back at my sister and basically said to get on my back. I was carrying her home. We were leaving right now. Now, I had to carefully pick my way through this stupid field in my own bad flip-flops, with my crying sister on my back. Luckily, she was tiny, but I was no linebacker either. It had rained a day ago, and the field had puddles of water in the low spots. We were both kind of wet from her falling when she got hurt. I swiveled back to check if he was still watching us, and he was. Not only was he watching us, but he'd crossed the road and entered the field. Now he was standing stock still again and just watching. Ice in the veins doesn't describe it. One of the scariest moments of my life up to that point. My sister looked when I looked, saw my face, and started crying even harder. I just shook her a bit on my back and whispered something like, "Stop it. I need to concentrate on getting us home. Watch him and tell me if he starts following again. Just be quiet." So that's what we did. I started walking again as fast as I could without getting hurt. My sister watched him while I carried her. After less than a minute, she whispered to me that he was following again. How fast? Just walking. Is he watching us? Yes. I told her to tell me if anything changed and kept going. I stomped through puddles and I couldn't see into when I had to, hoping there was nothing sharp in them. I lost a flip-flop in the mud and just kept going. We were about 3/4 of the way through the massive field when my sister whispered that I least wanted to hear. He was speeding up. I turned us right around, so we were facing him head on, and as loud as I could, I yelled something like, "Hey, we see you, leave us alone, I'll call the cops." Nothing. He'd stop again when I stopped, but gave no sign whatsoever he'd heard me. Just nothing. I turned us around again and kept going. My poor little sister was shaking like a leaf and just saying my name over and over again. It was awful, and there was nothing I could do but keep going. Eventually, he started following again, at a slow pace. I finally made it into our suburb, out of the muddy field and onto solid concrete. Told my sister to hold on as tight as she could and booked it. Started running with her on my back as fast as I could. We couldn't see him anymore, didn't know what he was doing or where he was. Every muscle hurt from carrying her so far. My bare foot was all scratched up from the road, but I didn't stop. I kept moving. With my sister looking out behind us, it felt like my heart was going to explode. After what felt like forever, I made it to our house, ran across the yard, up the drive, put down my sister, who started crying again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use my key. We made it in safely and called my mom. She had us lock every door and window and came rushing home, but nothing happened after that. He never found us, so we never saw him again. So a few years ago, I, a 17-year-old female at the time, would attend community college at the outskirts of my hometown. I would take an hour-and-a-half long bus drive because both of my parents worked and my other siblings were too young to drive. The outskirts of my town, despite being the literal outskirts, are more populated than you expect, with strip malls and apartment buildings. The bus would drop me off about 4 blocks from my university, which isn't too far. I always enjoyed those few minutes. Anyway, this one time, I left my phone at the library. Using my brother's phone, I called a friend who worked at the school library during the late evening shift, 7 to 9, and he'd said he'd bring my phone to me, but he lived closer to the college than I did, so I told him I'd just meet him at his shift and pick it up myself. He said okay, and I boarded the bus at around 6. Now, I get off the bus at my usual spot and the place looked deserted. I'd never been there that late at night, and maybe it was because it was a weekday that people were home, or I don't know. I had my brother's phone in my pocket and just clutched it tighter and tighter, picking up my speed until I was practically jogging. I'm nearing to a corner when a flash of light goes off to my right. There, in the shadows, is a sleazy looking man. He's balding with a tourist shirt unbuttoned halfway. He was wearing sunglasses at night and was wearing some gold jewelry. And most importantly, he had just taken a picture of me. In the instant that I saw the flash go off, I knew it was coming from his phone. Now, I think it's important to understand our positioning. He was pressed against a building to my right at the corner I had turned. I was about 10 feet away from him. To my left, on the same side of the street, was a car with blacked out windows and no license plates, directly across the sidewalk from the man. The car was parked with the driver's seat facing me, so that it was on the wrong side of the road, because America drives on the right side as opposed to the left. I had slowed down at that point as I began to debate my next move: cross the street and continue walking, make a break for the school, turn 180 and leave my phone at the library, or approach the potentially dangerous man. I did the stupidest thing possible and approached the man. Anyway, I demanded to know what he was doing. He looked taken aback. I could see his brain short-circuiting because I was demanding to know what he was doing. He eventually sputtered about how he was just standing here. I said, "No, I saw you take that picture of me." His face fell. He started saying no, he hadn't done that. Why would he want a picture of me? I had imagined it. I asked to see his gallery, which is extremely risky because who knows what I could have seen. He slowly pulls up his gallery and, as it's opening, I see a blurry picture of me in the distance. I didn't think I'd get that far. Granted, I had been running on adrenaline during our whole interaction, but this really made me pause. I told him to delete it. Then a door slammed shut. I just knew it was the parked car. My brain cleared up and I hightailed it to the school. I could hear a single pair of footsteps behind me, but I sure wasn't going to turn around and check who it was. The car started, but they would have to do a U-turn on a relatively narrow street just to be able to follow me. I think that's what saved my life. The fact that the car was parked facing the wrong direction. I reached the school out of breath and in tears. My friend opened the building for me and I explained what had happened. He locked us in while he called the police and we waited for them, but the sleazy guy and his buddy were never found. Anyway, my mom had gotten out of work by that point and I called her to ask to pick me up. We waited with my friend till the end of his shift and drove him home too. Needless to say, I carry a mace with me everywhere I go now and I'm yet to find a police report stating a guy matching his description had been arrested. To be honest, I don't think the police believed me fully, but who knows. I'm a single male, 33 years old, who lives alone in Denver. My apartment complex is not what you would call a nice building. I'm on a road close to Colfax Avenue, which if you're familiar with the geography of this area is not the safest boulevard in town. I'm a few streets away from it, but close enough that I wouldn't consider this an up-and-coming neighborhood. This evening, I was watching Netflix on my couch. My 2 cats were cuddled up against me as I lay under a comforter. The night before, I had watched a horror movie that was scary enough to leave me in an unsettled mood, making it hard to sleep. So this night I decided to watch a stand-up special instead. Keep it light so I wouldn't have any trouble getting some shut-eye. I have classes early the next morning, so I was surprised when I made the conscious decision to turn on a second stand-up special and let myself fall asleep on the couch. I was just so comfy where I lay and didn't want to move, not even to turn off the several lights on throughout my apartment. I remember dozing off around 11 o'clock. It was effortless, which meant I was really snug under the covers with my cats flanking me on either end, creating a tucked-in feeling. And all of a sudden, I'm not sleeping anymore. I am woken up by a knock at my door. Then a man's voice says maintenance. I just sat there, sitting bolt upright on my couch. I knew something was off. I looked at my phone, which was by my left hand, and the time was 2:15 a.m. I didn't move. The floors of my apartment are old wood, and there are many creaky floorboards. I didn't want whoever was knocking to know someone was at home and awake, let alone alert to his presence. My cats got up and ran over to the door as they normally would, but but I stayed still and listened. After a few minutes with no answer, the man walked away from the door and down the hallway to the stairs. A moment after that, I heard the back door to the building swing open and closed. I have one window where I have a partial view of that door, so I break my paralysis and race over to it. I saw an old looking green SUV sitting in the no parking zone just in front of the back door. It must have been running the entire time because I didn't hear it start up and the brake lights were glowing red. Someone, presumably the maintenance man, got in the car and it drove off. I don't know how this individual got into the building in the first place, as you would need a key to do so. I don't know what his intentions were, but no one knocks on someone's door at 2:15 a.m. claiming to work for the landlord with good deeds in mind. So I'm a 23-year-old female. I live in a townhouse with my 2 children, 2 and 6 months old. My fiance did live with us until 2 weeks ago when I caught him trying to have relationships with other women and made him move out. That's important to the story. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and when he did live with us, my ex worked evenings. Let me set the scene. We live in a tiny house in northern Pennsylvania. My line of townhouses sits in front of a big field that runs to a line of woods. As far as I'm aware, these woods stretch out for at least a few miles, and I'm not aware of any houses in there or any roads that lead through them. My living room has 3 windows that look to the field, and my bedroom on the 2nd floor only has 1 window that faces that way as well. People do tend to walk their dogs back in the field, and kids sometimes play back there, but I rarely ever see anyone close to my house. For that reason, I tend to leave my blinds and curtains open because I guess I just enjoy the view. So in July of 2019, I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep. All the lights were off, but I had my window and blinds open since it was so warm. I was looking out the window and I noticed small red and white lights just outside. I got up and looked to realize that the lights were coming from a drone. I ran downstairs to where my fiance at the time was sitting in the living room and ran to the window. I told him what I saw, but of course when he went to look, it was gone. I was paranoid that the drone could have had a camera on it and someone was watching me with it. I kept my blinds closed for a while after that. Fast forward to January of this year. I guess I stupidly got comfortable and assumed that whoever it was flying the drone was a one-time creep. My blinds were open and I had just gotten out of the shower. I was sitting on my bed pretty much naked except for my underwear, scrolling on my phone when out of the corner of my eye I saw lights again out of the dark window. It was that drone again. I ran out of the room and waited for a few minutes. I peeked back into my room and it was gone. I quickly shut my blinds and got dressed. Honestly, I felt sick at how stupid I was to leave my window open again, especially when I was practically naked. Now for the real disturbing part. My 2-year-old son and I were out in the field 2 weeks ago, 3 days after I kicked out my boyfriend playing ball. I had my 6-month-old strapped to me in a baby carrier. Probably about a half hour after we had been out there, I heard a slight whirring noise coming towards us. I looked up and saw the drone flying towards us. I looked around and didn't see anyone. It stopped right over us. I freaked and grabbed my son and dragged him into the house, looking back at the tree line every so often as we went. I knew they had to be hiding in there. I went inside, closed the blinds, and called my mom and told her about the situation. She told me just to keep an eye out. I said I would. My son likes to line his toys up against the window, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to open them up just an inch or so. A little while later, after we ate dinner and it was almost dark, I was feeding my 6-month-old and my son was playing. He was standing over by the window, lining up his toys. He started saying dada, dada. I assumed he was just missing his father and dismissed him by saying he was going to see him that weekend. He kept saying dada, dada, though. I looked up and saw him pointing to the window under the little gap the blinds didn't cover. I froze. I remembered that he calls any man with facial hair dada because it reminds him of his father, but there was no way someone would be bold enough to actually come up to my window. Not when my neighbors are literally right there. Anyone could see them, but there aren't any lights back there, so unless someone actually stepped out of their house, I guess nobody would see them. Maybe it was my ex, but he should be at work at that time. I ran to the window and moved my son. I didn't want to lift the blinds, but honestly, I was sure it had to be the person who had been creeping on me for the past year, and I wanted to see who it was. I pushed the blinds up and was looking at a man who I definitely had never seen before, crouching in front of me. He was bald with a mustache and goatee. I have no idea how old he was. He could have been anywhere from 30 to 50. When he saw me, he smiled and stood up. I yelled and told him to screw off and that I was going to call the cops. He just stood there, smiling at me like some freak. I was about to close the blinds again when he said something I couldn't hear. I told him to leave again and he said, louder this time, "I just want to talk to you." I shook my head no and yelled the same thing to him. He started started slapping his hands on the window, yelling no 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 over and over. I grabbed my phone, scared he was going to try to break in. I dialed 911. My kids were crying from the yelling and I felt on the verge of tears. I told the operator what was going on. The whole time I was on the phone, the man was pounding on my window, screaming now. He was yelling all kinds of nonsense, and I only caught some of it. He said he's been watching me for months, I'm beautiful, he wants to come with them, he'll kill my children if I don't. The operator told me to go into an upstairs room and hide until the police arrive. My town doesn't have a police department, so we rely on the state police. She said it would be about 20 minutes, but to stay on the phone with her. The man was practically punching my window now and was just screaming like a maniac. I was about to grab my kids and run upstairs when I heard someone else screaming. The man bolted. I looked out and saw my neighbor and his girlfriend. I opened the window and my neighbor said that he heard the man, so he ran around the building. He said when the guy heard him, he ran back to the woods and disappeared in the tree line. They said they also called the police. I thanked them 100 times. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They did a quick search around the buildings and found the man and arrested him. I don't know why that guy targeted me or why he waited so long to do something. I'm just happy my neighbors were there to intervene, or who knows what would have happened. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just us three at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are window doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kind of leans into a small hill. My brother and mom both had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try to scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise because in all the years I lived in that house, we never once called the cops. Gun owner family in a quiet rural West Virginia neighborhood, etc. I asked her what she was talking about and she looked equally surprised as if she had just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night, I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked, I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. Tall white male, wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. It turns out he had escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now, I know it sounds so obvious hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago in my mid-20s that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home. At the time, I had just turned 17 and was still pretty naive. I live in England, so it is legal to work in a bar and serve alcohol supervised, but not to drink alcohol. Not that it stopped me. I worked in a working men's club filled with middle-aged elderly people. Most were really nice. I sold bingo tickets twice for a week for my dad's cousin and I was pretty good at it. It's not typical to get tips here, but I earned more in tips than I did my actual wage. On a Saturday, my dad would come with me to have a drink with my elder sister while they played competitive darts in the main bar overlooking my booth. This one particular night, there was a middle-aged, average-looking guy, a little on the plump side but generally unnoticeable. On the first round of selling tickets, he was at the fruit machine opposite the entire time, looking over at me occasionally. The second round he approached me, asked me what I was selling, how bingo worked, etc. Clearly had never played before, but hey, everyone starts somewhere, right? He bought some tickets and offered to buy me a drink. I declined and informed him I was underage. By now I had a bit of an uneasy vibe vibe and didn't want to take a drink from a guy I don't know. He then offered a cola, complimenting me a little too hard. Again declined and went on my way to help with the game in the main hall, part of my job. Third time, he stood against the wall adjacent to me and just watched me work. He'd waited until the queue calmed down and bragged about how much money he had and now he wants to be my sugar dad. How cute I am, commenting on my figure. I was trapped in my booth. I was late into the main hall, so the concert chairman, guy who calls out the bingo numbers and gives out winnings, comes out and asks what was going on. This guy claims we were just talking. I apologized to the chairman and he walked me to the hall, said he could see I was freaked out, so I told him everything. He made the bar staff aware, who also made my boss, my dad's cousin, aware also. Last round of selling tickets, he doesn't even wait for me to get back in my booth. He grabs my butt, telling me how he wants to be my sugar dad once again, tries to push me against the wall and is suddenly spun around, not just by my dad but my boss and numerous staff members and customers who heard and saw what went down. He started arguing his innocence until my dad not so politely introduced himself. He knew he was screwed. My dad punched him in the nose, blood running down his face. Everyone picked him up like a plank of wood and threw him out the closed door. Never saw him after that. Everyone checked up on me to make sure I was okay. My sister covered the rest of the shift and I had a free bar tab for 2 months. I was 22 and living on my own for the first time when this happened. I had just gotten off work around 11 in the afternoon. To reach my apartment building, I could either walk on the sidewalk or cut across this communal garden. I saved about 1 whole minute of walking time by cutting through the communal garden, but being young and stupid, a lot of times I took the shortcut. That night, I got that weird feeling to not take the shortcut. I kept to the sidewalk, but there's no one else around. When I got past the garden, all of a sudden, this large man pops up from its exit path. There was no way he could have been in front of me or just behind me as I was walking. I would have noticed him. The only logical explanation was he had been hiding in the pitch black garden. A drunk who had been sleeping it off. No, my body was screaming at me to get out of there. I began walking faster. My dad had taught me to always carry my keys in my fist with the key pointed out in case I needed to punch someone, so I had that, but I'm 5'4" and probably weighed 110 pounds. This guy was tall and big. My only chance was to outpace him. I'm speed walking at this point and I feel him matching my pace, getting closer. He's breathing heavily. I feel this angry energy coming off of him, but my apartment building is right there, so I put on a burst at speed. When I reach the entrance, 2 people are leaving and hold the door for me. And him, I don't know why I didn't tell them I thought this guy was following me. My mind froze and I was just trying to get inside my apartment. Plus, I was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was visiting someone in the building. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. Don't be paranoid. Besides, it took only a couple seconds for them to be out the door. I had missed my chance. I'm climbing the stairs as fast as I can. It's a 3-story building and I live on the 3rd floor. He's climbing the stairs too, still right behind me. I get to my floor, which has 4 apartments on the right side and 4 on the left. I pass by apartments 1 and 2. He's still right behind me. I stop at apartment 3 and he stops in front of apartment 4 where I know he doesn't live. He hasn't said anything, just breathing hard, and I think there's no way I'm going to open my apartment door and have him push me inside and assault me or worse. He also hasn't knocked on the door of apartment 4. Worth noting is that the apartments are U-shaped, with mine and my neighbor's door being very close together. So I banged my own apartment door as loud as I could but yell my neighbor's name. Hey Kevin, let me in. This startles the guy, even more so when my own apartment door doesn't open but Kevin's does. Kevin sees the guy standing right in front of his door and asks what he wants. The guy starts mumbling something about the wrong apartment, but I have my own door open so fast that I am inside my place in a flash, locking the door behind me. I grab my cordless phone to call the police, but I hear Kevin through the door telling this guy he needs to leave. The guy does. Kevin knocks on my door, asks if I'm okay. I thank him, say that I am, but inside I am still frozen, adrenaline pumping, scared. I thank him again and tell him to have a good night, lock my door again. I have my phone in my hand, ready to call the police, but I start trying to rationalize it again. What exactly happened? The guy followed me home but then said he had the wrong apartment. Are the cops going to care about something minor like that? I try to calm myself down, but I'm also berating myself. Why didn't I run the instant I felt him following me? Why didn't I tell the people we passed when the front door opened that I thought I was being chased? Worse, why didn't I tell Kevin that the second he opened his door and saved me? He could have let me inside his apartment and we could have called the cops together. But because of my stupidity, everything felt so ambiguous and I was questioning myself. A couple of weeks later, I'm visiting my grandparents and my grandfather is reading the paper. He tells me that a woman was assaulted in the apartment building across the street from mine. It's the same guy. He had multiple convictions for assault and had recently been released on parole. For context, I am a 20-year-old female, and at the time of these events I was around 12 and 13, so I grew up in a very rural area. Like, my town was so small it was legally considered a village. My house was one of 4 on a span of 40 acres. My childhood home, my grandparents' house right up the street, and 2 neighbors. One of the neighbors, we will call him T, had been living across near my family for as long as I can remember, and he rented out a trailer he owned which was inhabited by the 4th neighbor, we will call him Jay. Jay and his girlfriend, who we will call, had moved in a few months before these events, and I hadn't really met them. I knew of them but hadn't interacted with them directly the day I met Jay, and it was extremely awkward as I was a kid and didn't really want to talk to them. But my grandma had made me go with her to drop off some vegetables she had grown in her garden. When they came out after my grandma knocked on the trailer door, I was first struck by how they looked. I know that sounds bad, but I'm not judging. My grandma started the conversation, and I tried to be polite as I was raised to be by introducing myself when told to do so. I wasn't really able to finish my sentence as I noticed Jay was staring at me very intently. He looked like he was either mad or hungry. We're both not the creepiest off the bat, as they both seemed polite enough, and I brushed off the stare as just him trying to be polite, looking at me as I spoke to him as most people do. The creepy part is that as time went on he began to try and be near me more and more. He'd ride his bike past our house over and over for what seemed like hours while me and my brother played catch in the yard. Then he began to go to church with me, my brother, and my grandparents. He'd make sure to sit right next to me in the back seat of the car as he rode with us. If my brother tried to sit in the middle so I wasn't right next to Jay, he'd throw a fit about how my brother was squishing him against the door. Then he began coming to my grandma's house when she'd have me and my brother after school, offering to tutor me with various subjects. What really scared me was that I had begun to see him walking near our house at night trying to shine a flashlight into my window. He tried various things to get close to me, tried to convince my parents to let him teach me how to golf, tried to help me practice my catchy positions for softball, tried to get me to go with him into the movies, and none of these things ever included my brother, Olivier. Things finally came to a head when I was playing with my dog outside in our front yard, and he started repeatedly doing laps on his bike down the road again, staring at me like he did the day we met. I was extremely uncomfortable. I've always had very good intuition about people, and something was always just off with him. But that day I was terrified. He parked his bike right in the middle of the road and got off. He started walking towards me at almost a jog, and I just kept backing away. What happened next is why I believe that dogs are a better judge of character than people could ever hope to be. My boxer ran up to him and launched herself onto him when he was about 6 feet from me. She tore to his arm and I saw blood. I screamed and my mom ran out shortly after. She was trying to pull my dog off of him, but as soon as she was able to, holding onto the dog's collar, she started yelling at him, asking him why he was in our yard with me alone. He couldn't answer her and just started running back to his bike, riding back to the trailer. My grandma ended up driving him to the hospital as Jay, and it didn't have a car, and I learned later he got 16 stitches. He never gave a reason as to why he was approaching me, and they moved out shortly after. I haven't seen him since and still terrified to this day to run into him again. I want to tell this story to warn others. I, an 18-year-old female, live in Maryland, USA. I work at a very popular burger restaurant. I work at the pavement window, which is where I stand all night. I'm very friendly. I know sometimes a smile and a compliment can make someone's day a little better. Just this same night, before the creeper came, I had a customer tell me I was so happy and she loved me for it. That gave me the courage and energy to survive this next interaction. I'm used to the awkward comments and stares from old men. I'm sure it's my friendliness that attracts them. Our uniforms are not revealing. They think I'm naive. Maybe I am. A lot more than I thought. I'm fully aware of the dangers of trafficking. This particular old man came through just before 6. He pretended to not hear his order, then laughed like it was a joke between 2 friends. This is not uncommon. It's an old man thing. No red flags yet. I tell him his total and he hands me all but the change. When he does this, he waves the money around, making me chase it. I was able to snatch the cash, but again, it was just an old man thing. Not concerned yet. He stared at the company name on my shirt and asked if that was my name. I don't wear a name tag for this reason. I joked that I was going to change my name permanently to that. He perked up. At this point, I should state that he was white, mid-60s to 70s, driving a small, white SUV with a kayak on top. He had some scruff on his face and was holding a phone to his ear this entire time. When I finally began to engage with him, he moved the phone to be facing me. Looking back, I believe he was recording me. At no point did he speak into the phone or acknowledge it in any way. He probed with more pressing questions. Here's the thing, I have the same last name as someone from US history. Most old people like talking about that stuff, so I told him my last name and he didn't reflect or laugh. He just accepted and continued asking questions. That's when I started to get this sinking feeling. He still owed me change. I told him. He grabbed another dollar and handed it to me, but he wouldn't let go. He wanted to know my first name, and I dodged answering because I was getting creeped out. He wouldn't let go of the money and was practically drooling for more data about me. I gave him a name I don't use and he smiled, finally letting go. I got his change and told him to have a nice day. I then immediately left the window and told one of my coworkers about the weird experience. He returned just 2 hours later. I didn't recognize his car on the cameras until he got to my window. I hadn't thought too much about our interaction and was busy texting my dad about whether or not a chicken sandwich was a burger. My stomach dropped when I saw his face. I have many regulars, all of whom I'd have been happy to see. I hope he doesn't become one. I'll call the police. He smiled and said, "Hey, the one with the last name." I half smiled back and wished for the days when we all wore masks. I tell him his total and he makes me chase the money again. For the entire time, he had his phone against his ear, facing me. He starts asking even more intimate questions about me. I lie or dodge them best I can, giving him 0 correct answers, wanting our interaction to be as short as possible. Some of the questions he asked me: how often do you work? What time do you leave? How old are you? For that one, I knew he wouldn't leave without a number, and I had a nasty feeling the younger wouldn't be the better. So I said, probably 20s. He joked about me being legal. I made a face and tried to get his change even faster. He asked if I had a boyfriend. I was getting more and more nervous, so my answers started getting more sarcastic. I told him boys are trouble. He specifically talked about himself and said he'd treat me right. I handed him his receipt and told him to have a great night. He threw his hands in the air and was saying, "Don't be like that, I'll treat you right." I shut my window and said bye. He made a bit more of a fuss, but eventually drove forward. From his question about when I got off work, I believed he was watching the restaurant. I was shaky by this time and called my mom. She immediately drove up. I talked to my manager and I was a little unsure of the car's color, so he checked the camera for me. Shout out to my manager, he's the best. I continued at my window, watching for the old guy, but I didn't see him again. I left an hour early and gave my manager specific instructions to not place a girl at my window. These interactions are unfortunately what caused formerly happy and cheerful service workers to become sour and quiet. I think I'll be taking a couple days off. I had already had another job lined up and I'm excited to start it. I'm currently traveling sea with my 2 brothers. We just arrived in Saigon this morning. In the evening after dinner and a few beers, me and my 2 brothers decided to sit on a bench in Hao Dan Park and have a quick smoke. We were chatting away, sat on the bench, when I noticed a Vietnamese man repeatedly looking at us and walking in circles very near where we were sitting. At first I wasn't too concerned about him, however my spider senses were alerted. Then a minute or 2 later I noticed another Vietnamese man dressed as a Grab delivery driver acting suspicious and repeatedly looking at me and my brothers. The stalkers were both on the phone and I believe they were communicating with each other. Being in a foreign country, this alerted us heavily and we decided to leave. However, it was a good 600-meter walk to the park exit. As we were walking, I noticed both Vietnamese men had got on mopeds and were following us through the park, stopping behind trees and watching us. They then overtook us and sat at a bench further down the path waiting for us to cross their path. Being aware of this, we left the path and started walking on muddy grass as the crow flies to the nearest exit, avoiding the 2 men who were still watching us and clearly had bad intentions. We are 100 meters from the exit when my younger brother looks behind us to see one of the men sprinting towards us. My younger brother took stance, standing his ground, and asked the man what he wanted. The man's posture became very small and he began talking very quietly. Both me and my younger brother kept a good distance and told him to leave us alone as we walked backwards towards the exit, noticing the second assailant was also approaching us wearing motorcycle gear. However, my oldest brother decided instead of trying to get out of the situation, he got closer to the whispery Vietnamese man to hear what he was saying. Both me and my younger brother were yelling at him to get out of here, but he was being an idiot. It took the Vietnamese guy 5 seconds to win my oldest brother's trust. Then out of nowhere, when my older brother was leaning in very close trying to hear the whispery man, the guy grabbed my brother's crotch. He was shocked. I was ready to fight, expecting to be robbed or something, but the crotch grab was super unexpected and a real curveball. After the crotch grab, we started shouting and approached the men in an aggressive manner in a fighting stance. This slowed down their approach enough for us to make a dash for the park exit. The whole situation was unexpected and we didn't engage in any violence towards the men, just shouting at them. We walked out the exit into the busy city and walked around for a while, making sure we were not being followed before heading back to the hotel. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I was a sophomore in high school when this happened. It was during May and I stayed after school with half of my grade due to an award show. It was conducted by the literature department and our principal. Lee and my group actually won the best message award for our short film. Anyways, after the award show was over, me and my friends went back to our classroom to change into more comfortable clothes and to spend some more time together while we waited for our parents to come pick us up. Only 5 of us were in that classroom. As time went by, 3 of my friends left with their parents. It was only me and my best friend in the classroom. 30 minutes later, her dad called her to say they were waiting for her on the school's yard. By the way, our classroom is on the 3rd and highest floor. Together, we walked down the stairs to the ground floor. She asked me if I wanted to come outside with her and maybe wait in the waiting area next to the security. To this day, I curse myself for not saying yes. Instead, I said no and decided to wait in the waiting area inside our building. I could have went to my principal's office and wait with her since she liked spending time with me and talking to me. If you couldn't tell, I was a nerd and one of the top people in my grade. Anyways, in my school there were 5 couches in the waiting area for both students and parents. As I was walking to the waiting area, I saw a janitor but didn't think much of it. I put my bags down, but as I was about to sit down, I had a weird feeling like he was watching me and my moves. I felt too uneasy to sit down, so I stayed standing up while holding my bags in case I had to run or throw them to save myself. As a reflex, I raised my head and looked at him. He continued to look at me. It was as if we were in a race where neither of us were looking away. Believe me when I say I wanted to look away but couldn't. Maybe it was because I saw him as a threat, or maybe it was because I was too scared and uncomfortable to move. He had this weird smirk on his face, but since it was getting dark, I couldn't exactly tell. I don't know how long we looked at each other, but I broke out of my trance when I saw my classmate from the previous year walking outside the building. In a desperate attempt, I waved at her and she saw it. Then I remember her coming in and walking towards me saying, "I saw someone waving," to which I replied with, "Oh, it was me. I thought you left and was surprised to see you, so I waved at you. Actually, if you don't mind, can you walk me to the waiting area next to the security?" As we were walking outside, I looked back and saw the janitor still staring at me. I was wearing high heels, a short skirt, and a tight shirt, but it was an award show and we wanted to dress up. I don't think that these sort of stuff happen to women because of what they wear, but I do think he was staring at me because of my attire. At the waiting area next to the security, I was so anxious while waiting for my mom, thinking, what if he comes in here? Even when my mom came in, when I got in the car, I was shaking slightly and wasn't in the headspace to speak about anything. So I told my mom that we got an award, but that I was too tired to speak. Also, to anyone wondering, I only told this story to 2 females I used to work with outside of school. I never had the courage to tell my parents or anyone in my school. However, after this incident, I tried to not be alone at school and always have someone with me in case something like this were to happen again. One of the reasons I never told anyone was the fact that nothing physically abusive happened and I probably couldn't prove anything. This was a hard dose of reality for me since I realized that females weren't safe anywhere, not even in their high schools. Writing this makes me feel better in a way that I can finally let it out of my system. It was about 10 in the afternoon and I was staying at a hotel in downtown Chicago right by Lower Wecker Drive. I had just gotten an Uber Eats delivery because they weren't doing room service because of COVID. Potbellies, important later. I was listening to music, but I had my hood up because it was freezing. I was smoking and this guy walked up to me and asked for a few cigarettes. I gave him one and my lighter to use. Come on, you could give me more than that. I thought if I just gave him another cigarette he'd leave, so I gave him another one. I expected him to say thank you, give me my lighter back, and leave. He didn't do any of those things. He was standing right in front of me and I started to get anxious. I moved back and I'm essentially against the window for the area where you check in. He just kept standing there and then he noticed my bag of food. "Can I have some of your food?" I told him I was sorry, that it was just a sandwich and soup because my husband ordered food from a different restaurant. "Well, at least give me half the sandwich then." I apologized again and said no. Then he started getting closer to me. I realized I needed to get away, but he blocked me. "Do give my lighter back." I thought I needed to pretend I wasn't freaking out. I put out my cigarette and put it back in the pack. "I don't have any food and I could freeze to death. I'm sorry, you don't have food." I don't know what else to say. I didn't want to say, "Hey, you're wearing a really nice looking coat and fancy sneakers, so give me some of your food." That he was right up in my face and I was scared because he seemed to be getting more angry. "I'm sorry, I can't, please move." "Yes, you can." At this point, I was terrified he was going to hit me or something, so I banged on the window and the people at the check-in desk ignored me. He got really angry and started yelling incoherently. Then, like a miracle, my mom called and I answered answered, I started crying hysterically and I started saying, "Mom, thank God, oh my God, this guy won't leave me alone. My mom told me to do anything to get away." At that moment, the guy stepped back and looked around. There was no one around, but I took advantage of him being distracted and pushed past him and ran inside. I was crying so hard I could barely get words out. I was so scared, and I realized because I tried to get help and nothing happened. If my mom hadn't called, I don't know what would have happened. Later, I thought even if I gave him the soup, it would be like when I gave him a cigarette and it wasn't enough. I did go back down for a cigarette later, but I stayed by the revolving door. This woman was also smoking, and I told her what happened. She showed me her mace and said all women should have it. To give some context, I've been homeless with my mom and her emotional support animal for the last few months. When we first became homeless, it was my first year of college. Where I live, college is free for the first 2 years, and my college, after I gave them an explanation, gave me and my mom a hotel room for a few weeks. The hotel room was fine, nothing special, but was probably better than most considering it was like $170 per night. About 2 days into our stay, we went downstairs to do laundry, but the washers in the hotel was too much expensive for us. So I texted her and was waiting by it for her to pull the car up so we could go to a laundromat instead. While I was waiting, I was on my phone, so I didn't notice my mom pull up, and she yelled to me to hurry up and get in the car. While I grabbed the dog and my clothes, I noticed she was talking to the man 2 doors down from our room. Our room was on the 2nd floor, so I thought it was weird that she started a conversation from the car to someone upstairs, so when I got in the car, I asked her about it. She proceeded to tell me after she yelled at me to hurry up, he had responded to her that he'd be down in a minute. So she was explaining to him that she was talking to me. We both thought it was weird that he responded like that to her, but I brushed it off that maybe he was waiting for someone from Uber or something. That was until we got back to see his door slightly open and him staring out of it with just his face. I tried to brush it off again because I thought that maybe he was still waiting for an Uber or Lyft or something, because he had everything in his room turned off and it was still quite cold out being in the beginning of spring. I would see this man staring out of his room with all of his lights off periodically about half the time I left or was coming back to the room. My mom, who is a heavy smoker, would get scared by the man staring at her and would come back inside the room early. So throughout our stay, we tried our best to avoid the man if we could. If he opened his door, we went back inside. If we went outside or got back from somewhere and he was staring, we'd avoid eye contact. A little later that night, I went out to the car for something and saw a couple sitting on the stairs talking about something, but I didn't think much of it. Later that night, it was probably about 3 in the morning, I was gaming with my friends and my mom was up watching TV. We're both night owls, when all of a sudden our dog started barking at the door. We thought this was weird since she had never just barked randomly at the door, only really barking when she wanted food we were eating or when she wanted to play. I grabbed her and put her in my lap, petted her while I played to calm her down. Her barking at the door became something she did often during our stay there, and it was almost exclusively at night within the hours of 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. We didn't figure out what her barking was about till the end of our stay in the hotel. Our last day there, we saw that couple moving out of their room. Turned out they were next to us, and my mom got to talking with them while I was putting our stuff in the car. It turned out the couple was moving rooms because the man from 2 doors down was harassing the couple, knocking on their door and singing to the woman through the door late at night. Our dog was more than likely barking at the man whenever he approached our room, as one night we were awoken by what sounded like a knock before our dog started barking. But by the time I checked the door, there was no one there. He was probably trying to do a similar thing he did to that couple with us, and with him staring out the door, he was more than likely mentally unwell. And while I hope he gets the help he needs, I also hope he didn't do something potentially harmful to anyone else who ended up in the rooms next to him. I tend to go running and walk my dog anywhere between midnight and 5 in the morning. I vary it for safety. Also, my puppy is a new addition to my nightly routine as I've only had him for a year. I know as a young woman in her 20s it's not smart, but I've been doing it for quite some time. It's where I go to clear my head and feel safe, though it is ironically very unsafe, I suppose. I just moved to a new area, and though it should be safer than the inner city, I've been having enough odd things happen to make me scratch my head. Tonight, around 4:45 and 5 in the morning, as I'm walking my dog in the neighborhood to cross the intersection, a silver Toyota is very slowly driving up behind me. Before it passes, it pulls back and reverses. I assume it's someone parking or pulling into their driveway. At this point, I'd already crossed the street to avoid another oddly idling car, so even as I tried to rationalize it, I was on high alert. To backtrack, originally, I'd been walking on the left side and crossed to the right because the first car had pulled up, then been idling there for quite some time as my dog, and I slowly made our way up the street towards it. I always play it safe this early, late, so I crossed just in in case it was a weird person. As the Toyota reverses, a man steps out of the first car, which is now diagonally from me, looks at me, looks at my dog, locks his car, and heads across the street away from me. This was a T intersection for reference. I'm not sure if this other car is of relevance. However, as I'm paying attention to this, I still note the second car that had reversed into a spot in the street and hadn't moved. No one had gotten in or gotten out. I stay vigilant as there's usually not too much activity in the suburbs around this time unless it's the weekend and people are partying late. 2 cars on the same street. Same behavior was incredibly odd. I breathed a sigh of relief as first guy, who had looked at me several times at this point as he crossed the street and right before he got in, finally left into the apartment complex gate. Sometimes I wonder if I look suspicious too being out so late. I finally make it to the top of the T and go right, and there's only 1 block until a main road, then from there I can cross to my apartment. There's usually a few cars here and there at this time. I make it to the well-lit main street and relax. The second I let my guard down as if on quit, the silver Toyota pulls past and reverses towards me. Note that before I had it past just idled behind me, and now he was reversing in front of me. My gut clenches and I knew it was one of those moments. I go decisions. I hesitate. He's about 5 to 10 yards ahead. I considered walking past normally and running if things got weird, but decided to trust my gut and cross the street. Just as I check traffic to see if I can cross, he steps out. I consider running again. I see Noah coming, not a car in sight. It's a tanned, bald man holding a cigarette. It was particularly strange because rarely have I had people step out of their vehicle to try and do something to me. In my experience, if you ignore whoever is trying to lure you into their car and don't get close, they just drive off. It's why I avoid vehicles in general to not give a chance of contact. He circled all the way around the car to the sidewalk, looks at me, then just says, "Oh, I thought you needed a ride," as if he realized something. It was the way he said it, just like that, not a question. As I'm answering, he's already leaving the curb. No sir. Then he just went back to his driver's side, hops in and drives off. It was just strange. He said it like a statement and basically barely waited for my response. I wonder what he was planning to do and why he had second thoughts. I'll never stop my nighttime adventures, but one day I might not have any more luck left. My name is Slade. I'm 25, born and raised in Arizona. This literally just happened to me, so I decided to bring it here to all of you wonderful people this evening. I'm a huge stoner and don't drive. I decided to take a bus a few miles down to the dispensary. This was at about 8:30 in the afternoon. Wanted to get a new Indica card. Purple Punch, it's my favorite by far. Doubt it. Walked back towards the bus stop to go back home. As I walked closer to the bus bench, I noticed a guy sitting there. Didn't think much of it. I'm antisocial, so I always go into any social setting ready to be absolutely silent. However, I didn't get a chance this time, because as I'm sitting down he starts asking me something ... but I had my headphones on and couldn't quite hear what he said, so I took my headphones off and asked what was that. Then he responds, "Did you want to get your hair cut?" Well, staring at me ... with very wide eyes ... not blinking ... if I were a Betty man. I'd say he was on something. I definitely wasn't expecting that question, and I just awkwardly say, "Oh, I'm alright." I then noticed he was wearing an Arizona Cardinals uniform, and I just so happened to be an Arizona Cardinals fan. So since my entire socializing ability revolves around sports, I decided to ask, "Are you an Arizona Cardinals fan?" He then looks at me funny for a split second. "No, I just got this a few months ago," he says. I then ask, "So how long have you been cutting hair?" Without blinking, he answered, "Just picked it up a few months ago." "Who taught you how to cut hair?" I asked, even more sketched out at this point. His eyes shifted and then he says, "I learned on my own ... Come on man, let me touch you up in the back." Mind you, he was consistently pushing to cut my hair throughout this conversation. I'd even told him like I don't have any cash on me right now, indicating that like I couldn't even pay for this service even if I wanted a ... but he just answers with, "That's no problem. I got my clippers in my bag now. Come on." So I decided to just be real with the guy. "Listen, I'm real sorry. I just don't feel very comfortable getting haircuts from people I don't know ... and like at night and stuff. You feel me?" This dude never changed facial expressions this entire interaction. He finally goes, "True that." Continues to glare into my soul. I decided in that moment it was time to get out of there. Luckily this bus stop was right in front of our local gas station, so I just walked in there for a few minutes just to kill time, because unfortunately that bus wasn't showing up for another 17 minutes. I didn't want to stay long because I didn't want the employees to think I was stealing or something, so I waited only about 6 to 7 minutes, and literally as I'm walking out, there I see the haircut guy walking in, still staring at me. Luckily I walked past him and I just noped out of there to another bus stop down the street. Bus finally got there. I saw the dude at the back of the bus, but he didn't bother me anymore, and I made sure to keep my eyes the complete opposite of his direction the entire time. This happened almost 15 years ago when I was 7. My best friend's mom would babysit my brother and I before and after school. My mom would usually drop us off at our house around 6 a.m. in the morning. She would make us breakfast, and the three of us would walk to our elementary that was less than 10 minutes away. For preface, we would walk through an adjacent neighborhood, through this small wooded area that had an enclosed bridge, and that led us to the back of our elementary. The elementary sits back in a long tree line that runs about half a mile north and another mile south. Anyways, we're about to get to the turn where we walk into the tree line to the bridge and this guy comes cruising down the street. At first, I don't even think we noticed him considering how young we were, but right when he's about 10 feet away from us, he slows down to virtually 0 miles per hour. There was nothing that stood out about his appearance either. He was middle-aged, white male, very generic. Well, we all stare at the car and start walking super slowly. If we stop, he would stop. If we walk, he would slowly go. During this whole ordeal, he has a blank expression on his face. Not anger, no smirk, just this sinister deadness almost. This went on for probably 5 minutes because we were too scared he'd jump out of the car if we turned our backs on him, and I was mainly scared for my little brother. Finally, he speeds off and we run the rest of the way to school. Immediately go to the principal's office, and at this point we are bawling. We gave them our version of the story, his description, and whatever else a 7-year-old is actually capable of giving. They take action by calling the cops and our parents. The cops come and we explain where it happened in the story again. Then our parents ended up taking us out of school. From then on, we weren't allowed to walk to school anymore and our babysitter would take us. The reason this ended up being so creepy is because apparently there had been reports around that time of a guy who would sit under the bridge we walked over right by the school and watch people. They didn't know if he was homeless or if it was this other guy who we encountered. They never caught the guy and we never saw him again. One night my mom asked me to throw out the trash. I live in a tiny residential complex meaning 6 to 7 small buildings together bounded by a common walls and fencing. It also has 2 small parks in it, so my area is pretty safe. Not a lot of people enter here because it's a bit secluded. That night not a lot of people were present and I was going towards the garbage can which was right outside the complex. It was dark when I first noticed this guy. We made eye contact and I could tell he was struggling a little to find the address. I just ignored him and threw the trash into the can. While returning, he was still there in the darkest corner and again I eyed him suspiciously. I really like to help people with addresses. So he called me towards him and said he lost his job in COVID and now has to do this but is not very good at directions. I still was standing at a safe distance because I found this guy suspicious. I asked him where he wanted to go and he answered a location opposite to where I live. I asked to use Google but then he took out his phone and said, "This is my company phone, I don't know how to use it, please tell me how to." I just told him to type the address and well he already knew how to use the Google Maps because the address was already typed in, but still kept asking me how to. I didn't realize that, but he was trying to get me closer to his bike. I was cautious, so I took the phone from his hand and started the maps and handed it to him. He was still asking obvious questions, but I already started walking away. Then he started saying thanks in a very sweet voice that gave me the chills. He was complimenting me how sweet of a girl I am. I waited before going to my building in case he was following me. You might think the interaction I had with him wasn't that creepy, but here's the deal. After a few days, I heard a similar story of the delivery guy asking for the same address from my friend, but the creepy part was he gave her the phone and started jacking it in front of her. He even threw a used tissue on her feet while wiping his kids with the tissue in front of her and then trying to touch her. I then heard the same story from another friend, but her story was even worse. She met the same person as well in our local area doing all of the same stuff and jacking it in front of her. He somehow got her number and found her house. He called her and told her that he knew where she lives and how he likes her and all. Turns out a lot of girls of my age group saw and helped this guy and saw him pulling out his thing in front of them and jacking it. I was the only lucky person to not witness it. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. When I was little, I lived in an apartment complex that consisted of 2 buildings with a slight gap in between them. It was only about 50 feet, so I'd often walk by myself to go visit my mom's best friend in the other building. The apartments were surrounded by thick woods that had blackberry brambles so thick you couldn't stick your hand in without getting torn up by thorns. One afternoon, I went to my mother's best friend's apartment to deliver Girl Scout cookies and stayed later than I meant to because I was fascinated by her aquariums. It had started to get dark by the time I was leaving, but I wasn't scared because the buildings were so close. I had taken about 10 steps when my inner voice started screaming. I'm older now, so I recognized what it was, but at the time it was like being overwhelmed with a feeling in my gut. I looked into the woods across the parking lot and saw the intense red glow from someone taking a drag on a cigarette. I turned back towards my apartment, trying to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but then I heard the sound of something large moving in the woods. I turned my head for just a moment and there was a gaunt, scary looking man starting to run at me. I took off, screaming bloody murder, knowing I was less than 50 feet away from from the safety of my apartment. I could hear his feet slopping the pavement behind me and he was gaining on me. I was nearly on my porch steps when my uncle, who lived next door, opened his door to see why I was screaming bloody murder. I collapsed into his arms screaming about the man chasing me from the woods, but by the time Mike opened his door, the man was gone. At first they didn't believe me because there had been nobody there, but I was so hysterical they decided to check it out. They noticed an area that had been disturbed in the blackberry brambles, but they were so thick, Mike had to use his machete to cut through them. About 2 feet into the area of the disturbance, there was a small clearing with a pile of cigarette butts where the man had been standing, watching and waiting for me. The man chasing me had disappeared, so they think he ran between the buildings when I started to get close to my apartment door. So about a week after this incident, my mother's boyfriend and I were riding dirt bikes through the woods by our apartment. There was a retainer pond that we liked to fish at, so we were headed out that day to see if we could catch anything. We discovered a campsite on the trail that hadn't been there a few weeks prior, and Russ decided to check it out. It was just a tent, cooler, a fire pit, and trash strewn everywhere. The trash part really bugged Russ because we believe in the leave it better than you found it principle, and I could tell he was pissed. As we approached the tent, he announced himself to see if anyone was there, and when they didn't respond, he pulled back the zipper of the tent. After looking inside for a moment, he ordered me to back up, but the damage had already been done since I had gotten a clear look at what was in the tent. Attached to the walls and littering the floor was some of the most brutal and sadistic adult magazine content anyone could imagine. And the worst part of it was the graffiti that had been added after the fact. Most of the models had their eyes scratched out, lines across their throat like they'd been cut, and there was blood drawn dripping out of their orifices. It's been over 30 years since this happened, and the image is still splashed right upon my memory. There was a torn sleeping pad, and the pad looked like it had a substantial stain that could have been blood. Russ stood there in silence for a minute, then told me to get on my bike because we were going home. When we got home, he called the sheriff, then led them out to the torture tent in the woods. They destroyed the campsite, and it was never spoken of again. I never put 2 and 2 together as a child, but as I got older, when I thought about it, I realized how unbelievably lucky I am. So this happened about 7 months ago. I was visiting San Diego for job interviews and staying at my favorite hotel in Sorrento Mesa. For a background, I'm a 40-year-old man and a pretty big guy. I'm 6'1" and a former club bouncer. Now, onto the weirdness. On my 3rd night, I was up pretty late after hanging out with some old friends after my interviews. I got back to the hotel around 2 in the morning with some Sonny's donuts. After eating a few, drinking a few more, and watching South Park, I decided to have a smoke before going to bed. This made it now around 3 in the morning. So I go downstairs, walk out front to the smoking area by the fountain, but there's another couple who are also staying at the hotel already there. I didn't want to impose, so I decided to just walk around the outside parts of the hotel while I smoked. I walked around the pool, the barbecue area, the basketball courts, then started back for the side door. As I did, a black sedan drove up alongside me and stopped. The window rolled down, and a tiny Asian woman asked if I knew how to get out of the parking lot and back to the street. Now, from where we were when she asked me, this was literally in a straight line about 150 feet in front of her, so I thought she was drunk or just blind. So I just politely said yes, just keep going straight, and turned left at the tree. She then asked me if I could get in the car and show her. Now, again, I'm a former club bouncer. There was absolutely no intimidation factor, but for some reason, I instantly felt uneasy. Again, it was literally right in front of her. She could see the road. Also, the windows were all tinted far more than they should have been, and I honestly couldn't tell if anyone else was in the car. I used the smoking as an excuse to not get in the car, but she said she didn't mind and gave me a very creepy smile. I politely declined and again pointed out that the road was literally right there, so I'd just be walking back in 5 seconds anyway. She again asked if I would get in and show her. This was feeling like a weird kid / ice cream truck situation. I mean guys, how often do decently good looking women just drive up and ask you to get in their car at 3 in the morning in a hotel parking lot? Nothing about it was right. Again, I politely declined as I finished my smoke and was luckily already standing right at the hotel side door when all this started, so I just went in. The woman just drove off as she rolled up the window right exactly to the exit she just asked me to show her to. So I told the front desk about it and they said they'd keep an eye out, but I'm quite sure nothing was ever done or came of it. Just one of those things that really makes me wonder, why did she want me in the car so badly for? It had to be some kind of scam. I just wonder exactly how much danger I was in. I live in Sacramento, California, where every summer we have the state fair. I was in my late teens and my friend and I decided to check out the fair together. Parking was $10 and we were cheap and decided to park across the street. Well, a few streets deep in from across the street because a lot of people had the same idea. The fair was typical fair stuff and we had fun. It was almost 10 in the afternoon and we decided to get out of there. The fair was lit up with lights and chaos, but the further we got away from it and the deeper we got into the back streets across the street from the fair, the darker it got and the less people you saw. My friend faced me and said maybe I should get my mace out just in case, and we both laughed because both of our families at different points had given us mace to stay safe, but because we were young and dumb we thought we were invincible. My friend drove, so she was digging in her purse looking for her keys and slowed down while doing so, and I was a few feet ahead of her. At that moment the fair fireworks started popping off in the sky and I turned around to look. For several seconds it was walking backward while doing so. I turned around and at the moment as I was passing a creepy gray van, a man popped out behind it and grabbed me forcefully with both arms around me and started picking me up. Immediately my friend ran up and sprayed mace in his face, and she was able to do so because the mace happened to be attached to her keychain which she just got out of her purse. She accidentally got some mace in my eyes and it hurt, but even though my eyes were burning, I vividly remember opening them up enough to see that there was this cloud of mace floating in front of the guy's eyes as they were wide open as if the mace did not affect him at all. Then he said calmly in a creepy voice, "I was just looking at her." We both screamed bloody murder and he let me go and we ran all the way to her car and got the heck out of Dodge. The weird thing is we didn't even go straight to the police that night because I wasn't sure if that was enough of an offense to do so, which I am in my 40s now and know that it is. I should have gone straight to the police then. I tried calling the non-emergency line the next day to report it as I was suffering from red and swollen eyes from the mace and I was being placed on hold and not being taken seriously, so I eventually let it go and moved on with my life. A week later I heard in the news that there was a man wanted by police that lingered around the American River trails who was abducting women and taking them into his van and assaulting them. I always wondered what would have happened if my friend wasn't there. Would I even be here? I have never been so thankful to be maced in the face. Ladies ... even men carry mace or some type of self-defense tool. It's an unpredictable, scary place out there sometimes. This happened almost 10 years ago when I was about 18. I wanted to go pick up some groceries at our local Walmart. It was around 11 in the afternoon at night and I just got off work. I usually have no problem going anywhere by myself, but on this specific night my inner self was telling me to invite my friend to tag along. I am roughly 5 feet tall, female, and 105 pounds, but I don't get spooked too easily and always carry pepper spray with me. Anyways, I call my friend to ask if she'll accompany me and I go and pick her up. We walk into the produce side of Walmart and almost right away I noticed this man staring at us very intently. He was around 5'5", kind of heavy, had a Hawaiian shirt on, and looked of Hawaiian decent. So we're over by the fresh produce and I am keeping my eye on him as he pretends to be looking at bread but clearly keeps putting things back. I turn my back for a second to grab something, then I hear a male's voice ask, "Hey, do you guys know of anywhere I can get food this late?" For more background information, I lived in a city of about 50,000 people. Right across from this Walmart was an Applebee's, a McDonald's a quarter mile up the road, and other various places to get food. Plus, we were in the middle of a Walmart, so I don't beat around the bush and flatly tell him about a couple restaurants around where we were. He then asks, "Well, what's fun to do around here?" It's late at night, so nothing really to do except maybe go to Applebee's or a local bar. I tell him Applebee's is open and we have bars downtown, but that's all I am aware of. He proceeds to ask what we're doing when we leave and I tell him we have to leave now. He apologizes and says he didn't mean to be creepy, so we walk away and are looking for the frozen aisle when I spot him on the opposite side walking by. I tell my friend I had a bad feeling about him since we walked in and wanted to test out if he was following us. We walk a few more aisles and sure enough he is on the other end nonchalantly walking by pretending not to see us. I backtrack a couple of aisles to get something and he walks up pretending to look at things. I finally ask if I can help him with something. I think I threw him off guard by being so direct because he stutters and asks what aisle the milk or something is in. I tell him and we leave to check out. Well, wouldn't you know, he's in the checkout right next to us with a pack of gum, no milk or whatever else he was looking at. He finishes first and watches us as he leaves the store. Me thinking he's gone by now tells my friend let's just run to the car. So we run out to the car, looking around to make sure we don't see him. Now here's the super creepy part. As I am leaving the parking lot, we spot him sitting on the trunk of his car watching people leave Walmart. I drive by to get his license plate number. He sees us and rushes into his car. I speed off as quickly as possible so he doesn't see where I went. I then call the cops and tell them what happened and relayed the license plate to them. So creepy Hawaiian shirt guy who was supposedly looking for a place to eat while in the middle of Walmart. Please let's never meet again. This happened about a month ago. For a bit of background, me, my cousin, and my brother took classes over the summer at a local college. Me and my cousin took a biology class, while my brother took a precalculus class. My brother's class ends later than our class, giving us a 2-hour window where we'd sit around the college to wait for him. During the encounter, we were waiting for him at the cafeteria, passing the time. After a while, this woman in a wheelchair shows up in front of some vending machines a couple feet in front of us. I paid it no mind, but she sat in front of that vending machine for 10 minutes, 15 minutes and started to play loud music. It startled me, and so I looked up at her. She then looked at us and asked, "Do any of you boys have 10 cents I could use for the vending machine?" I had 2 $5 bills in my pocket in case I needed some food, so I gave her a 5 and I got handed back my change. Then she asked for another favor. This time it was to bring her to a parking lot near the football stadium where her ride would be waiting. She said she had never been there and needed some guidance. I figured there was no harm in helping her, so I took the handles, but she immediately stopped me and asked for my cousin instead. I was being pretty oblivious during this entire encounter, so I didn't even realize how strange that request was and didn't notice many of the strange things she did until later. And I also want to clarify that she was able to move on her own just fine, so the request for a push at all was strange too. And as my cousin was pushing her, she kept looking back at me and giving an uncanny smile, like it was meant to be a friendly smile, but it came off more like she had some sort of malicious intent. After we arrived, she looks at us and asks, "Could you two stay with me until my ride comes?" Still giving us the smile, but we reluctantly agreed. You know, once I had to go back and forth from here and the other parking lot. It was so annoying, she recalls as we wait. Me and my cousin shuffled at this because we found this extremely unsettling. This was because it meant she lied to us about not knowing where she was going. Even stranger, she tells me about how she loves to smash glass bottles to tame her anger ... like the glass bottles she had in her hands at that moment. I hadn't caught onto the strangeness yet, but my cousin was unnerved. He was trying to discreetly point out that no cameras were around me and that not many people were around, but I didn't catch any of it. At some points while we were waiting, this one car would keep circling the parking lot too. We asked if it was her ride, but she told us that her ride was a van. At that time, our ride came, so we apologized and left. We've told many other people about this story and they all agreed that she was acting pretty strange. Later I realized how it seemed like she was trying hard to be friendly, how anxious she seemed, and how many of the things she said didn't match up and seemed off. The main thing that fueled me seeing this as odd was the fact that according to my cousin and his sibling, there was an email sent out warning people about a potential human trafficking scheme caught on campus. I couldn't confirm the validity of it because me and my brother aren't actually enrolled into the school and therefore don't get messages about anything going on around campus, but nevertheless, it's caused me to relook what happened through that lens. Shortly after I turned 18, back in the early 2000s, I got a job at the local movie rental place to help pay for my college. I worked there for about 2 years and during that time had been promoted to hold keys to the store and open and close the registers. This also meant that I was occasionally working by myself for short periods of time. One such morning, I was going through the morning procedures and putting returned movies back on the shelves. I was accustomed to greeting every customer no matter what, not only as a friendly gesture but as a part of the loss prevention protocol. Anyway, this particular morning I was taking the movie cart around and reshelving the movies and I heard the door ding on the other side of the store, so I greet whoever it is with my voice raised high. "How are you today?" Normally, they would give a reply back, but I didn't get one this time, so I'm looking between the shelves for the person that came in and I see a middle-aged, baldy man looking around. He seemed normal at first but didn't really say anything when I asked him the next 2 times if he needed help. He pretty much ignored me, so I went about my business while keeping my eye on him. He was starting to make me nervous because he wasn't really looking at anything, just kind of making it look like he was looking at what was in front of him when his attention was focused elsewhere, seemingly at the ceiling. So I decided to give it one more try to let him know that I'm wondering what he's doing. "Can I help you find anything?" I asked as I walked past him to put a movie away. At this point, he'd been in the store nearly 20 minutes. He responded in such a way that made it clear that there was something off in his mind. Facing me but with his eyes averted from my face, he says in a startlingly loud drawling voice, "So, you know, just browsing." So I politely said, "Okay, just let me know if I can help you with anything," and went about my duties. He left shortly after this, at which point I let out a sigh of relief. A few days went by and I was opening by myself again. I went to start shelving the movies when the door dinged, and I again turned to greet whoever it was when I saw the same guy beelining it straight at me. I kind of panicked a little but stood my ground, and when he got right up to me, seriously so close I leaned back away from him. He lifted an open can of nuts and offered cashew. "Oh no, thank you," I said. I asked if I could help him find anything and he didn't answer, and he went to the start of the wall where the movies that started with it were located. which was just a few feet to the left of where I was putting up the B or C movies. He was very obviously pretending to look at movie boxes by picking them up and flipping them over and then putting them back. He continued this and shuffled along behind me as I moved down the wall. After a few minutes of this, I got uncomfortable and took the cart to the front counter, at which point he left the store. A few customers came and went, and I went back to shelving the movies. When I was around the M area of the movie wall, cashier guy came back and continued his pretend perusal of the movie boxes, always just a few feet to left of me. So in the next area of the store, there were shelves that went a bit higher than the rest, and on the very top shelf, there were softcore movies. There was also a back room that contained the hard stuff, but I only went in that room one time right before I quit just to see what it was like. Anyway, I was shelving the movies with cashier guy near me, not saying anything to me until I get to softcore section. He reached for one of the boxes at the top, which made me shudder, and says to me in his loud, strange voice, "I bet you have one of those big football player boyfriends." Thoroughly creeped out and disgusted, I go straight to the front counter and another male customer walks in. This guy finds what he's looking for and goes to the register. I whispered to this guy that there was a man bothering me and I asked if he would stay until the guy leaves. He shrugged and just kinda stood by the door awkwardly until cashier guy walked out. I thanked the guy and he left. I went back to the shelves and not 5 minutes later, cashier guy came back and again tried to engage me in an awkward conversation. I went to the front counter and called my mom. She and my sister were out getting lunch, so I told her what was going on and they brought me something to eat. As soon as I picked up the phone, he left the store. He didn't come back that day. Next door to the movie place was an electronics store that was run by a very nice and talkative man. I never spoke to his wife, but I knew English wasn't her first language. He would come over and use our shrink wrap machine and talk and make us laugh. One evening after my encounter with the strange man, the nice guy from the store came in more serious than normal and warned us about a man that had come in while his wife was working alone and he was out getting food. The man was walking around picking things up and putting them back down in such a way that made him uncomfortable. I knew who it was right away. After a while, the nice guy from the store's wife asked if he was going to purchase something, and he picked up a random house phone and asked how much it was. She told him, and he got upset at the price. He took it to the counter anyway, and when she rang him up, he tried to pay with a crumpled up check from his pocket. She refused to accept the check and he got angry, so she called her husband to come back and handle the situation. Her husband told the man that the check was suspicious and they normally wouldn't accept it as payment. He understood that there was something off with this guy and agreed to accept the check on a condition that the man give a phone number where he could be reached. He told him that if the check bounced, he was going to call him and the man would have to cover the cost of it all. The man agreed, but he knew it was a bad deal all the way around. He said that after the man left the store, he went and stood in the parking lot and just stared up at the sky for about 10 minutes. I figured by his description that it was the same man who had been bothering me. One day not long after the above, I go to the movie store to pick up my paycheck and the girl working tells me some man came in asking about me. She said he seemed off, and she said she knew he was talking about me when he referenced my curly hair. He gave me the creeps, but I personally never saw the guy again. I found out why when a few days later the guy who owned the other store came in saying that, unsurprisingly, the check the man had paid with bounced. He called the number the man gave him a few times and talked to the man on the phone. Each time getting nowhere in the conversation, he did a pretty good impersonation of the startlingly loud drawling voice. "Oh yeah, okay." Anyway, he called one more time and a woman answered. When he explained the situation, the woman said, "I'm his mother, he's not here anymore, I had him committed, and the hospital picked him up this morning." The town I lived in could not even be called that. It was a settlement of perhaps 24 acreages clustered together near a lake and boasted just an elementary school with grades kindergarten through grade 5, and no stores. On this particular day, I was at that school playground alone, swinging and pondering life. None of my friends were around, but the solitude never bothered me. I was perfectly content, swinging and daydreaming as I often did. That is when I noticed the van behind me. It was your classic creepy van. Older, large and boxy, white generic van. And what struck me as odd was how slow the van was driving. It could not have been driving faster than 10 miles per hour. Still swinging, I craned my neck and watched this van slowly creep along and then out of my line of vision. I thought that was the end of it when, a few minutes later, along comes the van again, ever slow, and this time, driving on the road in front of the park the best way to vision where I was is that of a square. Road wraps completely around the playground, which is situated on a slight hill. I watched the van creep along, turn left and out of sight and back behind me it came creeping along, ever slow and present. As I watched it it disappear for the second time, I recalled an incident that took place just 2 months prior. In the nearby town where I was attending school, a few kids in the grade below mine had been approached by a man as they walked home from school, who offered them candy. He had allegedly been driving a white van. School officials had urged us to stay very vigilant. I began to run across the field, determined to beat the van to that road. Don't panic, I told myself, it's probably not the same guy. And that is when the idea hit me. Oh, the idiotic, dangerously foolish idea hit me. I was going to hide myself in a nearby bush, and as the van crept by, I would obtain its license plate and give it to the police. It would be to us, a 12-year-old self. What were you thinking? I was thinking, because I did just that. I hid in the bushes, and I waited, and waited. I waited to no avail, and as I waited, the logical part of my brain kicked in. This was an extremely lonely, well-concealed spot of land. Maybe, just maybe, trying to obtain this license plate was not a smart idea. I suddenly wanted very much not to be in that isolated bush. Abandoning my attempts at being Nancy Drew, I began the journey home with a sense of urgency. As I walked along the road, a dirt pavement, I took in my surroundings and saw no van. Perhaps it had left the area. I thought hopefully. I turned right, away from the school and playground, and began to walk towards my house. Safety lay just beyond the hairpin turn of a road that I was jaunting along. A loud screeching of tires came into my ear canal. I turned slightly and saw it, the white van. Where it came from, I did not know. What I did know was that I was extremely isolated and that it was speeding towards me. That is when the lizard brain took over. I no longer thought. I read. I was no longer a whole being. My sole purpose was to run. I can still feel my sweaty feet sliding around in my sandals, still see my pink skirt frantically trying to keep up with still hear those squealing tires. I flung myself down the hill. At the foot of it lay my house, my lifeline. Out of the corner of my eye I saw the van for the last time. It was haphazardly turning left and away from me. The next thing I knew, I was standing at the family deep freeze, a red freezy in my hand. Vaguely I heard a faint voice miles away. I was breathing heavily, hyperventilating really. What happened? What happened? My dad's face was white as a ghost. A hardened man. He looked truly afraid. I spat out the story and burst into tears. My dad hugged me. You're safe, he assured me. Then he left, determined to find this van. As he was gone, I run throughout the house, locking the doors when Dad returned. He told me he had seen no van. It had disappeared into the afternoon sun. Dad phoned the police anyway, and he stressed the similarities between what happened to me to the reports of what happened to my schoolmates. Unfortunately, the police never came to talk me. I don't think they really cared. I stayed in the house for the next few days, afraid to venture out. As the days wore on, I regained my confidence to return to the park, and life went on. I never did see that van again. I still shudder to think about what may have happened all those years ago if I had let that van catch up to me. The people in this story are me, a family of 4 consisting of a mother, father, toddler, and baby. And, of course, our guest of honor, the creep. For context, I am a 17-year-old female. I was born and raised in Canada with a pretty sheltered life as my mother is very overprotective. But up until this point, I have never dealt with harassment before. For the summer I am visiting my godmother in Italy. This is my first time leaving Canada. Since she works during the weekdays, I travel about on my own around Italy. For this story, I took a ferry to Ischia, a small island in Napoli, to tour around. When I first arrived on the island, I made the plan to head to a small scenic park not too far from the port so I could plan my day. It was around 3 in the afternoon when I was at the park. Now the park itself made its way into a semi-forested area. The pathways were covered by trees and bushes alike, so it's easy to get lost in there, at least for me. It was also pretty desolate at the time and gone from the public eye. I was sitting on the bench next to a playground for children, decked out with swings and slides. There was a family a little away from me playing at the playground. The playground resides in a little circle-like clearing in the park. On opposite sides of the clearing are the pathways that take you around the park. The paths have trees making a tunnel-like path, so it can be hard to see down it unless you are directly in front of it. From where I was sitting on the bench, which was near the north pathway, I could directly see down the south pathway. Now I was sitting at this bench for a while, mind you, as Italy is pretty hot and I'm not used to the heat. My head was down looking at my phone, so I wasn't exactly paying attention to the outside world, but I would look up periodically to watch the family play. It was around now 4 in the afternoon, which was nearing when I had to leave to catch my ferry back. As I was about to pack up, I look up from my phone and see a guy standing in the path across from me, the south pathway. Now I wear glasses. My eyesight isn't that good, so I couldn't really make out what this guy was standing there for at first glance. I also didn't want it to be known that I had my eyes on him, so I would try to get a better look from my peripherals. After a minute of watching this guy and trying to figure out why he was staring at me, I come to a horrifying conclusion. conclusion. To put it lightly, this guy was jacking off in public while watching me. It was light out and a literal family was not even 10 feet away from me. This was the first time I've ever experienced anything like this, so I was scared. Let me make myself clear, I look like a teenager. I have acne and a baby face, so it is very clear I am underage. As I was sitting there panicking about what to do, I see this guy move side to side on the path to get a better look at me. The creep looked unassuming, with some gray basketball shorts, a black graphic shirt, and a balding head. From what I could tell, he was around his early 30s. I don't speak much Italian, and with how frazzled I was from this all, I could not utter a cohesive sentence. After sitting on the bench for another minute trying to calm down and think clearly, I pull out my translator app and type in a message to translate to Italian. Now, to not alert this creep that I knew what he was doing, I stood up casually and began to make my way to the mother of the family who was with her young baby at the time. The father and the toddler I believe were gone playing off a little farther in the trees as I could not see them. While shaking with nerves, I approached the mother and hold up my phone with the message on it without a word. Now, from where the mother was, you could not see down the path, so she was none the wiser about what was happening. Roughly, my translated message went along the line of, "Hello, sorry I do not speak much Italian, but I am in need of help. There is a creepy guy on the path over there watching me and I am scared." Now I know I probably should have made my situation more clear in the message, but I was freaking out and I didn't know how well my English would translate into Italian, so I kept it short. After the mother read the message, she got a concerned look on her face and asked me to show her where this guy was. Now we walked like 5 feet over to where the path begins to find the guy and he's gone. I assume he saw me walking towards the mother. Thankfully, I came to find out the mother speaks a little English, so I was able to communicate roughly what the creep was doing. Since she was with a baby, I didn't want her to go after the creep, but she was mad enough to attempt. Eventually, she told me her husband would be back soon and he spoke more fluently. Once he came back, I re-explained what happened and asked if I could follow them out of the park to a public area so I would not be left alone and vulnerable. While they were packing up their belongings, I called my godmother and gave her a brief rundown of the situation and that I'll be making my way back to the ferry. Now I would love to say this is where my tale ends without any more troubles, but sadly that was not how it went. After me and the family left the playground area, we made our way to the opposite path from where the creep was to where I assumed was the exit to the park into the main road. While walking, the mother tried to comfort me, assuring the guy wouldn't follow me as he left as soon as he got a clue that I caught on. I thought differently as I could see this guy very clearly from where I was sitting and was not subtle about his staring. After walking a bit more throughout the path to the exit, I spot a familiar looking man walking back to the playground. Once I made eye contact with him, I immediately knew it was the creep from before, walking casually like nothing was wrong. Once he spotted me walking with the family, he quickly made a turn onto a path that diverged from the main one. This creep was circling back to find me, assuming that I stayed at the playground or was walking alone to the exit. I leaned over to the mother and quickly tell her that it was the same guy. Unfortunately, the path that the guy took to avoid us was the same one we needed to take to get to the exit. This dumb creep cornered himself without any way to leave except to pass by us. The father at that point had the baby in his arms and the toddler following closely behind him. The mother in a rage followed shortly after, the creep cussing him out in a mix of English, Italian, and Spanish. This creep walked sheepishly off with his head tucked, pretending he could not hear the lady yelling at him. Finally, after the angry mother stopped following the man, we made it to the exit of the park. I thanked them profusely and bid my farewells and made my way down to the port. That family saved me from a dangerous situation and I could not be more thankful for their comfort and protection. I often think about what could have happened had I left the park on my own, knowing this guy would have circled back for me. So for my first harassment experience, I give the rating -1 out of 5 stars, would not recommend. So to the creepy guy in the park, let's not meet ever again. At the time of this happening, a 23-year-old female, was 19 and homeless in a big city. I just recently moved to that city and was on my way back to the shelter from the public library. I was taking a shortcut through an alley wide enough for a car to go through, and I noticed an old beat-up looking car come into the alley and driving slowly behind me. I figured they probably just didn't feel like they had enough room to pass me, so I picked up the pace and crossed the street. They drove to the same side of the street that I was on and kept pace with me. There was just one guy in the vehicle, looked to be in his mid-20s and Hispanic. He rolled down his window and said, "Hey, are you okay? How old are you?" I looked like I was about 14, and I'm pretty short, so I got that question a lot. I just responded, "I'm fine, and I'm not a minor if that's what you're asking." He asked me if I needed a ride, and I politely declined. Then he starts telling me he's just really concerned and wanted to talk, really insistently and smiling through almost this entire interaction. I asked him why we couldn't just talk on the street where we were, and he dodges the question and again asks me if I'm sure that I don't want to ride. My gut was telling me he had had bad intentions, and if I were as young as I looked, I might have fallen for it. Instead, I looked around me to make sure I wasn't going to get ambushed and walked up to his passenger window. I told him in the most threatening voice I could muster, "I know you don't really want to talk. I'm sure you have worse things in mind, and I've memorized your license plates and I'm going straight to the police station. I better not ever see you again." I never saw him again. Unfortunately though, I forgot to write down his plates and the shelter curfew was going into effect soon and I didn't have time to file a report at the station. It didn't occur to me to call the non-emergency number. I also purchased as large of a knife as I legally could for self-defense. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. When I first moved to the city for my job, I was excited. The tall buildings, the constant hum of activity, and the promise of new experiences were alluring. I found a cozy apartment on the 15th floor of a high-rise, offering a panoramic view of the cityscape. Little did I know, this view would become the backdrop of my nightmare. It started innocuously enough. I began receiving small gifts at my doorstep, a bouquet of flowers, a box of chocolates, and sometimes handwritten notes. The notes were always unsigned, filled with compliments about my appearance or what I had worn that day. Initially, I thought it might be a secret admirer or a neighbor trying to be friendly, but as days turned into weeks, the gifts became more personal. A scarf in my favorite color, a book by an author I loved, and even a CD of a band I had casually mentioned liking to a colleague. Concerned, I mentioned this to my friend, Lisa, who lived a few blocks away. She suggested it might be someone from work or a friend playing a prolonged prank. To ease my mind, she offered to stay over for a few days. One evening, as we were watching a movie, Lisa pointed to a building opposite mine. "Do you know that from here, if someone had a good enough telescope, they could see right into your apartment?" I looked out, realizing that my large windows, which I loved for the sunlight they let in, also made my life visible to anyone interested in watching. A shiver ran down my spine. The next day, I invested in curtains. But the gifts didn't stop. They became more frequent, and the notes more intimate, detailing things I had done in the privacy of my home. "I loved how you danced in your living room last night," one read. Another said, "The spaghetti you cooked looked delicious." I reported this to the police, but without any tangible evidence or threat, they couldn't do much. They advised me to keep a record of everything I received and to install security cameras. The cameras were my next step. I installed them inside and outside my apartment. For a week, nothing unusual happened. But then, one morning, I found a note on my doorstep. "Cameras won't help you see me, but I can always see you." Terrified, I reviewed the footage, and there it was. In the middle of the night, a figure in a hooded mask, leaving the note at my door. The cameras inside my apartment showed nothing. This person had never entered, yet they knew everything I did. Lisa suggested I stay with her for a while. Gratefully, I accepted. A few days turned into weeks, and during this time, no gifts or notes appeared at my apartment. I started to relax, thinking maybe my unseen observer had lost interest. One evening, as Lisa and I returned to her place after dinner, we found her door slightly ajar. Cautiously, we entered. In the middle of her living room was a pile of photographs. They were all of me, taken from a distance, capturing my daily routines. But the most chilling were the ones taken inside Lisa's apartment, showing me sleeping, cooking, or chatting with her. The realization hit hard. This person hadn't lost interest. They had merely shifted their location. They had been watching me from somewhere close, even at Lisa's place. The police were involved again, and this time they took it more seriously. They started by investigating the building I had initially spotted from my apartment. On the topmost floor, in a rented storage room, they found what could only be described as a shrine dedicated to me. Photographs, personal items I had discarded, and a logbook detailing my daily activities. The tenant renting the space was a man named Eric, a freelance photographer. He had become infatuated with me from afar and had started his silent observation. The police arrested him, and he confessed to stalking me for months. He claimed he loved me and believed we were meant to be together. The trial was swift, and Eric was sentenced to several years in prison and mandatory therapy. I moved out of the city, seeking solace in a quieter, more private place. After the trial, I found it hard to return to any semblance of normalcy. The city, once a symbol of opportunity and excitement, now felt like a vast expanse of potential threats. Every stranger's glance felt like a piercing gaze, every unexpected noise a potential danger. I decided to move to a smaller town, hoping the change of scenery would help me heal. The town I chose was the polar opposite of the city, nestled in the mountains. It was a place where everyone greeted each other by name and where community events were the highlight of the week. My new home was a cottage on the outskirts, surrounded by trees and overlooking a serene lake. The first few months were peaceful. The natural beauty of the place and the kindness of the locals were therapeutic. I took up gardening, spent hours reading by the lake, and even adopted a dog, Max, who quickly became my loyal companion. However, the scars of my past experience ran deep. I invested in a state-of-the-art security system for my cottage and often found myself double-checking locks and broken windows. Nighttime was especially challenging. Every rustle outside, every creak of the wooden floorboards would send my heart racing. One evening, as I was settling into bed, Max began to growl, his gaze fixed on the window. I tried to calm him down, thinking he might have seen a squirrel or some other animal, but his growling intensified, turning into barks. Concerned, I approached the window and peered out. To my horror, I saw a silhouette of a man standing at the edge of the woods, his figure illuminated by the moonlight. He was just standing there, staring at my house. Panic surged through me, memories of Eric and his relentless stalking flooding back. I immediately called the local sheriff's department. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived, their sirens piercing the otherwise silent night. The officers conducted a thorough search of the area but found no one. They took my statement and promised to increase patrols around my property. The next morning, I found a single photograph on my doorstep. It was a picture of me taken from a distance while I was gardening. On the back, written in a familiar handwriting, were the words, "New place, same us." I handed the photograph to the police. They confirmed my worst fears. Eric had been released on parole for good behavior and had somehow managed to track me down. The police immediately issued a warrant for his arrest and provided me with round-the-clock protection. Days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of Eric, but the fear was ever present, the feeling of being watched never leaving me. One evening, as the storm raged outside, there was a knock on my door. Max immediately went into guard mode, his growls echoing through the house. I approached the door cautiously, peeping through the peephole. It was one of the officers assigned to patrol my house. I opened the door, relief washing over me, but as I greeted him, I noticed his uniform was drenched, not from the rain, but in blood. Before I could react, he lunged at me, a deranged look in his eyes. We struggled, Max barking and snapping at him. In the chaos, I managed to hit him with a vase, knocking him out. The police arrived shortly after, having received a distress signal from the officer's car. It turned out that Eric had ambushed the officer, taken his uniform, and tried to get to me. He was arrested and sent back to prison, this time with no chance of parole. The ordeal was a stark reminder that the past can come back to haunt you, no matter how far you run. But it also taught me the importance of resilience and the will to fight back. With the support of the community and therapy, I began to rebuild my life, determined not to let fear define me. Today, I'm an advocate for stalking victims, using my experience to raise awareness and help others. The journey has been long and challenging, but I've learned that with determination and the right support, one can overcome even the darkest of shadows. I've always been a creature of habit. My routines were predictable, from my morning coffee run to my evening jogs in the local park. It was this predictability, however, that nearly became my undoing. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the park was bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. The familiar trail, with its canopy of trees and the gentle sound of the nearby stream, was comforting. As I jogged, my earbuds delivered my favorite podcast, creating a bubble of contentment. About 15 minutes into my run, I noticed a man sitting on one of the park benches. He was dressed in conspicuously in jeans and a hoodie, but his intense gaze was fixed on me. I felt a pang of unease but brushed it off, attributing it to an overactive imagination. As I continued my run, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of the leaves, every distant footstep seemed amplified. I decided to cut my run short and head home. As I neared the park's exit, a black sedan pulled up alongside me. The rear window rolled down, and the same man from the bench leaned out. "Hey, I think you dropped this," he said, holding up a pendant that looked eerily similar to the one I always wore. Confused, I slowed down, instinctively reaching for my necklace. To my horror, it was missing. "Oh, thank you," I replied cautiously, reaching out to take it. In a split second, the man lunged at me, trying to pull me into the car. Panic surged through me, and I fought back with all my might, screaming and thrashing. My earbuds were yanked out, and the pendant fell to the ground. Suddenly, a pair of headlights illuminated the scene. Another car had turned into the park's entrance. The man, startled, released his grip on me. Seizing the opportunity, I pushed him away and ran towards the approaching car, waving frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and 2 people jumped out. The man in the sedan, seeing he was outnumbered, quickly drove off. The couple from the car rushed to my aid, their faces etched with concern. Shaken, I recounted the events to them. They immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. I provided a description of the man in the sedan, and they began their search. The following days were a blur of police statements, sleepless nights, and overwhelming anxiety. The thought of how close I had come to being abducted haunted me. My routines, once a source of comfort, now felt like potential pitfalls. A week later, the police made a breakthrough. The black sedan was found abandoned in a nearby town. Inside, they discovered ropes, duct tape, and a collection of women's personal items, including my pendant. The car was registered to a man with a history of stalking and assault. He had been released from prison a few months prior and had seemingly returned to his old habits. With the evidence at hand, the police launched a manhunt. It wasn't long before they apprehended him, hiding out in a motel. The trial was swift, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The ordeal left a lasting impact on me. I became more vigilant, always aware of my surroundings, and never taking my safety for granted. I also became an advocate for personal safety, conducting workshops and seminars to educate others about the importance of being alert and prepared. The experience also taught me the value of community. The couple who had come to my aid, Jake and Mia, became close friends. Together, we founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping survivors of abduction and assault, providing them with the resources and support they need to rebuild their lives. The aftermath of the incident was a transformative period in my life. The city, which had once been a playground of familiar routines, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. Every corner held potential danger, every stranger a potential threat. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the raw edge of fear began to dull, replaced by a newfound determination. Jake, Mia, and I poured our energy into the nonprofit. We named it Safe Steps, symbolizing the journey towards safety and recovery. Our first initiative was to create a community watch program. Volunteers were trained to patrol neighborhoods, especially during the early morning and late evening hours, ensuring that those out for a jog or returning from work felt a little safer. We also collaborated with local schools and colleges, conducting workshops on personal safety. Students were taught basic self-defense techniques and the importance of being aware of their surroundings. These workshops became immensely popular, and soon we were receiving requests from institutions across the state. But perhaps the most impactful initiative was our support group for survivors. Every week, we would gather in a community center, forming a circle of trust and understanding. Here, survivors could share their stories, their fears, and their hopes. Listening to their experiences, I realized I wasn't alone in my trauma. We were a tapestry of resilience, each thread telling a story of survival and hope. One evening, after a particularly emotional support group session, a young woman approached me. Her name was Clara, and she had been attending our sessions for a few weeks. With tears in her eyes, she handed me a small package. Inside was a pendant, identical to the one I had lost. "I wanted you to have this," she whispered. "Your story, your strength, gave me hope. This is a small token of my gratitude." I was moved beyond words. It was moments like these that reaffirmed my belief in the path I had chosen. From a victim, I had become a beacon of hope for others, turning my traumatic experience into a force for positive change. Years passed, and Safe Steps grew from a local initiative to a national movement. We received endorsements from celebrities, partnered with major corporations for funding, and even collaborated with the government on policy changes related to personal safety and victim support. As I sit in my office today, surrounded by awards and accolades, I often find myself reflecting on that fateful evening in the park. It was a moment that could have broken me, but instead, it became the catalyst for a journey of empowerment and advocacy. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, testing our mettle and resolve. But it's in these moments of adversity that we discover our true strength, our purpose, and with the right support and determination, we can turn our darkest hours into our most defining moments. The quaint town of Elmridge was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names, children played freely in the streets, and doors were often left unlocked. It was this sense of security and community that drew me to Elmridge after years of living in the bustling city. I found a charming two-story house on Willow Street, complete with a white picket fence and a sprawling backyard. The previous owners had maintained a beautiful garden, and the large oak tree in the corner provided a canopy of shade. It was idyllic, a place I could finally call home. The first few weeks were filled with the excitement of settling in. I got to know my neighbors, the elderly Mrs. Thompson to my left, who had lived in Elbridge her entire life, and the young Martins family to my right, with their two boisterous kids. One evening, as I was arranging my bedroom, I noticed something odd. The window facing the backyard had a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the glass, forming a circle about the size of a quarter. I dismissed it as wear and tear, making a mental note to get it fixed. A few nights later, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint noise coming from the backyard. It sounded like the soft crunch of leaves. I sat up, straining my ears, but the sound had stopped. Thinking it might be an animal, I went back to sleep. The next morning, as I was watering the plants, I found footprints near my bedroom window. They were fresh, indicating that someone had been there the previous night. A chill ran down my spine. I immediately reported it to the local police. Officer Daniels, a stout man with a kind face, arrived shortly after. He examined the footprints in the scratched window. "It looks like someone's been peeping," he said gravely. "We've had a few similar reports in the area recently. We're doing our best to catch this individual." He advised me to be vigilant, to keep my windows and doors locked, and to report any suspicious activity. The news news was unsettling. The sanctuary I had found in Elbridge felt tainted. That evening, I installed motion sensor lights around the house and set up a security camera facing the backyard. I also informed my neighbors about the incident, urging them to be cautious. Days turned into weeks, and there were no further incidents. The sense of unease gradually faded, replaced by the routines of daily life. But the illusion of safety was shattered one evening. I was in the living room, engrossed in a book, when the motion sensor lights suddenly turned on, and I froze, my heart racing. Grabbing my phone, I accessed the live feed from the security camera. To my horror, I saw a man standing near my bedroom window, his face obscured by a hood. He was holding something small and shiny, which he was using to scratch the window, creating the same circular mark I had noticed earlier. I immediately called the police, keeping an eye on the intruder through the camera feed. He seemed unaware of the lights or the camera, completely engrossed in his active voyeurism. Within minutes, I heard sirens in the distance. The man, hearing them too, began to panic. He looked around frantically, finally noticing the camera. Our eyes met through the lens, and for a brief moment, I saw a look of sheer terror on his face. He bolted just as Officer Daniels and his team arrived. They gave chase, and after a brief pursuit, the man was apprehended. He was identified as Tom Mitchell, a resident of Elmridge with a history of voyeuristic behavior. The small shiny object he used to scratch windows was a ring, a twisted trophy of his escapades. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the community. People were horrified that one of their own could commit such acts. The scratched windows, his signature, were found in several homes, revealing the extent of his voyeurism. In the aftermath, the community came together, holding meetings to discuss safety measures and offering support to those affected. I, too, became an active participant, sharing my experience and advocating for increased vigilance. The weeks following Tom Mitchell's arrest were a mix of relief and introspection for the Elbridge community. The town meetings became more frequent, evolving from discussions about safety to broader topics like mental health and community support. It was clear that while Tom's actions were inexcusable, there was a collective desire to understand the underlying causes and prevent such incidents in the future. Mrs. Thompson, who had lived in Elbridge her entire life, shared stories of a younger Tom, a boy who had faced challenges from a young age. Abandoned by his parents, he had grown up in foster care, often feeling isolated and misunderstood. While this didn't excuse his actions, it painted a picture of a troubled individual who had slipped through the cracks. Inspired by these discussions, the Martins family took the initiative to start a community outreach program. Their aim was to identify and support individuals in Elmridge who were struggling, whether it be with mental health issues, financial difficulties, or feelings of isolation. I joined the program, seeing it as an opportunity to turn a negative experience into positive action. Our first project was to set up a community center, a space where residents could come together for various activities, workshops, and support groups. We organized fundraisers, and the response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life contributed, from teenagers hosting bake sales to local businesses donating supplies. The Elmridge Community Center, as it came to be known, quickly became the heart of the town. We offered after-school programs for kids, counseling services, job training workshops, and even art and music classes. It was a place of healing, learning, and connection. One of the most impactful programs was the Mentorship Initiative. Adults in the community volunteered to mentor young individuals, providing guidance, support, and a listening ear. The idea was to ensure that no one felt alone or unsupported, as Tom had. As months turned into years, the ripple effects of the community center became evident. Elmridge saw a decrease in crime rates, an increase in school performance, and most importantly, a stronger sense of community. Neighbors looked out for each other, and the bonds formed in the center spilled out into the streets, parks, and homes. On a personal level, the experience was transformative. The trauma of that night with the peeping Tom had left scars, but working with the community, channeling my energy into positive change, was therapeutic. I formed deep friendships, especially with Mia from the Martins family. Together, we spearheaded many of the center's initiatives, drawing strength from each other. One evening, as we were wrapping up a workshop at the center, Mia handed me a letter. It was from Tom Mitchell. With trepidation, I opened it. The letter was a heartfelt apology, expressing remorse for his actions and gratitude for the changes the community had implemented. He wrote of his time in therapy, the revelations he had about his behavior, and his hope for a second chance. While the letter didn't erase the past, it was a testament to the power of community intervention and support. Elmridge had turned a dark chapter into a story of hope, resilience, and collective growth. Today, as I walk the streets of Elmridge, I'm filled with pride. The town, with its vibrant community center, active outreach programs, and tight-knit residents, stands as a beacon of what's possible when people come together in the face of adversity. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a glimmer of hope waiting to be ignited. It was a typical Thursday evening. I had just returned from a long day at work, and the only thing on my mind was to kick back, watch some TV, and maybe indulge in a glass of wine. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building, and while it wasn't the most modern or luxurious, it was home. The creaky wooden floors and the old-fashioned radiators added a certain charm that I had grown fond of. I settled into my couch, remote in hand, when I heard a faint noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like footsteps, but I brushed it off as one of my neighbors. The walls were thin, and I had grown accustomed to hearing the occasional noise from the hallway or the apartment next door. A few minutes passed, and I heard the noise again. This time, it was closer, almost right outside my door. I muted the TV and listened intently. The footsteps were soft, deliberate, and eerily quiet. It was as if someone was trying their best not to make a sound. My heart began to race. I lived alone, and the thought of an intruder was terrifying. I tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was dimly lit, but I could make out the silhouette of a man standing just a few feet away from my door. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie and a mask. He seemed to be listening, waiting for something. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me. Suddenly, he began to fiddle with the doorknob. Panic surged through me. I hadn't locked the door when I came in. I quickly turned the lock, but it was too late. The door creaked open slightly, and the man's eyes met mine. For a split second, we both froze. Then, without a word, he pushed the door with force. I stumbled back, trying to find something to defend myself with. The intruder was now inside my apartment, his eyes scanning the room. I grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it at him. It missed, shattering against the wall, but it bought me a few precious seconds to run to my bedroom and lock the door. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto it. The operator picked up, and I whispered my address and the situation. She assured me that the police were on their way and told me to stay on the line. The intruder was now banging on my bedroom door, shouting threats. I could hear the wood splintering, and I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I quickly opened my window, which led to the fire escape. Without a second thought, I climbed out, praying he wouldn't follow. I made my way down the metal stairs as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the ground, I ran to the street, looking for help. A few neighbors had come out, drawn by the commotion. They took me in, offering comfort and support. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the building and found the intruder hiding in the basement. It turned out he had been responsible for a string of burglaries in the area. He had been watching me for days, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. I was shaken, but grateful to be alive. The experience was a stark reminder of the importance of always being vigilant and taking precautions to ensure one's safety. I now double-check my locks every night and have installed a security system. I also joined a neighborhood watch group, determined to prevent others from going through what I did. The weeks that followed were a blur of police statements, court appearances, and sleepless nights. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window sent my heart racing. I had nightmares of the intruder, his masked face looming over me, his cold eyes filled with malice. My friends and family were incredibly supportive. They offered to stay with me, to keep me company during the long nights, but I declined. I needed to face my fears head on, to reclaim my space and my sense of security. One evening, as I was returning from work, I noticed a note slipped under my door. It was from Mrs. Henderson, the elderly lady who lived in the apartment below mine. She had written, "Dear, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. If you ever need someone to talk to, or just a cup of tea, my door is always open." Touched by her kindness, I decided to take her up on her offer. Over cups of chamomile tea, Mrs. Henderson shared her own story. Years ago, she had been the victim of a home invasion. She spoke of the trauma, the fear, and the long journey to healing, but she also spoke of resilience, of the strength she discovered within herself, and of the community that rallied around her. Our conversations became a regular occurrence. We'd sit in her cozy living room, surrounded by photos of her grandchildren and mementos from her travels, and talk for hours. She became a source of comfort and wisdom, a beacon of hope in my darkest moments. One day, she handed me a small pendant. It was a delicate silver locket with an intricate floral design. "This was my mother's," she said. "She gave it to me after the incident as a reminder that I was never alone. I want you to have it." I was moved to tears. The locket became a symbol of my journey, a reminder of the strength I had found within myself and the support I had received from those around me. As the months went by, I began to heal. The nightmares became less frequent, the fear less paralyzing. I started attending therapy, where I learned coping mechanisms and strategies to deal with my trauma. I also became more involved in the community, volunteering at a local shelter and joining self-defense classes. The intruder's trial came to an end, and he was sentenced to several years in prison. While it brought some closure, I knew that true healing would come from within. I had to let go of the past, to move forward and rebuild my life. Today, I'm a stronger, more resilient person. I've learned the importance of community, of looking out for one another, and of never taking our safety safety for granted. I've also learned that even in our darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of hope, a hand reaching out to help us through. And every day, as I wear the silver locket around my neck, I'm reminded of the journey I've been on and the incredible people who have stood by my side. I've always been an avid hiker. The feeling of being surrounded by nature, the chirping of birds, and the rustling of leaves underfoot is therapeutic for me. I've hiked countless trails, from the well-trodden paths of national parks to the lesser-known local trails. But there's one hike I'll never forget, and it's not because of the beauty of the trail. It was a warm summer evening, and I decided to take a hike in a forested area about an hour's drive from my home. I had been to this forest a few times before, but I always stuck to the main trail. This time, I wanted to explore a bit, so I decided to venture off the beaten path. About an hour into my hike, I stumbled upon a clearing. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over everything. I decided to take a break and enjoy the view. As I was sitting there, I heard faint voices in the distance. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the sound. The voices grew louder as I approached, and I soon realized they were chanting. I treaded carefully, making sure not to make any noise. As I got closer, I saw a group of about 20 people, all dressed in long, dark robes, standing in a circle around a large bonfire. They were chanting in a language I couldn't recognize. I hid behind a tree, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The group seemed to be performing some sort of ritual. In the center of the circle, there was a large wooden statue, crudely carved to resemble a humanoid figure. The statue was surrounded by various objects, including animal skulls, candles, and what looked like bowls of liquid. Suddenly, one of the robed figures stepped forward, holding a live chicken by its legs. The chanting grew louder and more intense. The figure raised the chicken above his head and then swiftly brought it down, cutting its throat with a sharp knife. The blood was collected in one of the bowls. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had seen enough. I slowly began to retreat, making sure not to alert the group to my presence. But as I was backing away, I stepped on a twig, which snapped loudly under my weight. The chanting stopped abruptly. All eyes turned in my direction. My heart raced as I realized I had been spotted. Without thinking, I turned and ran as fast as I could, not looking back. The forest was dark now, and I could hear the group chasing after me. Their chants had turned into angry shouts. I ran blindly, tripping over roots and branches, but the adrenaline kept me going. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the main trail. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I started the car and sped away, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. When I finally reached home, I locked all the doors and windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't sleep that night or the next. The following day, I reported the incident to the local police. They searched the forest but found no trace of the group or their ritual site. They told me it was probably just a group of kids playing a prank, but I knew what I saw was real. A few weeks after the incident, I tried to put the whole thing behind me. I focused on work, spent time with friends, and even took up a new hobby, pottery. Anything to distract myself from the haunting memories of that evening in the forest. But the universe had other plans. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I returned home to find a small package on my doorstep. There was no return address, just my name written in a hurried scrawl. Curiosity piqued, I opened it. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden figurine. It bore an uncanny resemblance to the larger statue I had seen in the forest clearing. My heart raced as I turned the figurine over in my hands. Tied around its neck was a note that read, "We know where you live." Panic sudden, I immediately called the police, who took the package for examination. They advised me to stay somewhere else for a few days, just to be safe. I decided to stay with my sister, who lived in a neighboring town. The next few days were a blur. The police couldn't find any fingerprints on the package or the figurine. They patrolled my neighborhood but found no signs of suspicious activity. They suggested it might be a prank, but I wasn't convinced. One evening, as I was leaving my sister's house to grab some takeout, I noticed a car parked across the street. It was an old, beat-up sedan with tinted windows. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I returned, the car was still there. And the next morning, and the next evening, it was always there, watching. I reported it to the police, who sent a patrol car to check it out. But by the time they arrived, the sedan was gone. This cat and mouse game continued for days. Every time I saw the car and called the police, it would disappear before they arrived. Feeling trapped and paranoid, I decided to confront the situation head on. One night, when I saw the sedan parked across the street, I approached it. As I got closer, the car's engine roared to life, and it sped away, but not before I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man in a dark robe. I was now certain that the group from the forest was stalking me. But why? What do they want? Desperate for answers, I decided to hire a private investigator. After explaining everything to him, he agreed to look into it. He started by digging into local legends and folklore. What he found was chilling. The forest, it turned out, had a dark history. There were tales of a secret cult that had operated in the area for centuries. They were rumored to perform rituals and sacrifices in the forest, especially during the summer solstice. The wooden statue I had seen was a representation of their deity, a forest spirit that they believed granted them power and immortality. The Pai believed that my accidental discovery of their ritual had put me in grave danger. They saw me as a threat and would stop at nothing to ensure my silence. With this information, the police launched a full-scale investigation. They combed the forest, and after days of searching, they stumbled upon the ritual site. The clearing was empty, but evidence of recent activity was evident. The breakthrough came when a local farmer reported seeing a group of people in dark robes entering an old, abandoned farmhouse on his property. The police raided the farmhouse and found the cult members, including the man I had seen driving the sedan. The group was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including stalking and attempted kidnapping. It turned out they had been planning to make me their next sacrifice. I was finally free from their clutches, but the trauma of the experience will stay with me forever. I moved to a different city, changed my name, and started a new life. The forest, once a place of solace for me, now represents a dark chapter in my life that I hope to never revisit. But one thing is for sure, I'll never venture off the beaten path again. When I first moved into my new apartment, everything seemed perfect. It was a quaint 2-bedroom unit in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The rent was affordable, and the location was close to my workplace. I was thrilled to have found such a gem. The first time I met Mr. Thompson, my next door neighbor, was on a sunny Saturday morning. I was unloading boxes from my car when he approached me with a wide grin. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair and deep-set blue eyes that seemed to always be observing. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Harold Thompson, but you could call me Harry." I shook his hand, introducing myself. He offered to help with the boxes, but I politely declined. There was something about his intense gaze that made me slightly uncomfortable. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new home. I'd occasionally run into Mr. Thompson in the hallway or the parking lot. He was always friendly, often striking up conversations about the weather or local news. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me a bit too closely. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find Mr. Thompson holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. "Just a little welcome gift," he said with a smile. I thanked him, albeit hesitantly, and closed the door. The cookies looked delicious, but I couldn't bring myself to eat them. Instead, I threw them away, feeling a pang of guilt for being so suspicious. A few days later, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. It was from Mr. Thompson, inviting me over for dinner. I pondered the invitation, torn between wanting to be polite and my growing unease. In the end, I decided to decline, citing a prior engagement. That's when things started to get strange. I began to notice Mr. Thompson more frequently. He'd be outside watering his plants when I left for work and would still be there when I returned. He'd often be in the hallway, seemingly waiting for me, and on more than one occasion, I caught him peering into my windows. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the incidents kept piling up. I'd find small gifts outside my door, flowers, chocolates, even a stuffed animal. Each time, there'd be a note from Mr. Thompson. One evening, as I was watching TV, I heard a noise coming from my balcony. I cautiously approached the sliding door and peered outside. To my horror, I saw Mr. Thompson standing there, trying to pick the lock. I immediately called the police. They arrived within minutes, arresting Mr. Thompson. As they led him away in handcuffs, he kept shouting, "I just wanted to be friends." The next day, I spoke to the building's property manager. She looked visibly shaken as she told me about Mr. Thompson's history. He had previously been institutionalized for stalking and had a restraining order against him from a former neighbor. She apologized profusely for not informing me earlier. I was in shock. I had unknowingly been living next to a psychopath. I immediately began looking for a new place to live, eager to put this nightmare behind me. A few weeks later, as I was packing up my belongings, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Mr. Thompson, written from jail. In it, he professed his love for me and vowed to wait for me, no matter how long it took. I was terrified. I moved out the next day, leaving no forwarding address. I also changed my phone number and deleted all my social media accounts. Months turned into years, and the memory of Mr. Thompson began to fade. I had built a new life for myself in a bustling city, far away from the quiet suburban neighborhood where I had once lived. My new apartment was on the 15th floor of a high-rise building, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The added security measures, like the 24-hour concierge and CCTV cameras, gave me a sense of safety I hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to unwind at a local wine bar. As I sipped on my glass of Chardonnay, I noticed a man sitting at the other farther end of the bar, staring intently at me. He was older, with a familiar set of deep-set blue eyes. My heart raced as I realized it was Mr. Thompson. Panicking, I quickly paid my bill and left the bar. I hailed a cab and instructed the driver to take a roundabout route to my apartment, hoping to lose any potential tail. Once home, I double-checked all the locks and drew the curtains. The next morning, I contacted the police and informed them of the sighting. They assured me they would look into it, but without any concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Days turned into weeks, and there were no further sightings of Mr. Thompson. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the trauma of the past had made me see things that weren't there. But one evening, as I was returning home from work, I found a familiar-looking note slipped under my apartment door. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. They read, "Distance can't keep us apart. I've missed you." I was paralyzed with fear. How had he found me? And how had he managed to get past the building's security? I immediately contacted the building management and the police. They reviewed the CCTV footage and, to my horror, found multiple instances of Mr. Thompson loitering in the building's lobby. He had somehow managed to bypass security by posing as a maintenance worker. The police launched a manhunt, but Mr. Thompson was nowhere to be found. They stationed an officer outside my apartment and advised me to stay vigilant. Despite the added security, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every shadow sent me into a panic. Sleep became a distant memory. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a soft tapping on my window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I mustered the courage to peek through the curtains and came face to face with Mr. Thompson, who was dangling from a rope outside my 15th floor apartment. I screamed, alerting the police officers stationed outside my door. Within seconds, they had apprehended Mr. Thompson. It turned out he had been living in the building's basement, plotting his next move. Mr. Thompson was charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and attempted kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The ordeal left me traumatized. I sought therapy and slowly began to rebuild my life. I moved to a different country, started a new job, and even adopted a dog for companionship and protection. Today, I'm in a much better place, both mentally and emotionally. But the scars of the past will always remain. I've learned the hard way that monsters aren't just in stories, they can be right next door. The city had always been my sanctuary. The hustle and bustle, the lights, the sounds, it all felt alive and comforting. But that perception changed one fateful night. I had been out with friends at a local pub. We laughed, shared stories, and lost track of time. Before I knew it, it was past midnight. My friends, who lived in the opposite direction, offered to share a cab, but I declined. My apartment was only a 20-minute walk away, and I had made the journey countless times. Besides, the night was clear, and the streets were illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. The first 10 minutes of my walk were uneventful. The city's sounds began to fade, replaced by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional hoot of an owl. I was lost in thought, replaying the evening's events in my mind, when I noticed a figure about half a block behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was a city after all, and people were always out and about. But as I continued walking, I realized the figure was matching my pace. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, the distance between us remained the same. A knot of unease formed in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I decided to test my theory. I quickened my pace, and sure enough, the figure did the same. I then took a sudden turn down a side street, and after a few moments, the figure appeared, still tailing me. Panic sudden, I pulled out my phone, ready to dial the police, but to my horror, the battery was dead. I cursed myself for not charging it earlier. I knew I had to lose this person, so I decided to take a detour through a nearby park. It was a risk, given the park's reputation for being a hotspot for unsavory activities at night. But I was desperate. As I entered the park, the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves underfoot. The path was dimly lit, with shadows dancing eerily in the moonlight. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, hoping to put some distance between me and my pursuer. But as I neared the park's exit, I heard footsteps closing in. They were fast and deliberate. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the stillness of the night. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. I screamed, ready to fight for my life, but the grip on my arm tightened. "Hey, wait," a voice called out. I turned to face my pursuer, and to my surprise, it was a woman, probably in her early 30s. She looked as scared as I felt. "I'm so sorry," she panted, catching her breath. "I didn't mean to scare you. I saw that man following you, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." Confused, I asked, "What man?" She pointed to the park's entrance, where a tall, shadowy figure stood, watching us. The woman explained that she had been leaving a late-night shift at a nearby convenience store when she noticed the man trailing me. me. Concerned for my safety, she decided to follow and intervene if necessary. We quickly exited the park, sticking together as we made our way to the main road. The man didn't follow, but we weren't taking any chances. The woman, whose name was Lisa, offered to walk me home, and I gratefully accepted. As we approached my apartment, I thanked Lisa for her kindness and bravery. We exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch. She insisted on waiting until I was safely inside before leaving. That night, I lay in bed, shaken by the evening's events. The city that had once felt so familiar now seemed fraught with danger, but in the midst of that fear, I found solace in the kindness of a stranger. Lisa and I became fast friends, bonding over our shared experience. We often joked that it was the universe's way of bringing us together, but in all seriousness, I'll forever be grateful to her. She reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there's always a glimmer of hope. In the days that followed, I took extra precautions. I invested in a portable phone charger, started attending self-defense classes, and made it a point to never walk home alone late at night. The incident had been a wake-up call, and I was determined to be better prepared. Lisa and I grew closer, often meeting up for coffee or a movie. We became each other's confidantes, sharing stories of our past, our dreams for the future, and everything in between. It was refreshing to have someone who understood the trauma I had experienced and who had been there to help me through it. One evening, as we were leaving a local cafe, Lisa's face turned pale. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "It's him," she whispered, nodding subtly towards a man sitting a few tables away. He was engrossed in a newspaper, but there was no mistaking him. It was the man from that night. We quickly left the cafe, trying to remain calm. Once we were a safe distance away, Lisa revealed a chilling detail. She had seen the man several times since our encounter in the park, always lurking in the shadows, watching from a distance. She had even received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, with nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. We decided to go to the police. They took our statements and promised to investigate. A few days later, they called us in for an update. The man, whose name was Robert, had a history of stalking and had served time in prison for similar offenses. He had been released on parole a few months before our encounter. The police issued a restraining order against Robert and warned him to stay away from both of us. But the damage had been done. The feeling of being constantly watched, of never truly being safe, weighed heavily on us. Lisa and I leaned on each other for support. We installed security cameras in our homes, joined a support group for stalking victims, and even started a neighborhood watch program. We were determined to reclaim our sense of security and help others do the same. As the months went by, there were no further incidents. Robert seemed to have gotten the message and disappeared from our lives. While the experience had changed us, we became more vigilant, more aware of our surroundings, and more appreciative of the simple joys of life. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset, Lisa turned to me with tears in her eyes. "You know," she said, "as terrifying as that night was, I'm grateful for it. It brought us together and showed us how strong we truly are." I nodded in agreement, squeezing her hand. We've been through hell and back, but we came out stronger on the other side, and for that, I'm forever grateful. We sat in silence, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to purple. The city lights twinkled below, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. It was a cold winter night, and I had just finished a late shift at the office. Exhausted and eager to get home, I decided to hail a taxi instead of waiting for the bus. Within minutes, a yellow cab pulled up, and I climbed into the back seat. The driver, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a scruffy beard, gave me a curt nod as I told him my address. He didn't say much, which was fine by me. I was too tired for small talk. As we drove, I noticed that he kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror. At first, I brushed it off, thinking he was just checking on his passenger, but as the journey continued, his stares became more prolonged and intense. Feeling uneasy, I decided to make small talk to break the tension. "Busy night?" I asked. He grunted in response, his eyes never leaving the road. "Not really. You're my last fare for the night." I nodded, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, he was just a taxi driver doing his job. But as we continued driving, I realized we were heading in the wrong direction. My apartment was in the north end of the city, but we were heading south. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you're going the wrong way." He didn't respond. Instead, he locked the car doors and increased his speed. Panic set in. I fumbled for my phone, but before I could dial 911, he reached back and snatched it from my hand. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Just taking a little detour." I racked my brain, trying to think of a way out. The windows were locked, and the doors wouldn't budge. I was trapped. As we drove further away from the city, the surroundings became more desolate desolate. We were now on a deserted country road, surrounded by thick woods on either side. Suddenly, the car came to a screeching halt. The driver turned to face me, his eyes cold and emotionless. "Get out," he ordered. I hesitated, fear gripping me. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. I said, "Get out." With no other option, I complied. The cold air hit me as I stepped out of the car, my breath visible in the freezing night. The driver got out as well, the knife still in his hand. He approached me slowly, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "You know," he said, "I've been driving this cab for years, and every once in a while, I like to have a little fun." I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "Please, just let me go," I begged. He laughed, the sound echoing through the silent woods. "Not tonight." Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance. Another car was approaching. The driver hesitated, glancing between me and the oncoming vehicle. Seizing the opportunity, I made a run for it. I spurted into the woods, the driver's shouts echoing behind me. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just ran, my only thought to get as far away as possible. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a house. I banged on the door, pleading for help. An elderly couple answered, their faces filled with concern. I quickly explained what had happened, and they immediately called the police. The officers arrived within minutes, taking my statement and launching a search for the taxi driver, but he was nowhere to be found. The only trace of him was his abandoned cab, parked on the side of the road. The police later informed me that the taxi was stolen, and the driver had a long history of criminal activity, including assault and robbery. They believed he had targeted me for a potential robbery, but his intentions had changed when he realized I was alone. I was shaken by the ordeal but grateful to be alive. The elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. O'Brien, kindly offered to let me stay with them for the night, and I gratefully accepted. The next day, I returned to the city, determined to put the traumatic experience behind me. But the memory of that night haunted me. I became wary of taxis, opting to walk or use public transport instead. Months went by, and the police were unable to locate the driver. I began to lose hope that he would ever be brought to justice. But then, one day, I received a call from Detective Martinez, the lead investigator on my case. "We got him," he said, his voice filled with relief. "He was picked up in a neighboring state for a different crime, but we were able to link him to your case through fingerprints found in the stolen taxi." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Justice had finally been served. The aftermath of that night changed my life in more ways than I could have imagined. The trauma lingered, manifesting in nightmares and a constant state of alertness. I sought therapy, which helped me process the events and rebuild my sense of security. One day, while attending a group therapy session for trauma survivors, I met Anna. She had been through a similar ordeal, having narrowly escaped an attempted kidnapping. We bonded over our shared experiences and soon became close friends. Anna introduced me to a non-profit organization she had started aimed at helping women learn self-defense and personal safety techniques. She believed that empowerment was the key to overcoming trauma. Inspired by her passion and determination, I joined her mission. Together, we organized workshops and seminars teaching women how to protect themselves and be more aware of their surroundings. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of women attended our sessions, eager to learn and share their own stories. As the months went by, our organization grew. We received funding from local businesses and even partnered with the police department to offer advanced self-defense training. The community rallied around us, and we became a beacon of hope for many. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop, Anna and I sat down for a cup of coffee. We reflected on our journey and how far we had come. "You know," Anna said, "sometimes I think that everything happens for a reason. As terrible as our experiences were, they led us to this moment, to this mission." I nodded in agreement. It's amazing how something so traumatic can lead to something so positive. We've turned our pain into power. Anna smiled, and we're just getting started. Over the next few years, our organization expanded beyond our city. We opened branches in other states, reaching thousands of women and making a real difference in their lives. But despite our success, I never forgot that fateful night. It served as a constant reminder of why our work was so important. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the taxi driver, written from prison. In it, he expressed remorse for his actions and claimed to have found redemption behind bars. He thanked me for the work I was doing and hoped that it would prevent others from going down the same dark path he had. I read the letter with mixed emotions. While I appreciated his attempt at making amends, I couldn't forget the terror he had inflicted upon me. But I also realized that people could change, and perhaps he truly had turned his life around. I decided to respond, thanking him for his letter and expressing hope that he would use his time in prison to reflect on his actions and make amends. As the years went by, I continued my work with the organization, always striving to make a difference. And while the memories of that night still haunted me, I took solace in the knowledge that I was helping others and turning a negative experience into a positive force for change. The city's subway system had always been a marvel to me. The intertwining tunnels, the rhythmic clatter of the trains, and the diverse sea of commuters, it was like a pulsating vein of the metropolis. But one late night, my perception of the subway shifted from wonder to wariness. I had been working late at the office, trying to meet a deadline. By the time I packed up, it was well past midnight. The streets were deserted, with only the occasional car passing by. I decided to take the subway home, as I had done countless times before. The station was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the platform. I could hear the distant hum of a train approaching. I waited alone, lost in thought, until the train pulled up with a screech. The carriage was almost empty, save for a few late-night travelers. I took a seat near the door, plugging in my headphones and settling into my music. A few stops later, a man boarded the train. He was tall and lanky, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were tattered, and he carried a large duffel bag. He took the seat across from me, and I couldn't help but notice that he was staring intently in my direction. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but as the journey continued, his gaze never wavered. Every time I looked up, our eyes would meet, and he'd offer a chilling, toothless grin. Feeling uneasy, I decided to move to another carriage at the next stop. As the doors opened, I quickly made my exit, slipping into the adjacent car. I took a seat near the back, hoping the man wouldn't follow, but to my horror, as the train pulled away from the station, I saw him enter the carriage, his eyes scanning the rows of seats until they landed on me. He began to make his way towards me, his steps slow and deliberate. Panic set in. I considered pulling the emergency brake, but I was worried about the consequences. Instead, I decided to get off at the next stop and wait for another train. As the train approached the station, I stood up, ready to make a quick exit. But the man was faster. He blocked the aisle, his duffel bag acting as a barrier. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice raspy and cold. I tried to keep my composure. "Please, just let me go," I pleaded. He chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Not so fast." Suddenly, the train jolted, throwing us off balance. I seized the opportunity, pushing past the man and sprinting towards the door. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran out of the station and into the night, not looking back until I was several blocks away. Out of breath and shaken, I hailed a cab and made my way home. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking every room to ensure I was alone. The next day, I reported the incident to the police. They took my statement and promised to investigate. A few days later, they called me in for an update. The man, whose name was Victor, was a known criminal with a history of assault and robbery. He had recently been released from prison and was believed to be living in the subway tunnels. The duffel bag he carried contained stolen goods from a recent burglary. The police arrested Victor and recovered the stolen items. He was charged with multiple offenses and sent back to prison. I was relieved to know he was off the streets, but the trauma of that night stayed with me. I avoided the subway for months, opting to walk or take cabs instead. Months turned into years, and while the memory of that night never truly faded, I learned to cope and move forward. The city, with its endless possibilities, was still my home, and I wasn't going to let one traumatic event define my experience. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to face my fears head on. I descended into the subway station, the familiar hum of the trains and the chatter of commuters filling the air. My heart raced as I boarded the train, memories of that night flooding back, but I was determined to reclaim this space. The journey was uneventful, and as I exited the station, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had faced my fears and emerged stronger. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Victor, written from prison. In it, he expressed remorse for his actions and claimed to have turned his life around. He wrote about attending therapy and anger management classes and finding solace in religion. He apologized for the pain he had caused and hoped that I could find it in my heart to forgive him. I read the letter with mixed emotions. While I appreciated his attempt at making amends, I couldn't forget the terror he had inflicted upon me, but I also believed in the power of redemption and that people could change. After much contemplation, I decided to visit Victor in prison. I needed closure, and this seemed like the best way to achieve it. The visit was tense, with both of us struggling to find the right words. But as we spoke, I saw glimpses of the changed man he claimed to be. Victor spoke about his troubled past, the choices that led him down a dark path, and his desire to make amends. He expressed gratitude for the second chance he had been given and hoped to use his time at prison to better himself. As I left the prison, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had faced my attacker, heard his side of the story, and found a sense of closure. Over the next few years, Victor and I corresponded regularly. He kept me updated on his progress, and I offered words of encouragement. When he was released on parole, I was one of the first people he reached out to. We met for coffee, and I saw firsthand the changes he had made. He had found a job, reconnected with his family, and was determined to stay on the right path. Today, Victor and I share an unlikely friendship. We both have scars from our past, but we've chosen to move forward and focus on the future. We often speak at schools and community centers, sharing our story and the lessons we've learned. Our hope is to inspire others to believe in the power of redemption and the possibility of change. Life is unpredictable, and we never know where it will take us. But one thing is certain, with resilience, support, and determination, we can overcome even the darkest moments and find our way back to the light. This city had always been my home, a bustling metropolis filled with life and energy, but sometimes the noise and chaos became too much, and I sought solace in the local park. It was a sprawling green space, dotted with ancient trees and serene ponds. By day, it was filled with families and joggers, but by night, it transformed into a quiet oasis. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to take a walk in the park. The sun had set, and the park was bathed in the soft glow of the street lights. The air was cool and crisp, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of crickets. I followed the windy path, losing myself in the beauty of nature. The trees cast long shadows on the ground, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. I felt at peace, the stresses of the day melting away. As I walked deeper into the park, I noticed a figure up ahead. It was a man, standing by the edge of a pond. He was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing. His face was obscured by the shadows, but I could see that he was staring intently at the water. Feeling uneasy, I decided to give him a wide berth. I veered off the path, making my way through the trees. But as I did, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but the feeling of dread only grew stronger. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. They were soft and deliberate, echoing in the stillness of the night. I dared not look back, fearing what I might see. Instead, I broke into a run, my only thought to get out of the park as quickly as possible. The footsteps grew louder, matching my pace. I could hear the man's ragged breathing, a chilly reminder that he was closing in on me. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning and my legs aching. Up ahead, I saw a bridge that led to the park's exit. I sprinted towards it, praying that I would make it in time. But as I reached the bridge, I felt a cold hand grab my wrist, pulling me back. I screamed, struggling to break free. The man's grip was like iron, unyielding and relentless. He pulled me closer, his face inches from mine. His eyes were cold and emotionless, devoid of any humanity. "Where do you think you're going?" he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. I tried to respond, but fear had rendered me speechless. I could only stare into his eyes, praying for a miracle. Suddenly, a bright light shone in the distance. The man turned to look, momentarily distracted. I seized the opportunity, using all my strength to break free. I ran towards the light, not looking back until I was safely out of the park. The light came from a police car, patrolling the area. The officers had heard my screams and had come to investigate. They quickly took my statement and launched a search for the man, but he had vanished without a trace. The police informed me that there had been several reports of a man stalking women in the park. They believed he was a serial predator preying on lone women. They advised me to avoid the park at night and to always be aware of my surroundings. I was shaken by the ordeal, and it took me a long time to come to terms with what had happened. I sought therapy, which helped me process the trauma and rebuild my sense of security. I also joined a self-defense class, determined to never feel helpless again. Months after the incident, the park became a focal point for community action. News of my encounter spread, and soon, other women came forward with similar stories of being followed or approached by a mysterious man during their evening walks. The community rallied together, demanding increased security measures and better lighting in the park. Local businesses and residents raised funds to install surveillance cameras at key points throughout the park. The city council also increased police patrols during the evening hours. A neighborhood watch group was formed, with volunteers patrolling the park in shifts, ensuring that no one was ever truly alone. One evening, as I was attending a community meeting about the park's safety initiatives, a woman named Maya approached me. She was in her early 30s, with a determined look in her eyes. She revealed that she too had had a close encounter with the mysterious man, but had managed to fend him off using self-defense techniques she had learned. Inspired by our shared experiences, Maya and I decided to start a self-defense workshop for women in the community. We partnered with local martial arts instructors and organized weekly sessions in the park. The response was overwhelming. Women of all ages attended, eager to learn how to protect themselves and reclaim their sense of security. As the weeks went by, the park began to transform. The once eerie silence of the night was replaced by the sounds of laughter and camaraderie. Women jogged, practiced yoga, and even organized nighttime picnics, refusing to let fear dictate their lives. The police continued their investigation, and with the help of the newly installed cameras, they were able to identify the mysterious man. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of stalking and attempted assault. It turned out he had a history of violent behavior and had been released from prison just months before our encounters. The news of his arrest brought a collective sigh of relief to the community. The park, once a place of fear, had become a symbol of resilience and unity. Maya and I continued our self-defense workshops, expanding them to other parts of the city. We also started a non-profit organization dedicated to empowering women and promoting safety in public spaces. Today, the park is a testament to the power of community action. Families picnic under the trees, children play on the swings, and couples stroll hand in hand, enjoying the beauty of nature. The memories of that fateful night still linger, but they are overshadowed by the positive change that emerged from it. As for me, I've learned the importance of trusting my instincts and being prepared. I still visit the park, but now I do so with confidence, knowing that I have the skills and the support of my community to keep me safe. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the vast expanse of the countryside. It was late, and the only illumination came from the dim glow of my car's headlights and the occasional passing vehicle. The radio played softly in the background, a soothing melody that contrasted with the monotonous drone of the engine. I was returning from a business trip, eager to get home and crawl into bed. The journey had been long, and fatigue was beginning to set in. My eyelids grew heavy, and I struggled to maintain focus. Suddenly, in my rearview mirror, I noticed a set of flashing blue and red lights. My heart sank. I hadn't been speeding, or at least I didn't think I had. I glanced at the speedometer, confirming that I was within the limit. Still, I knew better than to argue with law enforcement. I pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. The police car, a standard black and white cruiser, parked behind me. I rolled down my window and waited, my hands resting on the steering wheel. A few moments later, a tall figure approached. The man was dressed in a police uniform, complete with a badge and a hat that cast a shadow over his face. He shone a flashlight into my car, the bright beam momentarily blinding me. "Evening," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "License and registration, please." I fumbled in my glove compartment, retrieving the documents and handing them over. The officer examined them closely, his flashlight illuminating the details. "You were driving a bit erratically back there," he commented, his tone accusatory. "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" I shook my head. "No, officer, just tired from a long drive." He seemed to ponder this for a moment, then said, "Step out of the vehicle, please." Confused, I complied. The night air was cool, and I shivered slightly as I stood by the side of the road. The officer circled my car, his flashlight scanning the interior. "Everything okay, officer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for me to follow him to the back of his cruiser. I hesitated, a sense of unease settling in. Something felt off. As I approached the police car, I noticed something odd. There was no license plate, and the cruiser lacked the usual markings of a police vehicle. The windows were tinted, preventing me from seeing inside. The officer opened the back door, revealing a dark interior. "Get in," he ordered. Alarm bells rang in my head. This wasn't standard procedure. Why would he want me to get into the back of his car? "I'd rather not," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Is there a problem?" The officer's demeanor changed instantly. His friendly facade dropped, replaced by a menacing glare. "Get in the car, now," he growled. Fear gripped me. I realized that this man wasn't a real cop. I was in grave danger. Thinking quickly, I reached into my pocket and pressed the panic button on my car keys. The car's alarm blared, its lights flashing wildly. The fake officer was momentarily startled, giving me the split second I needed. I bolted, running as fast as my legs could carry me. I could hear the imposter shouting behind me, his footsteps echoing on the asphalt, but I didn't look back. I ran until I reached a nearby farmhouse, pounding on the door until the startled occupants answered. They quickly let me in, and I explained the situation. They called the real police, who arrived within minutes. The fake cop was nowhere to be found, having fled the scene. The police launched an investigation, and it was discovered that the imposter had been involved in several other incidents, posing as a cop to rob and assault unsuspecting motorists. The cruiser he had been driving was stolen, and the uniform was a convincing replica. In the weeks that followed, my story became a cautionary tale that spread throughout the community. Local news outlets picked up on it, and I was interviewed multiple times, recounting the harrowing experience. While reliving the ordeal was emotionally taxing, I felt it was essential to raise awareness about the dangers of fake officers. The police department, in response to the incident and the growing public concern, initiated a campaign to educate the public on how to identify genuine officers and the correct protocol during traffic stops. They emphasized the importance of looking for authentic badges, proper vehicle markings, and always asking for an officer's identification if something feels off. Community meetings were organized where officers demonstrated the differences between real and fake uniforms, badges, and equipment. They also provided tips on what to do if one suspects they're being pulled over by an imposter, advising to drive to a well-lit, populated area or even the nearest police station and to call 911 to verify the officer's identity. As time went on, the trauma of that night began to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. I became an advocate for personal safety, joining community watch groups and even collaborating with the police department on various initiatives. One evening, as I was leaving a community meeting, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Lisa and thanked me for sharing my story. She revealed that she too had been pulled over by the fake cop but had remembered my advice. She asked for his badge number and called 911, which had caused him to flee. Hearing Lisa's story, I was filled with a mixture of relief and pride. My ordeal had led to positive change, and I was determined to continue my advocacy work. Today, I travel across the country, sharing my story and educating others about the importance of personal safety. While the memory of that night still haunts me, I take solace in the knowledge that my experience has made a difference. The world can be a dangerous place, but with awareness, education, and community support, we can protect ourselves and our loved ones from harm. The open road has always been a source of solace for me. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic beat of tires against asphalt, and the ever-changing scenery provided a therapeutic backdrop for my thoughts. That night, as I drove through the windy roads of rural Montana, the world seemed to melt away, leaving just me, my old Chevy, and the vast expanse of the starlit sky. It was around midnight when I first saw him, a lone figure, standing by the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. He was tall, with shaggy dark hair and a beard, wearing a tattered jacket and carrying a worn-out backpack. Now, I've always considered myself a good judge of character, and I've picked up my fair share of hitchhikers over the years. Most were just folks down on their luck, looking for a ride to the next town. But something about this man gave me pause. Maybe it was the way he stood, slightly hunched, as if carrying an invisible weight. Or perhaps it was the intense, almost desperate look in his eyes as he stared at my approaching car. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. The man approached, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Heading to Whitefish, he asked, his voice rough from the cold. I nodded. Hop in, I replied, unlocking the passenger door. He climbed in, settling into the seat with a sigh of relief. Thanks, he said, extending a gloved hand. Name's Jake. We exchanged pleasantries as I resumed driving. Jake explained that he'd been on the road for days, making his way across the country. He'd run into some bad luck in the last town and was eager to move on. As the miles rolled by, I tried to engage Jake in conversation, hoping to learn more about my mysterious passenger, but he was evasive, giving vague answers and often staring out the window, lost in thought. An uneasy silence settled between us, broken only by the occasional howl of a distant coyote. The road grew darker and more isolated, with dense forests on either side. Suddenly, Jake spoke up. Take the next left, he instructed, pointing to a narrow dirt road that branched off the main highway. I hesitated. That's not the way to Whitefish, I replied, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. Jake's demeanor changed instantly. His friendly facade dropped, replaced by a cold, menacing glare. Just do it, he growled, his voice dripping with malice. Fear gripped me. I realized that I was in grave danger, but I also knew that I couldn't show it. I had to think fast. Alright, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I need to refuel first. There's a gas station a few miles ahead. We can take the detour after that. Jake seemed to ponder this for a moment, then nodded. Fine, he replied, but no tricks. I drove on, my mind racing. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. The gas station was my best chance of escape, but I had to be careful. One wrong move could be fatal. As we approached the gas station, I noticed a police cruiser parked by the pumps. Relief washed over me. This was my chance. I pulled in, parking next to the cruiser. Jake watched me closely, his eyes never leaving mine. Stay here, I instructed, grabbing my wallet. I'll be right back. I entered the store, my heart pounding in my chest. The officer was at the counter, chatting with the cashier. I approached them, trying to appear calm. Excuse me, officer, I began, my voice shaking. I need your help. I quickly explained the situation, glancing out the window to make sure Jake hadn't noticed. The officer's face hardened, and he reached for his radio, calling for backup. They formulated a plan. The officer would approach the car, posing as a friend I'd run into. This would give me the opportunity to get away from Jake and ensure my safety. The plane went off without a hitch. The officer engaged Jake in conversation, allowing me to slip away. Within minutes, backup arrived, and Jake was taken into custody. It was later revealed that Jake was a wanted fugitive, responsible for a string of robberies and assaults across the country. The police believed he was heading to White hagfish to lay low and evade capture. I was shaken by the ordeal but grateful to be alive. The experience served as a stark reminder of the dangers of picking up strangers, no matter how harmless they may seem. Today, I'm more cautious than ever. I still enjoy the open road, but I no longer pick up hitchhikers. The memory of that night will forever be etched in my mind, a chilly reminder of the thin line between trust and danger. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.